Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Broccoli Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Became a Badass Villain? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. The world is a harsh and unforgiving place. The people who inhabit it can be even harsher. To hold dreams in such a world is dangerous. To hold them out in the open infinitely more so. This is a lesson a certain Izuku Midoriya has learned many times from many different types of people. His doctor, kid, you have a second pinky toe joint. It's very unlikely you're ever going to get a quirk. His bullies, the quirkless kid wants to be a hero, what a joke. His childhood friend, listen nerd, I'm the only one from this school who's hero material, you got that. His mother, I'm so sorry sweetie. His idol, no, a quirkless person can't be a hero. That last one hurt the most. Or at least it would when it sunk in. Right now he just felt numb. Today had been a long day for him. First he got pointed out and laughed at by the class. Then his notebook got burned. Then he got attacked by a villain. Then got saved by All Might. Then he found out All Might's secret. And then, last but not least, he had his dreams torn apart in front of his very eyes. All of these had piled on top of one another until Izuku's brain just shut down and led to his current situation. Absent-mindedly drifting along the streets, relying on his feet and muscle memory to take him to his destination, which was still undecided. He couldn't let his mother see him like this, so home was a no-go, but he didn't want to think of somewhere else to go. He didn't want to do much thinking at all right now. The atmosphere wasn't doing his mood any favors either. A cloudy afternoon sky overhanging a dreary street, empty save for the occasional piece of forgotten trash. The only noise to be found was an old crow on a telephone wire, and his own thoughts. Maybe he should have listened to Kachin and just given up already. It would have saved him a lot of trouble. Hell, if he had listened he wouldn't have run into All Might in the first place. Who would have ever thought that would be considered a good thing? The green-haired student was shaken out of his thoughts by the sound of familiar explosions. Those were Kachin's explosions. He had been hit with them too many times to not know what they sounded like. Thankfully, Izuku has had plenty of experience with what to do in these situations. He turned around and started walking in the opposite direction. However, he only made it a few steps before something stopped him. Are those screams? Turning to look did nothing to assuage the pit forming in his gut either. Wisps of black smoke were creeping above the building skyline like dark skeletal fingers. Instinct carried his feet forward before freezing in place. A quirkless person can't be a hero. The words bounced around his head with the weight of a freight train. Later, he told himself as he forced his legs to move, I'll deal with that later. Rain of sins. It took a while for him to get where the explosions were coming from. And the closer he got, the louder the screams and explosions became. It was only when he rounded the last corner did he realize how bad the situation really was. A crowd was surrounding the scene, only held back by a few police and a handful of pro-heroes. Intense flames burned and lapped at the surrounding buildings, and at the center of it all, Kachin, the blonde in question, was in the center of the alleyway, blasting explosions in every direction and at every available opportunity. But that wasn't really anything abnormal. What was out of the ordinary was the giant sludge villain wrapped around said mini pyromaniac. The same villain, Izuku noted with dread, that had attacked him not an hour prior. He escaped. But how? His mind was running overtime trying to think up a solution. All Might had him contained in the bottles. He even showed me. He showed me and then put them in his pocket. His eyes widened in understanding and his stomach tied itself into knots. It's my fault. I grabbed onto his pockets when he jumped. They must have torn open or at least been jostled enough so the bottles fell out. He looked to the people screaming, the fires still billowing smog into the sky, and his friend fighting for his life. This is all my fault. All of this is because of me. It's my fault and I can't avendo nothing toho panio. He clamped down on his thoughts, closed his eyes, and forced himself to take a deep breath. Later, he told himself, I'll think about it later. Right now I need to focus on the situation at hand. He waited a few seconds to calm himself down before opening his eyes and observing the situation again. It's just like every other villain attack you've watched. But you need to get closer if you want to see anything useful, he told himself as he nudged his way through the crowd. He nearly had a heart attack when he saw All Might's deflated form out of the corner of his eye, before passing it off as his already worn-out mind playing tracks on him, pushing the last few people out of the way. He finally got to the front of the crowd. 3 heroes present with Mount Lady on the way. He observed, it's okay Izuku, this is just a standard hostage situation. The pros have trained for this 1,000 times before. Just calm down. Calm down, relax, and watch how they take care of it. Except, as he watched with bated breath, they didn't. Fire is my weakness. I can't get too close. Kamui Woods yelled. You have a water hero with you. Have you never had a campfire? Wet wood doesn't burn. Have him blast you. Then speed forward a branch arm, grab Kachin, and pull him away. Even if you can't get him entirely unstuck, he's aiming the villain. You'll be in the opposite direction he's aiming. The explosions are too intense. I can't reach them. Death Arms chimed in. Pick up one of the many large pieces of rubble surrounding you, use it as a shield to get close, and grab him. If he knows you're there to help, he won't shoot you. How dumb do you think he is? The villain's liquid. My punches wouldn't have any effect. He continued. Excuse me, can you not see correctly? He has eyes, and those are quite obviously not liquid. Or better yet, don't go for the villain, go help Kachin, the hostage who's in danger. I can't get through, the streets are too narrow. Mount Lady proclaimed from the street over. Then shrink down, get over here, and resize. Even if you can't grow, you can still help with the crowd. We could really use some high-powered water right now. Death Arms yelled. I can't, I already have my hands full with these fires. The water hero responded. Those buildings have already been evacuated. And actual firefighters are almost here. You're not even doing anything, because Kachin is the one causing the fires. Every time you put one out, another starts. Save him instead of the empty building. Stop more fires from being started. Then with the help of the fire force put the rest of the fires out. We don't have the right quirks. At least you have quirks. As the aspiring hero watched the scene unfold, he sank to his knees. He's going to die. He's going to die because no one did anything. He's going to die. And it's all my fault. Please, he begged someone, anyone please help. All might help. But as the seconds ticked by, Izuku learned something very important. Something that, looking back, he should have realized in the doctor's office all those years ago. The world doesn't give a fuck about him. It doesn't care if he becomes a hero or jumps off a bridge. It'll just keep spinning as it's always done and will continue to do. Blinking away unshed tears, Izuku forced himself to look back at his friend, fighting for his life because of his mistake. Izuku pushed himself to his feet, caught himself from falling, and moved. Rain of sins. Izuku numbly trudged his way through the alleyway that led to his apartment. It wasn't the stereotypical dark alleyways from movies with drug dealers and gangs. No, these were just normal, well-lit, urban alleyways, and the most dangerous people that prowled them were the occasional elementary school bully. Speaking of bullies, Izuku knew this area like the back of his hand because he had been using it to dodge bullies that tried to chase him after school ended. Oddly enough, these alleys were one of the few places Izuku could honestly say he felt completely safe. Which in and of itself was ironic, considering he had been completely terrified of them when he first got chased into them by bullies back in kindergarten. Half an hour of crying and a friendly stray cat later, younger him had mustered up the courage to find his way out. All might wouldn't be scared was the phrase that he had repeated to himself over and over as he wandered in the vague direction of his home. And when it was all said and done, he had found a direct route from school to his apartment complex that shaved off a good 15 minutes off walking. All Might wouldn't be scared, huh? All Might was the reason he was walking this route right now. It turns out he hadn't hallucinated All Might in the crowd. He had swooped in to save Izuku from the sludge villain after he had rushed in like an idiot. Then immediately after that, he had to sit and be scolded by 4 different pro-heroes for what was best summed up as being an idiot. And, even worse, being a quirkless idiot. All Might had even tried to walk over before he got swarmed by reporters, looking like he really wanted to say something. Izuku already knew what he was going to say though, so he ran away. He ran into the alleys he used to hide, but this time it wasn't from his bullies, it was from the person he looked up to the most. He ran and hid because after everything he had been through that day, he couldn't be sure he could hold himself together. You didn't listen to my advice and put yourself in needless danger. But All Might was too kind to get angry over something like that. No, he wouldn't be angry at him, and that's what made it so much worse. I'm not mad at you. I'm disappointed in myself for my failure to convince you to stay safe. Wiping away tears that threatened to spill, the green-haired boy, sore, beaten, and exhausted, continued to push himself forward. Later, he told himself, I'll deal with it all when I get home. So instead he tried to distract himself with positive thoughts. He had aced that biology pop quiz in second period. He got All Might's autograph and could show it to his mom. In Kachin, Izuku couldn't help the grin that slowly spread across his face. He had done it, he had saved his friend. Even if nothing had gone to plan, he managed to be a real hero. Diku, speak of the devil and he shall appear. Turning around, Izuku came face to face with the exact person he had been thinking about just a second prior. Leaning on the ally wall, panting, out of breath, and looking overall worse for wear stood the one and only Katsuki Bakugo. Kachin, Midoriya smiled as he jogged to his friend, exhaustion forgotten. Can you believe it? I finally was able to be a hero. I was Actua. The loud crack of an explosion rocked the alleyway, jostling Izuku out of his cheerful thoughts. The explosion wasn't aimed at anything, being set involuntarily by an overflow of emotion. A quick glance to Bakugo's hands, clenched so tightly they were turning white with small pops going off around them every few seconds, proved this theory. His expression as he looked up proved it a second time. Blazing red eyes accompanied by a sneer that practically oozed malice did very little to lift Izuku's fast plummeting spirit. You little shit. Most words were spoken. These were spat, and dripping with anger too. How fun. Bakugo pushed himself off the wall and stood to his full height, standing over Izuku as the poor boy tried to make himself as small as humanly possible. Being overly cheerful when Bakugo was angry, by general rule of thumb, was a bad idea. Bakugo was fuming. This whole day had just been one giant clusterfuck. First he bombed a pop quiz, then he found out that Deku of all people was trying to mock him by being the only other person to put UA on his high school recommendation paper. Then he got attacked by a fucking villain of all damn things. Got held hostage, and worst of all was fucking useless the entire time. He had to play fucking damsel in distress and sit there like a fucking sack of potatoes while Deku of all goddamned people saved his ass. And while All Might watched too. But that's not all. No. When he saw him following him, Deku had the fucking audacity to try to run away after all that shit he just pulled. So long story short, Bakugo was pissed. Did you really try to run away from me? Why, I don't. You really think you'd be able to pull that shit, make me look like a damn fool in front of All Might, and then run away from me? And no, that's N and not WH what I. Bullshit. Katsuki's yell was accompanied by a pair of explosions. I can handle my own goddamn problems. If I get myself into a shitty situation, it's my own fucking responsibility to get myself out. But then you came in, made me look like an idiot. And then instead of facing me like a man, you fucking ran. His eyes were practically glowing red in the shadows cast by the setting sun. And no, I wasn't running afar from you. Oh, Bakugo stilled, his eyes narrowing dangerously. Then who? Izuku gulped, his answer feeling pitifully weak even as he said it. All Might. Boom. He fell to the ground. The explosion that rocked the ally, even though it wasn't aimed at him, was powerful enough to have his ears ringing. First you make a fool of me, then you run, and now you're fucking lying to my face. Bakugo was shaking at this point. Who do you think you are? Izuku only had a second to register a pair of hands gripping his collar before he was hauled to his feet. Well, I do don't you want? Answer the goddamn question or I'll blow your head off. I couldn't you just wall watch why you die. I ha had t to d do so something. Izuku stuttered, practically shaking like a leaf. So what? I got myself into that shitty situation. It's my own fucking responsibility to get myself out. And no it was my fault. Cut the bullshit. I don't need your fucking pity. Bakugo pushed Izuku away, the green-eyed boy managing to catch himself before he fell, absent-mindedly. He noted that his shirt's collar was burnt and lightly smoking. Pie pity. Wah no. I was helping you out a friend and in need. For 5-10 seconds, the ally was completely quiet. No yelling, no explosions. Not even any wind, just pure silence. This is such fucking bullshit. The tension that had filled the alley disappeared not with an explosion, but with an exhausted sigh as Bakugo stuffed his hands in his pockets and turned around to walk away. Wah, don't play dumb with me, nerd. Friend, I'm not your friend. You've always looked down on me, ever since we were little. No matter how hard I worked to get to the top, you always acted like I needed help. Always thought I couldn't handle anything by myself. Always mocked me one day I'll be just as strong as you catchin'. You were quirkless, useless in a fight. I was on the top. And after constant practicing, after training till I dropped day in and day out to get to that spot, you, a scrawny nobody who hadn't put a day into training, hadn't gone to the gym even once, acted as though I was still on your level, at the very bottom. And no matter how many times I pushed you down to prove that all my effort had paid off, you continued to come back. I don't want your friendship. I don't want your pity. He paused mid-step and Izuku's hope, formerly smashed, soared, and quit with the catchin' thing. It pisses me off, only to be smashed down once again. And he walked away, just like that. Izuku stood in the alley for a while, just staring off into space, his mind trying to sort through everything. He stood in the alley for a bit longer, then just a bit longer, then a little longer still, until he could form a coherent thought. Later, I'll deal with everything later, when I get home. And so the green-haired hero admirer turned and walked towards his house, the opposite direction of where Bakugo went. Both of the students had been shaken by the conversation. As one-sided as it was, it had been the first real conversation between the two in years. Unfortunately, as bright and flashy as it was, none of the really important things that really needed to be said were spoken of in any detail. And while neither of them knew it yet, that lack of communication in this conversation would come to cause many things to happen later down the line, many regrettable things. And as a pebble kicked off a ledge turned into a landslide, this too was perhaps the most regrettable mistake of all, because it was the only avoidable one. Reign of Sins. A certain deflated #1 hero walked through the streets, his time limit having expired almost an hour ago, and his sense of direction failing him horribly. The kid was standing right in front of me. How did I manage to lose him? He had managed to take about 5 or so steps before he got flocked by reporters, and by the time he got away from them the kid was long gone. The symbol of peace had tried to track after him. He had tracked down many dangerous villains in his time as a hero, What was the difference? The difference was that the child was apparently far more capable than the supposed top villains, having not only spotted the pro, but given him the slip multiple times before finally managing to lose him. After 20 minutes of chasing dead ends, Toshinori had attempted to ask to see if anyone else had seen where the boy ran. Unfortunately, he hadn't taken his appearance into account. A tall, gangly man in his 40s, asking around for the whereabouts of a teenage student who he wasn't related to, didn't know the name of, and who was currently running from him. Not his best moment. He cringed as his phone rang, silently cursing when he saw the time. He had a scheduled meeting half an hour ago, about him teaching at UA, with Principal Nezu, who was currently calling him. He could only sigh as he accepted the call. Even though he was quirkless, the boy had had an incredible drive to be a hero. So strong that, even though he almost certainly wouldn't pass, Toshinori knew he would attempt the UA entrance exam anyway. He would be able to find the boy then, at the exam, and make him his successor. No, a quirkless person can't become a hero. He would attempt anyway. Right. Nana would be so disappointed in him. Rain of sins. Izuku laid in bed, staring at the ceiling. It was well past sunset, but he was still wide awake. He was too busy unpacking the day's events to be tired. But it was just so much. Bombshell after metaphorical bombshell had been dropped on the poor teen, so you had to forgive him for being a bit stressed. Said stress had bled over into other things, like his attitude towards the pros at the rescue scene. His thoughts had been jaded and a bit cold, and while they were all technically right, that didn't mean they were deserved. Or his conversation with Kachin, he stuttered normally. But it wasn't usually that bad. He could barely get out a single word for heaven's sake. And Kachin had. No, he swallowed. Not Kachin. He had made it very clear how much he hated that name. I don't want your friendship. Deep breath, he told himself. Of course he wasn't my friend. The evidence had been there in spades. I had just been too stupid to realize it. He wiped at the tears, born of stress and emotional overflow, that were threatening to stream down his face. He's basically the school celebrity while I'm the bullied loner. It doesn't matter that I have the best scores in our grade. Our teachers still constantly pamper him while making things as hard as possible for me. He has an incredible quirk while I am just a quirkless nobody. His quirk put him on the top of the world since the moment he first got it, while my lack of one. He rolled over, desperately trying to get away from that train of thought, only to find himself face to face with one of his All Might posters. No, a quirkless person can't become a hero. The words echoed around his head with the force of a freight train. And the only thing that came to Izuku's mind was why. Why does everything come back to me being quirkless? A quirkless person isn't favored as much as someone with a powerful quirk. A quirkless person can't be a hero. A quirkless person gets scolded for running to help while Bakugo gets unbridled praise. It all comes back to quirks. Every damn time, everything is about quirks. Quirks run our society. Quirks are, they. Wait, Izuku blinked. What exactly is a quirk? The question, blunt as it was, brought his mind to a screeching halt. Scrambling for an answer to such a simple question, his mind turned to his classes. Quirks are a genetic mutation in the human genome that allow for the use of incredible powers. He muttered to himself. These mutations can be passed down genetically, and first appeared over 200 years ago. The first known case was a light quirk. Simple question, simple answer, straight out of the textbook. Except, that didn't really answer the question, did it? Quirks were a mutation to human DNA, but what type of mutation allows its user to do things like spontaneously grow taller than a building? What about mutation-type quirks? Having a tail or wings might make sense if you stretch science, but how did human DNA suddenly start mimicking lizard DNA so closely as to allow a person to share almost every trait with the animals, all the way down to behavior patterns? Speaking of animals, Principal Nezu of UA was an animal who had a quirk, so quirks weren't just exclusive to humans. Izuku pushed himself to sit upright as his brain tried to comprehend how his simple question had turned into a labyrinth of mysteries. Now that he was thinking about it, every history book he had ever read claimed quirks just appeared one day and became more common as time went on, and left it at that. But why? Every quirk biology book claimed quirks were the ultimate form of evolution, but that didn't make any sense. The theory of natural selection takes place over hundreds of generations, taking millions of years to make any major noticeable difference. Quirks, meanwhile, appeared seemingly overnight. And even if that was the case, how did it explain quirks that were based on human technology? The hero Ingenium was a great example of this. His mutation-type quirk manifested as engines in his elbows. That's mechanical machinery. It doesn't have DNA. Izuku stepped off his bed, made his way over to his school bag, and fumbled around in the dark for a few seconds before he managed to successfully pull out his biology book. He set it on his desk, turned on his table lamp, and started flipping through the pages, hoping to find an explanation to his increasingly complex query. What could possibly cause such an extreme shift almost overnight to not just the human population's DNA, but the animal populations as well? Some claimed that quirks had always been around, saying the witches and their magic that were burned back in medieval times were just people who had quirks, but that explanation fell short too. If they actually did have quirks, they would have been passed on to their children, and what was the possibility that every quirk manifested before 200 years ago was an emitter quirk? Ancient mythical creatures like mermaids and minotaurs maybe could be explained as mutation-type quirks, but again neither of those theories explains the sudden boom in quirks almost 200 years ago. He finally arrived at the section on quirks, only to find a half-page paragraph. That can't be right, he thought while rescanning the page. There has to be more. But there wasn't any more, just the singular paragraph that, after reading through it, barely contained any information at all. Most of it was just the author bragging about his other works. Meanwhile, the actual information provided could be best summed up as quirks appeared, so now we have them. The book was closed with gritted teeth and tossed back in the general vicinity of where his bag was. The aspiring hero turned off his lamp and booted up his computer, the same computer he watched All Might's video on every day as a kid. A quick click in his browser popped up. Decluttered was his first thought upon seeing the multitude of open tabs left over from his previous uses, ranging from online games, hero news boards, and school research assignments. Normally he would be more than capable of sorting through them all, but he was already exhausted from the previous disaster of a day. And now with this rabbit hole of a question eating at his mind, he just really didn't want to spare the mental effort. So with a few more clicks, he had closed all the excess tabs and was on a blank search page. The screen was completely white save for a search bar and the company logo. Just a few keystrokes and he'd be done. Then he could go back to bed. Go to bed and finish thinking about everything that happened. But first he needed an answer. You see, the funny thing about life is that, for all the incredible things that people do, the things that end up changing the world the most are almost always done on complete accident. In his clearing of tabs, the young man who in another life would have become All Might's successor not half a day prior, had closed a tab he first opened nearly over a decade ago, and hadn't closed since. A tab with a very certain video that had inspired him to become a hero all those years ago. A tab that like a door of destiny had been closed to make room for a question. As the clock struck midnight, Izuku took a deep breath and typed out his question. What is a quirk? And outside his window, a butterfly flapped its wings. Kurogiri had been having a good day. He really had. The sun was shining. The next episode of his favorite TV show came out. No fights had broken out in the bar, and he had even gotten an abnormally high tip from one of his regulars. It had just been an all-round good day. So of course it had to go horribly wrong. Let it be known, Kurogiri liked his bar quite a bit. It was his work, his hobby, his passion, and his house all in one, with the first story being the bar, the second being guest rooms, and the third his own private suite. His bar was his own little place in the world, and over time it had become something of a staple in the criminal underworld. It was the place where everyone could come, enjoy a nice drink, play a game of darts, and just relax and unwind, far away from the hardships of life. Mobsters, gangs, murderers, thieves, anyone and everyone was welcome as long as they didn't disturb the peace his bar offered. Not that anyone ever did. His bar was full of the type of people who you really wouldn't want to run into in an alleyway. And these people were more than happy to, let's say escort, any troublemakers away from their leisure spot. So you would think that with a small army of thugs, mercenaries, and killers, no one would be dumb enough to barge in and try to take over his bar. Except, of course, someone was. And even worse than that, they somehow succeeded. The warp quirk user placed the glass he had been polishing back in its freshly cleaned cabinet, and took a glance at the bar's only other current occupant, Tamura Shigaraki. The light blue-haired man had barged into his bar covered in hands, and flanked by 10 black armored men. He had brazenly declared the bar was now under his ownership, and that all the customers needed to get out. What happened next was predictable. Everyone laughed at him, and the biggest guy in the room, a friendly mercenary everyone nicknamed Big Bob, had gotten up to throw him and his lackeys out. They quickly stopped laughing after Tamura turned Bob, the man who had been gushing over how he was going to be an uncle not a minute beforehand, into a pile of dust. That's when it all went to shit. His customers all jumped to their feet and pulled out a myriad of weapons, knives, pistols, crowbars, etc., and rushed to avenge their friend. The armored men pulled out rifles, and Tamura dashed forward. A minute and a half later, and his beloved bar was covered in layers of blood and dust. His customers all either dead or fled. On the bright side of things, 6 of the 10 men Tamura had brought were dead, with another seriously injured. Kurogiri could thank David for that. His very first customer and most active regular had drawn his revolver the moment Tamura opened his mouth, and managed to take 3 of the bodyguards down on top of putting a bullet to Tamura's shoulder before being dusted. After the gruesome spectacle, Tamura had sat down at the bar to nurse his shoulder, close enough to grab the warper if he tried to use his quirk, and the remaining bodyguards had brought in and hooked up what appeared to be a vintage TV. The men had then picked up their fallen comrades and left. Before Kurogiri could say anything, though, the TV flickered on. On the screen, a masked man had appeared. He introduced himself as Tamura's teacher, giving a name to the red-eyed man who had done nothing but glare at the bartender since he sat down. Oh, how Kurogiri was so sorry for Tamura getting shot in the shoulder. It's not like the idiot had decided to take on an entire bar full of pissed-off thugs and mafia members with only 10 men as backup. This teacher had gone on to clarify a few things. He explained that those were his men, that he had a lot more of them, and that Kurogiri was to listen to Tamura's orders from now on. When he had questioned as to why he should listen to the man who had killed his entire customer base not 5 minutes prior, the TV man simply laughed and calmly proceeded to give a very vivid description of what would happen to him if he failed to comply. Now Kurogiri was a reasonable man, and while he could firmly say that he had no qualms with tweaking his daily routine for the foreseeable future in order to not get killed, he was still under the opinion that he should have had at least 5 minutes to gather his thoughts on everything before being hauled off to have his quirk examined by a doctor named Daruma Yujiko. A doctor, mind you, who had lost his license a few years back. After only a few minutes with the man, Kurogiri could honestly say he understood why he had lost it. To put it simply, the doctor was well, he sounded like a mad scientist out of some fantasy book. Your quirk is far too fascinating to not research. The man had explained, if I can find out how it works, it will bring me one step closer to creating the perfect masterpiece for my master. What Kurogiri found the oddest about the man wasn't the way he worshipped his master, but instead his willingness to answer all of Kurogiri's questions. He loved to go on and on about the artwork that his research allowed him to gift his master, and how he hoped to one day create the perfect masterpiece. The doctor had then gone on to inform him that Tamura was the man's successor, and how powerful this all-for-one was in physical strength as well as political influence and sheer cunning. After all the tests were done with and all his questions were answered, the ones he had been willing to ask at least, Kurogiri was allowed to return home. Well, perhaps allowed to go home was too kind of phrasing. One of the doctor's assistants had broken something and Kurogiri had been kicked out so the mad scientist could yell at them. As he walked back to his bar, far too mentally exhausted to use his quirk, he realized something. The doctor, obsessed with his work and slightly off-kilter he may be, was actually the nicest person he had met that day. He hadn't killed his customers, pointed a gun at him, or threatened to string him up by his intestines. If that didn't say how bad his day had been, he didn't know what would. Kurogiri let out a sigh and could only hope that someone out there was having a better day than he was. Reign of sins. Izuku was not having a good day. 3.5 weeks had passed since he first asked his question, and he hadn't found anything. Websites were just as bad as his biology book had been, vague at best and purposely misleading at worst. Social media and hero threads had proved to be even more useless, the results ranging from people brushing his question off and telling him to not worry about it, to openly laughing at him. A week in and he had finally gotten fed up enough to start messaging actual doctors about it. But that plan of action had lost its footing almost as quickly as it had gained it, with most not bothering to respond and the few that actually took him seriously clamming up when they realized he didn't have a quirk. He had emailed college professors, scientists, and head directors of several research labs, his sheer number of emails sent guaranteeing him at least a few replies, only to meet the same result. They didn't take him seriously because he was quirkless. His latest reply from a doctor of St. Luke's International Hospital seemed to sum up all their thought processes. Why bother with wanting to learn about quirks? You don't have one and aren't going to develop one. The only thing I can think of is that you want to see if there's a way to give you one. If this is the case, and I highly suspect it is, then I'm going to have to ask you to stop wasting important people's time with your childish fantasy. Izuku gave out a tired sigh and sunk into his textbook. Finding a way to gain a quirk would be wonderful, it really would. But that wasn't even what he was asking. He just wanted to know what a quirk even was. At this point he would take literally any answer he could find. How hard was it to explain what caused such rapid genetic mutation in the human populace, how it affected animals as well, how it happened everywhere on Earth at the same time, how it incorporated artificial technology into these mutations, how it seemingly fused different species' DNA at random, how it was able to break quantum physics at will, and how it was able to do all of this with a time frame of a week at best and over one night at worst. Okay, so maybe it was a little difficult to explain all that, but explaining how nuclear fission worked was also a little difficult. And that didn't cause people to brush it off and go, oh well. The poor boy, after having realized he wasn't going to get any answers simply by asking around, had decided to start doing his own research. Was it a good idea? Kinda. Pros. He was now much more knowledgeable on the subject of genetics, would probably never have to study for another biology class unless he majored in it, could pick out what type of quirk a person had by looking at a graph of their DNA, and had memorized the entire human evolution chart. Cons. He had now gone 10 days without a full 8 hours of sleep at night. His grades were slipping, and he may or may not have developed a slight fondness for coffee. Results. Lots of cool knowledge, but still no answer. Unfortunately, it was that second one that Izuku really cared about. Now, that's not to say everything had been for nothing. Far from it. He might not have had an answer quite yet, but he was much closer than before. He could feel it. His new knowledge had put him on the right track. And while it wasn't on par with any actual scientists, it was far above anything he was going to learn at his current school. Though he didn't realize exactly how far above the standard curriculum he was until he took a biology test 2 days ago. A 96, the highest grade in the class by an entire letter grade, and when he looked to see what he got wrong, well, on the back there was an 8-point SAQ that asked how quirks were passed down from parents to children. Most of the class had gotten the question right, simply copy and pasting the 2-sentence answer they got in class the day before. Izuku, meanwhile, may or may not have gone a bit overboard. An hour into the test, and his entire page was crammed full of giant paragraphs detailing how different types of quirks pass on differently. Examples of how two parent quirks can fuse to create a child quirk of the two. Quotes from several different studies and scientists. A graph of probability chances, and several of Izuku's own hypotheses on the subject matter, all in tiny handwriting. His teacher had put a big question mark on the page and given him half credit. Izuku shook his head, trying to get his thoughts back on track as well as fight off the drowsiness that had snuck up on him. Coffee was a good substitute for sleep, but it wasn't a perfect replacement, and the teacher's mundane droning wasn't doing him any favors either. His research had given him answers, but not the ones he needed. The two main problems he found in his methodology were his lack of access to any form of information that wasn't either on Wikipedia or a study interview he could find online. And B, how every time he found something that seemed it would lead somewhere, it turned into a dead end. At least until last night. When looking for some more obscure researchers who would be more likely to at least send him a response email, he stumbled upon a scientist who had immediately piqued his interest. He was a well-learned geneticist who had also been through medical school and was a certified doctor. But what really caught Izuku's attention was his work. The man had focused solely on better understanding how quirks worked and how they affected the human genome. Further research revealed that many of the more advanced theories on quirkology were first written by him. Granted, how do quirks work is slightly different from what is a quirk, but hey, it had been almost a month and Izuku was just taking what he could get at this point. Besides, the fact this man was actually looking into the mystery of quirks instead of just brushing it aside, like everyone else, was more than enough for the exhausted teen. But there is a small problem. The short list of information he had on the man was all there was. No date of birth, no pictures, and no records that the man even existed besides the 2 research papers Izuku had found. The fact his name was credited in small text on the newest renditions of quirk theory, and an old news article saying the man had somehow lost his doctor's license. Of course, it hadn't mentioned why he had lost it. No, that would be too helpful. The man was practically a ghost, and as Izuku drifted off to sleep, he was at least able to take satisfaction in one small victory. He at least knew the man's name. Izuku Daruma, the creator of the quirk singularity theory, reign of sins, Bakugo was thinking. Despite what most people assumed from his personality, Bakugo was more than some brainless brute. He might not be the Einstein of his generation, but he was definitely more than a few steps ahead of the extras he was surrounded by in class. He had to be if he wanted to be number one. Brawn without a brain is like a car with no engine, while brain without brawn is like an engine with no car. Neither will move alone. It takes both to get anywhere in life. His mother had told him some variation of that when he failed his first test back when he was very young. But he hadn't listened to her first lecture. 2 weeks later, in another F, she had tweaked it the second time around to the one he remembered today. She made it appeal to his dream of being the best. He knew this, knew she was trying to manipulate him, but even then, it worked. He hadn't failed a single assignment since, and his average for any class never dropped below a B. He was going to be the best. He was going to be number one no matter what it took. Which was why it was always so fucking infuriating that no matter how long he studied or how hard he tried, when the end of the grading period rolled around, he always came second in his grades ranking, right behind Deku, every single goddamn time, which was why he was thinking. He had gotten second place ever since they first started ranking the students, all the way back in the end of elementary. Always fucking second, always behind fucking Deku. It was one of the reasons he hated him so much at times. Deku was smart, really fucking smart, but he didn't try to expand beyond his intelligence. And despite the fact he was an engine with no car, Deku had managed to beat him every semester. It was like a broken record that kept repeating itself over and over. But not this time. When they had gotten the results back this morning, he was on top, not Deku. Normally this would have been a time to celebrate, to rub it in the loser's face that Bakugo was the best. After all of these years he had finally won. Finally proven that he deserved to be number one. But it was all wrong. This wasn't the glorious victory he imagined. This wasn't a triumph. No, this past semester had been his worst semester in years, barely scraping by in history with a B, but that wasn't even the worst part. Deku, the quirkless nerd who he had lost to again and again for years, wasn't in second place, wasn't even in third. Deku was sixth, and so Bakugo was thinking. Deku had started coming to school with bags under his eyes, started missing homework, and started sleeping through classes. Deku was fucking sleeping through class. Something was wrong with the nerd. He was starting to act like an extra, which Bakugo knew he wasn't. He didn't like Deku by any stretch of the imagination, but the wannabe had beaten him. Even if it was only in their grades, that automatically put the nerd above the sea of extras. What would cause the idiot to nosedive so suddenly? It was almost like he wanted Katsuki to beat him. The explosion quirk user pushed his thoughts out of his mind. Just thinking around in circles wouldn't do anything. UAS entrance exam was in 9 months and Bakugo needed to start doubling down on his training. If Deku wanted to become an extra, so be it. Katsuki Bakugo was destined to be number 1. Deku never had any part in that. Reign of Sins. Izuku groggily opened his eyes to find an empty classroom, lit only by the evening sun. No teacher, no students, no Bakugo. A quick glance at his phone informed him that his face hadn't been written on, and that class had ended half an hour ago. Of course they didn't wake me up, was the first thought to run through his mind. I'm just a nobody to them, but I can change that. He mumbled through a yawn. I'll prove I can be just as good of a hero as anyone else. No, you can't be a hero without a quirk. But how could he? How could he even hope to be a hero when the number 1 pro, the man who had inspired him to become a hero in the first place, blatantly told him that he couldn't? How could he help anyone when he couldn't even save his childhood friend from a villain he helped escape? How could he prove to his mother that he could be a hero without her worrying? How could he? His downward spiral was interrupted by his phone buzzing. Later he told himself, one step at a time, I'll find an answer, then I'll think about everything. Just not right now. His mother was messaging him asking him where he was and if he was okay. After school study group, he texted back. It would let her know he wasn't in any danger and get him out of any trouble at the same time. Izuku wasn't a compulsive liar by any means. In fact, the phenomenon was quite rare, but everyone lied every once in a while. Izuku was human, and as such was no exception. But as he started typing his reply, 2 very different phrases echoed through his head. Everyone can be a hero. No, you can't be a hero without a quirk. Liar. I fell asleep in class, just woke up. He typed out instead. The green-haired boy didn't want to think about All Might right now, but one thing was for sure. I'm not lying to anyone like that. A few minutes later, and he was walking to the grocery store to pick up food for dinner tonight. His mom had chewed him out about sleeping in class and tossed on his slipping grades as the metaphorical cherry on top to drive the point home. Halfway through her rant, she stopped herself, told him to go pick up groceries, and said that they would finish their chat when he got home. At first glance, from an outside perspective, it seemed a bit harsh of her. Izuku had been at the very top of his class since elementary school, now one bad semester and she was freaking out. But Izuku knew she wasn't trying to be mean, she was just stressed, and more importantly, she was just worried. Izuku knew from a young age that his mother worried about him, and when he got a bit older he realized how stressed she was. But it wasn't until a few years ago that he realized how bad it really was. When her husband first got sick, she picked up a job to help pay bills. After he died, she had picked up another. When Izuku had come home one day and innocently asked what college was, she picked up 2 more. When Izuku was declared quirkless, she dedicated almost all her free time to being at home for Izuku, pushing away all of her friends and related family to make time for her son, only staying in contact with Bakugo's mom because he was friends with him as a kid. She cooked, cleaned, worked 4 jobs, and desperately tried to pay bills that always seemed just out of budget, often going entire weeks just eating scraps so Izuku could have a full stomach. This transitioned into the stress eating that had destroyed her figure when their budget became more stable. The problem wasn't that she didn't care about Izuku, it was that she cared too much. And now his grades were slipping for the first time in his academic history and she went full mama bear mode, worried something was wrong and angry at herself for not preventing it. A sad smile graced his face. He'd have to calm her down when he got home, maybe even cook dinner for her so she could relax. But that was later. Right now he had to pick up some groceries. Reign of Sins. Kurogiri was not in a good mood. Not only had he lost his bar that morning, but when he got back from the doctor's lab, Tamura had complained about all the blood and dust everywhere and told him to clean all the filth up. Well, excuse him, but that filth was his former customers. It wasn't Kurogiri's fault, they were all dead. No, the blame for that lied on another person's head. The same person, might he add, that was telling him to clean it all up. But that wasn't all. No, Tamura just had to make everything more difficult. When he had gone to simply warp everything away into the ocean, Tamura had flipped out. You can't use your quirk yet. He had yelled, "We're only on the starting level. We need to keep all out secret abilities hidden so the bosses can't prepare for them." A few things. 1. What the fuck? 2. This was Kurogiri's quirk. He was the one to decide how he used it. 3. His quirk was already on the quirk registry. It was registered when he first developed it as a child. So the pros and law enforcement in general already knew about his quirk. It was why he had never used it to steal anything or do anything criminal with it. 4. What the fuck? So now here he was, browsing the cleaning section of the supermarket because the anti-vacuum cleaner decided to put dust everywhere and make him clean it without his quirk. Kurogiri didn't even have any cleaning equipment besides the sanitizer he used for his tables and alcohol glasses. He had always just warped any mess away, but not this time apparently. He had table polish. Did that count? Did Tamura want him to just polish the dust away? That's not how table polish worked. That's not how any of this worked. Kurogiri let out a sad sigh, as he came to terms that the stress from all this may have been impacting him a bit more than he would have preferred. And even if it wasn't, he wasn't usually this negative, but today was proving to be an exception for basically every rule he had. He started counting up how much everything would cost while double-checking his small basket as he turned a corner, only to drop said basket when someone ran straight into him. The bartender just stood there for a few seconds trying to understand what happened, his mental math now floating around his head like a puzzle that had fallen and smashed itself to pieces on the floor. Looking down, he was greeted by a groaning teenager with a mop of green hair spiraled out on the ground. His cleaning supplies were on the floor, mixed with a large array of various ingredients such as carrots and onions. Kurogiri's first instinct was to scold the kid for not looking where he was going. No, he scolded himself. I was the one who turned the corner so suddenly. There's no way he could have seen me coming. No one is at fault here. Just because I've had a shitty day doesn't mean I have to make someone else's day shitty too. Reaching down, he grabbed the boy's phone which had landed next to his foot. He was about to hand it back when something curious caught his eye. On the phone, several news articles were opened. 2 were articles on quirkology, the rest. Kurogiri's eyes narrowed dangerously. Why is he searching for information on Dr. Izuku? It was a very good question. One that required an equally good answer if the kid was to stay out of any trouble. He cast another look at the young man who was picking himself off the ground, this time looking for clues. His eyes caught sight of a book that had fallen from the boy's backpack. Advanced Quirk Theory Vol. 5 by Stephen Joseph. The book read. Now Kurogiri knew something was definitely wrong. That book was far beyond the reading level of just any random student. He hadn't even understood half of what the first volume talked about when he read it a year or two back. And now some middle schooler comes by, just casually reading highly advanced material while searching for information on Dr. Izuku. Something was up, but what could it pos? And then it clicked. Dr. Izuku had spoken at great lengths about his several assistants, and how he hoped they would one day help him create his greatest masterpiece. Now, the doctor was a bit odd at times, but even then, wasn't this kid a bit young to be an assistant? And why was he in the grocery store of all places? You would think an evil genius would have better things for his great assistants to do than run errands. Wait, was the kid lost? The lab was in the middle of nowhere, and the doctor seemed like the type of person who forgot to give out directions every once in a while. Combine that with the fact Izuku had said he had multiple labs around Japan, and often had people move between them, and well, Kurogiri may have had a bad day, but that didn't mean everyone had to. The rain of sins, though, Izuku mumbled as he pushed his way to his feet. He had known running through the store to get home quicker was a bad idea, but he had wanted to get back home to his mom as fast as he could. He had gotten all the ingredients without any problem though, so he figured he could try to multitask, looking up some info while he ran to the checkout line. It obviously hadn't worked. Looking up, he was greeted by a strange sight. A man seemingly made completely of mist was holding Izuku's phone out to him. Thank you, he said as he grabbed his phone from the man. No problem, young man. I'm sorry I caused you to drop your things. Please allow me to help. Sure, he responded, not really sure what else to say. A minute later, and Izuku, with the help of the man, had collected all his stuff and put it neatly back in his basket. Deku was about to thank the man again before he broke the silence. By any chance, would you be looking for Dr. Izuku's lab? Why, I mean absolutely. He hadn't been, but now he knew about it, he most certainly was. The man gave a good-natured chuckle. I thought so. Wait just one moment. He spread out his hand and opened. Wait, was that a portal? Izuku didn't get the chance to observe anything more, because after a second the man pulled out a pen and a small scrap of paper, closing the portal afterwards. He jotted down something on the paper before holding it out. Here, he said, offering it to Izuku. It's where his lab is. I was there earlier today. Looking at the paper revealed an address that Izuku wasn't immediately familiar with. He looked back to the man to thank him for the third time, only to find him walking away. Wait, he called. Why your name? Kurogiri. The man answered as he turned around. Yours? I, Izuku, am Midoriya. Well then, Mr. Midoriya. It was a pleasure meeting you. Have a good day, Kirigiri said with a small bow before turning back around. Izuku stood there, watching the mist man as he walked away, before finally dragging his eyes back down to the small scrap of paper in his hand. A grin spread across his face. I have a lead. The butterfly had flapped its wings, and now the storm was brewing. Izuku was nervous. Okay, maybe that didn't really do the situation justice. Izuku was, and always had been, a tad socially awkward, as well as being an individual who naturally shied away from attention. Unfortunately, it wasn't until he was practically a block away from his destination that he realized how much his plan went directly against both of those things. It sounded fine at the time. He reasoned, just go up, knock on the door, ask if Dr. Yujiko worked there, and if I could talk to him. Yes, walk up to an unknown door, knock, put all attention on him, and ask a complete stranger if they knew if another complete stranger worked at the building, and then ask if he could talk to said stranger. All perfectly normal and easy for someone like Izuku to accomplish, especially at midnight of all times. He was really starting to wish All Might hadn't saved him from the sludge villain. After he got the address from Mr. Kirigiri, Izuku had gone home, gotten scolded by his mother, gotten cried on by his mother, and then made dinner for an 8 with his mother. His original plan had been to get a good night's sleep and then go in the morning, hopefully well rested enough to not make a complete fool of himself. 2.5 hours of tossing and turning in bed, unable to sleep, and he had decided to just get it over with, throwing the address into his phone's map, only realizing what time it was when he did all the other problems with his plan. When he was cold, tired, and less than a block away from his destination, Izuku let out a sigh bordering between exhausted and exasperated. His determined or hero mindset and his normal mindset were very different. Anyone who had seen the two could attest to just how different he acted when he flipped between the two. A bold young man, determined enough to run headfirst into danger with a smile on his face, became a stuttering boy who couldn't so much as talk to a girl without dissolving into an incoherent mess. Needless to say, they didn't always work together the best. His current situation was a fine example of this. Plans made when he was in hero mode didn't tend to work that well after it wore off. Come on, Izuku, you can't give up now. You'll never be a hero if you can't even knock on a door. The quirkless boy steeled his resolve as he turned the corner, preparing to face the place that could very well hold the answer to the question he'd been chasing for over a month now, only to find. Is that an old warehouse? He asked. No one in particular, no. I must have put in the wrong address. It was one of the only logical conclusions his worn-out brain could come to. Why would the scientist who had almost single-handedly created the basis for modern-day quirk theory be working out of an old abandoned concrete hut in the middle of downtown? But as he checked the map, then the address, then pulled out his scrap of paper to double-check, hit his phone a few times, checked the map again, and then re-entered the address in his phone, another logical conclusion came to him. Did Mr. Kirigiri lie to me? He wondered. But no, that didn't make sense either. What would he get from sending Izuku on a wild goose chase for a made-up lab? Plus, he had referred to the man as Dr. Yujiko, not Scientist Yujiko, meaning he had to have some previous knowledge of the doctor, which supported the theory he knew him. You've come too far to chicken out now. Izuku scolded himself as he forced his feet to move towards the door. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? The rain of sins. Daruma Yujiko was an oddity of a man. If you were to ask his assistants or anyone else who worked for him, they wouldn't say anything downright negative about the doctor, but they would definitely make it known that he had his issues, just like everyone else. He was overbearing, constantly checking on the various projects he had given to his employees, and critiquing them as they worked. He liked to micromanage, seemingly determined to have a hand in everything that was going on, all the way down to walking around and testing various appliances to make sure they were working and well-stocked. He was unempathetic at times, uncaring for reasons or excuses for missing deadlines. But one word seemed to come up much more than any other in the hushed conversations in hallways. He was a perfectionist. Now that last one seemed a bit unfair. All the other ones, sure, he could totally agree with, but he wasn't a perfectionist. No, Yujiko knew that not everything could be perfect. In fact, very few things ever could. This was why he put so much time and care and effort into his creations. They were his artwork, they were his children, they were his gifts to his master, and one day he would create his magnum opus, his true masterpiece. There would be no flaws, no errors. It would be what so few things could ever achieve: perfection. However, just because he didn't expect perfection from his assistants, he most certainly expected them to do their jobs right. This lab was supposed to be completely set up and running 3 days ago. Yujiko growled. So can anyone explain to me why the security system hasn't even been started on yet? Well, sir, we were running perfectly on schedule. Even ahead of it, actually, until a few weeks ago. Oh, the doctor paused, turning to the brave worker in a lab coat who had interrupted as he sent a quick glance at his watch. Now 25-minute rant. Well then, why didn't you say so sooner? It's not like that doesn't change the fact you are now behind schedule. He swatted at her with the small stack of papers in his hand, growling when his height caused him to miss her head and lightly whack her shoulder instead. Sir, we can explain. Well then explain. Now, heroes. A woman from the small group of workers he had been scolding for the past half hour stepped forward. He recognized her as the scientist he put in charge of this lab. A string of robberies took place and hero activity skyrocketed. We had to slow down everything to avoid detection. She said with her hands clasped firmly behind her back. It was my order, sir. If you're going to punish someone, then I'm the one at fault. The doctor gnashed his teeth and turned away from the group to find something to punch. The closest potential victim was a cardboard box lying on the ground, which soon became a very dented box after a quick kick to its side. It's always heroes this, heroes that. They don't even know the lab's here, and yet they still seem hell-bent on causing me problems. The short genius grumbled some choice words under his breath before spinning back around to his people, jabbing the lady with his papers. Fine, I'll let it slide. But just this once. The crowd let out a sigh of relief. Now what are you all still doing here? Scram, run, back to your stations. I want this lab up and running by Sunday, no Friday. And if it's not damn sparkling when I come to check on it again, I'll have all of you scrubbing toilets for a year. He yelled as they all ran off with relieved smiles on their faces. With a toothbrush, the doctor took a moment to compose himself, panting slightly from all his yelling. Feeling a hand lightly pat his head, he swatted at the offending appendage with his trusty paper stack. Thank you for your understanding, Dr. Izuku. Uara Ito, the lab's head scientist, said as she calmly walked past him, a friendly smirk on her face. The doctor growled as he attempted to put his hair back in place. Stress and age did terrible things to one's style. I would fire her and her sassy ass attitude if she weren't so damn good at her job. He complained to no one in particular as he watched her walk away. He sighed as he rubbed his temple and ran through everything in his head, trying to figure out how far back this would push his plans, when a light knock echoed from the door. The mad scientist raised his head, about to yell at someone to answer it, before pausing and letting out an annoyed huff when he realized he just sent them all off. I swear to God, Kurajiri, he complained to himself as he marched towards the door. I know I said come back anytime if you need anything, but I figured it was implied that anytime didn't include the middle of the damn night. What do you want now? He yelled as he swung the door open, only to find that's not Kurajiri. His sleep-deprived mind noted it's just a kid. And indeed there was, in fact, just a kid standing at the door. A few moments passed with the two both staring at each other, but just as the green-haired boy worked up the courage to say something, Izuku came to a conclusion. Not my kid, not my problem, he told himself as he shut the door. Wait, he stopped a few paces from the door. There's a kid at the door. He blinked behind his goggles. There's a kid at the door of one of my secret labs. Shit. He made a 180-degree correction to his course and flung the door open. Kid, he yelled at the teen who appeared to have been dejectedly walking away. Get over here. The kid scrambled back towards the door, his face seeming like it couldn't decide if it should smile in joy or cry in terror, or do both at the same time. What the hell are you doing here? The boy tried to respond. He really did, but with the traits of bad at talking to people, bad at talking to strangers, and bad at talking to angry people forming a metaphorical bingo. All that came out was a noise that most closely resembled a porcupine dying in an echo chamber. What? I. Spit it out, boy. I am looking F for D, Dr. Izuku. The scientist's eyes narrowed to a dangerous degree, as his left arm slipped under his lab coat and thumbed the pistol that sat at his side. He was a scientist, a doctor, and his quirk wasn't combat-oriented, but that didn't mean he was defenseless. Any villain dumb enough to not carry any form of protection wouldn't be a villain for very long. You're looking for Daruma Izuku. Why yes, do why you know him? Izuku took a moment to better examine the boy. His green hair was disheveled as if he had just crawled out of bed. He was wearing blue jeans, sneakers, and a white t-shirt with the words t-shirt scribbled on the front. On top of that, he had a jacket haphazardly thrown on to protect him against the night's cold. His jeans had small pockets, too small to be concealing any guns, but still able to fit a pocket knife in each. His shoes, again, too small to carry a gun, but small knives could easily be slipped beneath the soles. No bags that could be explosives, and his shirt lacked any sort of carrying capacity. The most dangerous variables were the boy's jacket, which had big enough pockets to hold a small gun or large knife, and that the kid was scrawny enough to have knives or even a small handgun strapped to his chest, arms, or legs without causing any real displacement of his clothes. There were no signs of a mutation-type quirk, which meant the kid most likely had an emitter or transformation-type quirk. Those were the most annoying because they were the hardest to make educated guesses about from appearances alone. Combat analysis. The kid couldn't be armed with anything more than light weapons, but had an unknown quirk which could prove to be very dangerous. Izuku, on the other hand, had a heavy pistol, a not-set-up security system, a small squad of guards patrolling the building, and a handful of Namu that had been transferred to the lab yesterday. although it would take time for either of the latter groups to get to his location. He brought a hand to his goggles, making a show of adjusting them as if to see the kid better. "He's here alone," the doctor observed as he scanned the courtyard and adjacent abandoned warehouses with the infrared vision he had enabled on his goggles. "He's either really confident in his abilities, or he's an idiot." "Well, of course I know him," he said, deciding to take a risk and gauge his opponent's reaction. "He's me." The kid's eyes grew to the size of saucers and his jaw dropped. Why you're... Yes, I am Dr. Ujiko. Might I ask who you are, and more importantly why you're here? I am my name is Izuku M. Midoriya, and Stop stuttering and spit it out, boy. I need to ask you a question. Oh really? Ujiko leaned forward slightly to disguise the motion of him pulling the gun out of its holster and bringing it up to his chest. And what question would that be? The gun's safety was flicked off with an inaudible click. Because, well, let's just say, I do hope it's a good one. The gun was now aligned with the boy's head, hidden perfectly behind Ujiko's lab coat. A bullet hole in his coat wouldn't be that big of a deal. It could always be replaced. The boy's head, on the other hand. The kid tracked down a disgraced scientist, a man who had his entire presence practically erased from the world. Every book he had ever written, either burned or in his own possession. The internet scrubbed of his existence by All for One's top hackers. A man who only ever left the safety of his labs when traveling between them, and even then only traveling via a Namu with a warp quirk. A man who was one of the very few to work for All for One directly. Learn of his existence, pinpoint where his hidden labs were, pinpoint which one he was at and when he was at it, and then corner him at midnight when no one was around, all to ask a question. It better be a very, very good question. The boy clenched his fists and took a deep breath. The scientist steadied his gun and prepared himself. What is a quirk? Ujiko wasn't drunk enough for this. Did you need a live body for experimentation? No, wait. This lab was to see if there was a way to add quirks to Namu after they were created, not for making the creatures. But she could still use one, right? It didn't really matter. He'd hand the kid off to the lab head, and then finally get some sleep. Despite what the outside of the building implied, the inside was very much not abandoned, full of people in lab coats running around doing various tasks. Izuku wore a gobsmacked expression on his face as he was led through the stale white hallways of the lab by Dr. Ujiko. It wasn't a grand tour of the facility by any means, but even just the things he could glimpse through cracked open doors and clear windows had him speechless. Whoa, is that a DNA sequencer? I almost didn't recognize it due to how advanced it looks. Are they setting up a cryogenic storage facility over there? Holy crap, that's a CRISPR machine. I thought they stopped developing that tech back Wait, what are those giant glass tubes? The green-haired teen had his eyes opened as wide as they could go, determined to see as much as possible in the underground lab that looked like something straight out of a sci-fi film. Of course, the irony of this was, despite how determined he was to see everything, he didn't notice the giant metal door locking behind him when he entered the building, the small squad of guards that had fallen into line on either side of him, or the giant lizard-like creature with an exposed brain stalking him from the air vents, ordered to pounce if it sensed the boy activating his quirk. Ironically, the scariest of those three was also the least dangerous to the very quirkless Izuku. Despite the amazing situation, Izuku's curiosity was still strong enough to rear its head at the worst of times. You owe me, excuse me, Dr. Ujiko. He stuttered. Why are they working when the lab is? Well, why Izuku had been lead down to the third level of the lab, and while this floor alone had enough machinery and scientific know-how to put most professional institutions to shame, the second had been filled with half-done wiring, partially set up lab equipment, and various machines covered in plastic tarps, and the first floor. Well, there were enough boxes that Izuku hadn't realized he was being led into a lab until the second level. They're behind schedule on getting the lab completely set up, but they still have the common sense to get started on their other projects. The scientist huffed. They just missed one deadline. They're not suicidal enough to miss two. Now be quiet, we're almost there. Now Izuku didn't exactly know where there was, but his social anxiety assured him that he didn't need to ask, so instead he focused on observing the man in front of him instead. People always say that when you meet a celebrity in real life, they're almost always shorter than you imagined them being. Izuku had never really believed in those sorts of myths before, but Dr. Ujiko was. Well, he wasn't exactly what you would call a tall person. From what the teen could tell, the man was standing somewhere around 5 feet tall, not a midget, but considering Izuku, a middle schooler, had to look down when talking to him, it was definitely a noticeable factor. The man had a fair amount of weight, an amount that would usually look relatively normal on anyone else, but that was further exemplified by his short height, giving him a slightly egg-like appearance. The man hadn't a spare hair on his head. It had seemingly all migrated to his very bushy and very unkempt mustache. Toss on some steampunk-esque goggles and a lab coat to top it all off, and you have the very unique appearance of the famous Darumi Ujiko. A man who, Izuku could firmly vouch, had no right being so damn intimidating when he looked like a mini Dr. Eggman from the Sonic games. Approaching the end of the hallway, a large metal door slid away to reveal what appeared to be a break room of sorts. Crisp blue cushions covered couches that lined the sides of the room. A microwave with several fish pastries in it sat in a corner, and in the center of the room several metal chairs were strewn around a coffee table, all angled so that they were facing the TV on the wall. Yujiko nudged Izuku into the room and gave him a shooing motion. The boy took this as an invitation to sit down on one of the couches. "Stay still and don't touch anything," the doctor said as he fished his phone out of his pocket. "Don't be loud either, I'm making a call." The guards that had been following them took positions on either side of the door, and the doctor grumbled something along the lines of couldn't get the lab ready in time, but of course they got the break room done. As he started pushing buttons, with armed guards standing around menacingly, and his host of sorts impatiently tapping his foot as he waited for his phone call to connect, Izuku was left to his own devices. Looking around the room, the teen was greeted with two people he hadn't seen at first. Two lab employees had been on their break when Izuku and Ko had entered. They had piqued up in interest before quickly agreeing that it was above their pay grade and quickly went back to their conversation. "I'm telling you, man, All Might's quirk has got to be a mutation type. There's no way a normal human could ever punch that hard. No way, it's definitely a transformation type quirk. Think about it. In all his years of heroing, we've never seen him without a full bodysuit. I guarantee you that whenever he activates his quirk, don't give me that look, Fred. We've had this conversation before. He yells out his smashes as a way to activate his quirk. When he activates his quirk, I guarantee you it does something to his muscles, kinda like a turbo boost of sorts. Excuse me." The two friends looked up from their small debate to the source of the disturbance. All Might's quirk eye is actually an E-emitter T-type, Izuku nervously stated while scratching his neck. "Look, kid, this isn't a playground. The adults are talking, now shoo." "Oh, come on, Fred. Don't be such an ass. The kid's only trying to give an opinion." The second scientist motioned to the green-haired boy. "Now you said an emitter quirk. Why would that be?" If you look at when All Might does any of his smashes, you'll notice they all share one key detail that most people tend to overlook. Fumbling out his phone, he started to flip through various photos, looking for an example to use. Here. What do these 4 pictures have in common? He held out his phone, which showed All Might using various special moves in combat. He's punching. Yes, but that wasn't what I was talking about. Here, look closer. Zooming in on the photos, he showed them again, this time even bringing up a video for reference. "Look, kid, I really don't." "Steam." Fred was cut off by his friend Fred at steam. "Look, he's making steam." Fred leaned in closer, squinting at the photo before his jaw dropped. "Holy shit." Exactly. Izuku was in game mode, stutter completely gone. Every time he attacks, he gives off steam. I don't know for sure, but I believe that, since he's never shown any form of heat-related abilities, it's a byproduct of his quirk. And what's the type of quirk that has been scientifically proven to have the highest chance of giving off a byproduct? Emitter quirks. The two men responded, their voices a whisper as the realization dawned on them. Exactly, Izuku answered. At first I thought it was a transformation type. He reflected. After that show on the roof, how could I not? But he said he's been deteriorating since his fight 2 years ago, meaning the difference between his two forms must not have originally been so drastic if there was any difference at all. But now that there is such a big difference, he's pushing his quirk the extra mile to save face and keep the public happy, which would also explain why his time limit is so short. A rare frown graced the boy's face as he thought back to the roof. I know he said it's for the best, that he's doing it to keep society stable, but he's lying to millions of people. Has been for years if he's to be believed. Kid, Izuku was snapped from his thoughts by Dr. Yujiko, who had walked over at some point during the conversation. A cautious but undoubtedly curious look filled his eyes, his phone held closed and forgotten at his side. Come here. He gestured for Izuku to follow, and led him out into the hallway, out of hearing range of the two employees. All right, kid. The doctor turned to the boy. You show up at my lab in the middle of the night, ask a stupid question that even a kindergarten teacher could answer, and then immediately afterward proceed to run mental circles around some of my best employees as if they were children. His eyes narrowed. You have 30 seconds. Explain. IIWLYOUSCII. No stuttering. It wastes time and is incredibly annoying. 25 seconds left. Izuku opened his mouth to speak, paused, closed it, took a deep breath, and began again. I am quirkless, sir. Yujiko raised an eyebrow and motioned for him to continue. I'm quirkless, and I was born into a world where that's seen as a disability. He clenched his hands. No matter how hard I try, no matter how hard I work, no matter what I do, it always comes back to quirks. The things he had been pushing off, the things he didn't want to think about, were coming back to him, but this time there was no I'll deal with it later to help him. It doesn't matter if it's authority. Kid, you have a second pinky toe joint. It's very unlikely you're ever going to get a quirk. Friends, I don't want your friendship. Family, I'm so sorry, sweetie. Or even if it's the person I always wanted to be. No, a quirkless person can't be a hero. Faces flashed through his mind. Dismissive, angry, sad, disappointed. It doesn't matter who, it doesn't matter why, it doesn't matter where. It always comes back to me being quirkless. It always does, every time. And so I just want to know. Tears were streaming down his face. The emotions he had been bottling up, finally spilling over. Just what it is that makes me so worthless to everyone. His cry, filled with years' worth of emotions and grief, seemed to deafen the entire lab. For a few moments everything was perfectly quiet. Then Izuku fell like a puppet with its strings cut, just barely managing to catch himself on the closest wall, silent sobs racking his entire frame. Izuku watched the entire ordeal silently before checking his watch. 30 seconds exactly. He HMM'd as he glanced at the boy. He has a good head on his shoulders, is plenty knowledgeable, a quick thinker, and from what I can tell, has a decent grasp on quirk theory. A crash followed a muffled shout from the construction on the floor above had him internally cringing, and considering the lab was supposed to be at least operable a week ago and most likely won't be for another 5 days. I'm behind schedule. A few weeks at best and a month at worst. It would definitely be helpful to bring on some more hands to help speed everything up, especially someone who has shown they can outdo my current employees, and outdo them by quite a large margin. HMMM, you know, with a bit of training. All right, kid, you've earned yourself a single shot. A chance at a chance, if you will. Wah, but I ain't handing out charity here. You gotta at least know what you're doing, and I don't have the time to go interviewing every nutjob who has half a brain. The doctor pulled a small towel from his lab coat, the kind used to clean up spilled chemicals, and handed it to Izuku. You need to prove that you deserve it, he continued as the aspiring hero wiped the wetness from his face. So I have something to determine just that. What's that? Izuku managed to get out between hiccups. A question. One question, here and now, no preparation. If you get it right, I'll answer your question. Izuku's eyes widened. But there's no partial credit. Either you get it right, Izuku crossed his arms, or you don't. That's unfair, unreasonable. Life doesn't care about any of those things. It doesn't care if you're ready, he looked Izuku in the eye, and it doesn't care if you're quirkless. So, do you accept? Aye. Midoriya gulped as he straightened himself and finished wiping away the last of the tears from his face. Yes, he answered, pulling his emotions together as much as possible. Yes, I do. All right then. Izuku stroked his mustache and thought, let's see, you clearly know your stuff when it comes to quirks, let's work with that. As the elusive scientist was thinking, Izuku was scrambling to prepare himself. What is a quirk? He had spent a month searching for an answer to the question. He had spent a month writing letters to anyone who would listen. He had spent a month constantly being laughed off by people. He had spent a month researching countless articles only to find nothing. He had spent a month trying to answer the one annoying question, only for it to all come down to one single shot. Call it petty, call it him being overly persistent, but he was getting an answer, damn it. What Izuku started, here it comes, is the most important part of any quirk. What? Did he mishear him? That was a... No, Izuku cut off that train of thought as quickly as possible. What is a quirk was also supposed to be a simple question, and look where that led him. There's definitely something deeper at play here. Most people would respond with how powerful it is, its usefulness in combat, or even how heroic it was, but those views were all based on how society views quirks, not quirks themselves. Its usability. No, that's too vague. Its uniqueness. Water quirks are relatively rare and are highly sought after as firefighters. Meanwhile, strength quirks are a dime a dozen, meaning only the extremely powerful ones ever really make a huge name for themselves. Izuku opened his mouth to give his answer, only to snap it back shut. No, that can't be it either. The question specifically states any quirk, not just specific types. He gave a quick glance back towards the doctor, hoping for a hint. The man instead huffed, pulled out his phone and set a timer for 20 seconds. Frep. That just made it worse. He squeezed his eyes shut and tried to forget about all the stress that had just been put on him. Think, Izuku, think. What's the most important type of any quirk? You've been researching quirks for a month now. Surely you've read something about this. The timer was now making audible ticks as it counted down, signifying that it was almost done. Okay, calm down. You can do this. Work backwards. 13, 12, 11. All Might's quirk is one of the most incredible ones out there. What's the most important part of it? Its power, its limitations, the way he uses it. 10, 9, 8. Think, damn it, think. 7, 6, 5. You've literally have done nothing but look at quirks all your life. Why can't you answer the question? 4, 3, 2. Wait. His eyes shot open and his inspiration struck him like a bolt of divine lightning. What if it's not about quirks? The alarm went off and Izuku sighed. Times you. I've got it. The answer I mean. Izuku clarified. I have an answer. Well, what is it? The scientist asked, a bit off-put how the previously quiet boy had suddenly gotten very loud very fast. The most important part of a quirk isn't the quirk at all. A smile spread across his face as everything started clicking together in his head. It's the pastry. Yujiko blinked as Izuku continued. Quirks are like a microwave, and the person is like a pastry. The two scientists on break weren't the only thing he saw when he was looking around the break room. No, off in the corner was a microwave heating up some pastries. And that was cause for his sudden inspiration. Microwaves heat up a pastry, just like how quirks power up people. Izuku, not realizing how odd his analogy sounded, was at this point making hand gestures to help visualize it. If it works out well, you get a heated pastry, just like how heroes get an awesome power. But if the pastry can't handle the heat, it blows up. And you can't have a person blow up because of their quirk, so the most important part to any quirk is the pastry. Yujiko, seeing what Izuku was getting at, grinned and started to say something. Because it's actually a super pastry, only to be interrupted by Izuku's rambling. Think about it. The microwave makes pastries better by heating them up. But in order to handle that, they already have to be super. Like the pro hero Edge shot, his reaction time is unparalleled in the world of heroes, but his quirk has nothing to do with that. Or heroes in general. They're thrown through walls and hit with tons of blunt force almost every day. But if you look at medical textbooks, that sort of force should kill people almost instantly. But heroes can get up without anything worse than a few bruises. Even heroes without fire quirks for heat resistance have taken blasts of fire that should have roasted them alive. And while they were hurt, that's still a far cry from being dead. He paused for a deep breath. So, the most important part to any quirk is that just by having one they automatically boost a person's natural limits. Izuku looked, with a confident grin covering his face, to Dr. Yujiko, whose face was about as blank as they came. The construction seemed muted. Scientists weren't running through the halls, everything was silent. Then Dr. Yujiko started to chuckle. Then he started to laugh. Tiafefraha. Huahuahaha. Es sir. Ti pasties. Iwehahuahahuaha. You know, the doctor said through the glove he now had covering his mouth that haha, that wasn't what I was going for at all. Izuku's stomach twisted. Had he really gotten it so wrong to be laughed at? I was thinking of the built-in mental barriers. What's the point of having a fire quirk if you snicker if you fry yourself by burning hotter than your quirk's heat resistance goes? As so I was wrong. From the rules I set, yes. Izuku suddenly felt like he had swallowed a lead brick. His head fell. But that's the thing, your answer was so much better. Only to shoot back up in surprise. It's a proven, if obscure, fact that humanity's newest stage in evolution has given us much more than flashy powers. Yujiko stated in order for people to use these powers, human bodies have to be able to adapt to the extreme forces they create. This adaptability works in conjunction with mental barriers to keep people with strength quirks from blasting their own arm off every time they throw a punch. However, very few people actually realize the extent of humanity's new adaptability. Get punched enough and you'll adapt to become more durable. Get burned enough and you'll adapt to have basic heat resistance. People go to the gym quite often these days, but they don't realize their true potential. They stop lifting weights when they feel fatigue. But if they instead keep going, keep pushing until their muscles are ripping themselves from the bone, and then do it again every week, the body will be forced to adapt to the training just like it would be forced to adapt to a strength quirk. Now you'll never get to the level of someone with a strength-enhancing quirk just through training. But, he grinned, several of my experiments have shown just how close you can get. This is why schools like UA have so much of their curriculum based around physical fighting. He held up his hand. The entrance exam, hero classes, the sports festival, final exams, he listed off on his fingers, even the hero licensing test. All of these have students beaten down to become more resilient. So yes, your answer was much better than the one I expected. He let out a laugh. And your passion. Yujiko's smile slanted at an angle that just seemed wrong. It reminded me of myself when I speak of my art. Haha, talent is a dime a dozen these days, kid. People pop up with some quirk and suddenly they're a prodigy, but it's so rare to find true unbridled passion. And passion, he shouted as he threw his arms in the air, is the most important part of art. As so I did it. I won. If that's what you want to call getting the question right, then sure. Izuku couldn't help the small smile that came to his face. Sure, saying I won after getting a question right did sound a bit dumb, but now he'd get an answer to his question. And that was a victory. A small victory for sure. But when was the last time he really had one of those? When he was diagnosed quirkless. When he lost Bakugo as a friend. When he made his mother cry. When he met All Might. No, he answered himself as he wiped away the small amount of tears that were stinging his eyes. Getting his question answered was a very small victory. But after a lifetime of failures, it felt like it was as big as a mountain. Izuku couldn't help but laugh when he thought about his situation. He had purposely thrown himself into trying to answer his random question of what is a quirk as a way to distract himself from his meeting with All Might on the roof. But his horrible way of coping had actually wound up giving him exactly what he needed. A spark of hope. If he could learn an entire field's worth of material that was way above his head, contact scientists from all over the globe, track down a ghost of a man in the middle of nowhere, all to get some random question answered, and all in a month, then what was getting a 70 on the UA entrance exam? He didn't have to get the highest score after all, he just had to pass. It was a small victory, but that was all he needed. Small victories, because with enough of them, even small victories could change the world. 3 days. Izuku looked up in confusion. 3 days. 3 days. Yujiko repeated, I want you back here at 5 p.m. sharp in 3 days. But why? I don't have to tell you why, he said as he started pushing Izuku towards the nearest set of stairs. I'm the genius of the century. You're just some random kid who turned up on my doorstep. I don't have to tell you anything. But MIQ question. Your question is why you're gonna make sure to come back. You don't come back, you don't get an answer. Capiche? But US saw. I said I'd answer it. I never said when I would. They passed floor 2 and continued upwards. Learn to read the fine print before you go making random deals, especially with shady people you met up with late at night. Boo. Now go home, get some sleep, etc., etc. I don't care. Just be back here in 3 days. He pushed Izuku through a set of double doors, into a hallway filled with boxes, and pointed down the hallway to a large steel door. The same door Izuku first knocked on. And stop stuttering, he yelled as he gave the boy a small shove to get him moving. It's annoying. Rain of sins. Yujiko stood in front of several large monitors and watched the green-haired boy walk off into the night, the freshly installed cameras finally doing what they should have been doing for over a week now. The stakes of that question had been riding a lot higher than he had let on. After all, he never said what would happen if the kid answered wrong. He had expected the kid to get it wrong. But the kid hadn't. Instead, he had overperformed to the extreme. Super pastries. Really? He chuckled to himself. I was the one to prove how humanity's new adaptability was crucial in the use of quirks. And I was also the one who later proved just how much potential humanity's new adaptability had. Although I had lost all my credibility at that time, so no one really took me seriously. He frowned and thought. That period of time had been an especially low point in his life, if his master hadn't found him when he did. But much more pressingly, that second bit of research was all erased when master erased my presence from the world. He couldn't have found anything on it online. He had to have come to that conclusion by himself. But I spent years on that theory, and I was one of the most capable scientists in the world at the time, so for a kid to catch on to it, even if it was only the basics, he's definitely someone to keep an eye on. Sir, what should we do? The mad scientist sent a lazy glance over his shoulder at the new head security officer behind him. He had fired the old one back when he was in the break room. What idiot lets a secret lab get snuck up on? By a middle schooler of all people. Focus on getting the security system completely set up and running. But other than that, nothing for now. What about the intruder? The kid. What about him? Sir, he found the lab. Are you really just going to let him go? I hardly think putting 3 different trackers on the boy, each with a microphone to let us listen in, and having several teams ready to be deployed to take him down at any time, can be considered letting him go. But what if he was working with the police or a villain group? Shouldn't we have killed him? You're thinking too short term. Yujiko responded flatly as he brought up a new screen. This one a map of the city with 3 dots on it, 1 for each tracker put on the boy. If he was working for someone, and we killed him, it wouldn't solve the problem. They would still know where the lab is, and even worse, they would have known it was one of mine just by the question they had the kid ask. Does Dr. Yujiko W work here? He mocked the kid's stutter. Killing him was a no-go. Capturing and interrogating him for information wouldn't have been any good either. He was sent out alone. That means he's expendable, and expendable people aren't kept in the loop. Therefore, the only logical move was to let him go and watch his moves. Sending a team to shadow him is too noticeable a move, and would raise immediate suspicion, so by process of elimination putting trackers on him was the only viable option. But what if he disposes of them somehow? PSHHH, the doctor waved his hand in a dismissive gesture. I put 1 on his jacket, 1 on his shirt, and 1 in his hair. They're microscopic and are sticky as hell. I should know, I helped make them. The only way he gets them off is by washing them off with hot water. And the only place he's likely to take any sort of shower or wash his clothes is at home, where the trackers will helpfully show us the location. And if he doesn't come back in 3 days, or leads us to a hideout, if he doesn't come back, then we send in a team and kill him. If he leads us to a hideout, then we send in a team, shoot the place up, and then kill him. Easy as cake. The only loss for us would be having to relocate the lab, which would put him even further behind schedule. again, but that was for later. Right now he had given himself 3 days to gather information and see what was up. Great, now I gotta go get a bunch of info diggers to get a hold of the kid's records, see if he's working for anyone. Then I need to get some form of surveillance system set up outside wherever he leads us to. He sighed. The kid had potential, but the whole damn thing just screamed of a setup. He hoped the kid's story held up. That he was just some random teenager who wanted his question answered, and even that was fishy as hell. But if it somehow did turn out to be true, it would save him so much work. But if life had taught him anything, the odds of something actually causing him to have less work. I'm not getting any sleep tonight, am I? Izuku sighed. There have been multiple times in Izuku's life when he could just tell that he was screwed. It wasn't always about something he could see either, such as just before the slime villain popped out of the sewers. It was something he felt in his bones. Izuku Midoriya. Midoriya stood in the living room dressed in her pajamas, tapping her foot impatiently. Where have you been? This was one of those times. Don't just stand there, say something. Mom, do you have any idea how worried I was? You don't. Her angry facade had barely lasted 20 seconds before her worry started to crack it from the inside out. I woke up to get a glass of water, only to find you gone. She stepped forward into the lamplight to reveal a face stained with tears and eyes that were red from hours of crying. At midnight, Izuku, I didn't know if you had been kidnapped or something worse. All I could do was sit and pray and think, and then all I could do was sit there when I realized that you. And Mom, I am sorry. Any further thought process on the situation was cut off when his mother smothered him in one of her patented mom hugs and started sobbing into his shoulder. The living room was dark, only a single small lamp in the light of the moon providing any light. The sobs of a scarred mother accompanied only by the light pitter-patter of newly started rain. A glass of wine laid half empty on the table. I was so scared that why you were gone for good, Izuku. She managed to get out through her sobs, why you're all I have left. And I thought that you had, failing to find the mental fortitude to finish her statement. Izuku's mother settled for squeezing him tighter instead, seemingly desperate to make sure he was really there. She had been drinking to try to wash away her worry. They stood like that for a while, with Izuku comforting his mother as she cried into his shoulder, listening to the occasional rumble of far-off thunder. Izuku could only smile sadly. He felt, well, to put it bluntly, he felt like absolute garbage, making his mother worry so badly. It wasn't that he regretted his decision to go to the lab. He didn't regret that decision. He was going to go back in 3 days after all. Instead, all of his guilt was due to how he worried his mother so much in the process. He should have waited until morning like he was originally going to. That way his mother wouldn't have been put in such a nerve-wracking situation. It was, as they say, hindsight is 20/20. But hindsight wasn't helping him in this situation. What he needed to do was simply hug his mom and comfort her. Soon she would get it out of her system, take a step back, wipe her face clean with her sleeve, and start scolding him. It was how it always went. He did something that worried her. She would cry her eyes out, then scold him untie. I'm sorry. What? I'm so sorry. It was such a quiet thing. It could barely be counted as a whisper. For a moment the teen thought he had imagined it. I don't know what I did, but sniff, I'm so sorry, Izuku. And Mom, this wasn't how it was supposed to go. His mom was supposed to get angry with him, not whatever this was. It's because I didn't support you, isn't it? She sobbed, her voice cracking. It's because I didn't support you, trying becoming a hero. I just didn't want you to get hurt, that's all. Izuku had no idea what was going on, let alone what he was supposed to say. I am sorry. I'll support you. I'll cheer you on no matter what you do. I'll do whatever I can to help you become a hero. Just please. She squeezed him even tighter as she broke down. Please don't leave me again. Though, the realization hit him like a bombshell. His mom thought he ran away from home. It was why she had been drinking and crying her eyes out, instead of calling the police. Mom, there were so many things he wanted to say. That he didn't run away. That he would never leave her like that. That she was an amazing mom. That he loved her. But Izuku was never good with words, and couldn't seem to find a good way to fit it all in, so instead he did the next best thing. He hugged her and let her cry on his shoulder, all while the rain continued to fall outside. Rain of sins. Izuku was annoyed. He wasn't mad, he wasn't angry, he wasn't about to go punch something, he was just annoyed. It had been 3 days since the kid had come to the lab. It had been 3 days since he had people start digging for info on the kid. 3 days of consecutive all-nighters and lost sleep, and it had been 3 days of nothing. Well, it's not exactly nothing. He mused as he glanced at the large stacks of paper sprawled out in front of him. Date of birth, blood type, medical records, school grades, home address, family tree, and much more was right there, presented to him in a nice size 11 caliber font, but it was just nothing. No criminal record. No instances of delinquency, no instances of him acting out in class, no extracurricular activity. He wasn't a part of any gangs, he didn't attend any political rallies, he had no romantic relationships, it was just so plain. He was so unsuspicious that it was suspicious. The kid didn't even attend any after-school clubs. In fact, the only thing that even made the kid stand out was the fact that he was quirkless. He was quirkless, but was somehow still determined to be a hero despite all the bullying he went through because of it. He had even put UA on his high school recommendation paper. The kid's father died when he was young, and he lived alone in an apartment with his mother who worked multiple jobs to support the both of them. No family pets, no grandparents, no cousins, no extended family of any note, and when Izuku had listened into the recordings from the tracking chips, all he got was a bunch of crying. He was honestly beginning to wonder how he had thought the kid was a threat in the first place. He wasn't threatening at all, just sad and depressing to look at. And it wasn't sad, as in the feeling you get when you hear some random person died on the car radio, but sad as in the feeling you get when you see an abandoned puppy on the street, who was starving, but with no arms or legs. But that wasn't the point. The most threatening part about the kid was the fact he could make you depressed just by telling you his life story, which kinda played into his favor. Izuku really didn't feel like killing the kid. It would just be wrong, like kicking an orphan that was drowning and didn't have legs. He really needed better analogies, but that brought him to his current situation. Sitting at his desk with what Uara had dubbed the Great Tower of Coffee sitting to his right, a stack of well over 20 empty coffee mugs stacked neatly in a tower, threatening to fall on him while he was busy staring at and rereading the monstrous amount of papers in front of him. The biggest problem the kid provided was the fact he could reveal the lab's location. The usual way this type of problem was handled was with a specially designed memory erasing Namu. It worked like a charm, but the person it was used on, well, the side effects were. Their mental state was often, well, he couldn't use it on the kid. Plan B was just to kill whoever it was. It raised police activity, forced the lab crew to lay low until it all blew over, and overall wasn't as good as Plan A. Again, he didn't feel like killing the kid. Plan C was the backup plan. Good old blackmail. It wasn't nearly as good as Plan A or B because it didn't actually fix the fact whoever it was could tell someone. It only lessened the risk. Unfortunately, it was Izuku's only option left unless he wanted to hurt the kid, which as previously stated, was like kicking a puppy. Unfortunately, the things that made the kid so sad and depressing in the first place also meant there was almost nothing to use as blackmail against him. No crimes, no debts, no skeletons in the closet, no nothing. What about money? He wondered to himself. Everyone loves money. The kid could use it to pay bills, get an actual house, buy healthier food, all sorts of things. That would work, right? He stroked his mustache for what seemed to be the 100th time. It helped him think. No, that wouldn't work either. A family suddenly gaining a massive income of money would draw attention. Not to mention the fact that I'd have to. Sir, hey. Izuku was pulled from his musing by the lab's head scientist, who was lazily leaning on the door frame. You told the guards to tell the security chief to tell me to tell you when the green bean gets here. Green bean. You are sighed in exasperation. The kid, boss. You wanted to know when the kid got here. And, what do you mean, and? What do you mean, what do I mean? Ugh. She grumbled something about old people under her breath. The kid, boss. The kid is here. Izuku stared at her for a moment, his coffee-fueled brain running overtime trying to understand what she said, before his eyes widened in surprise. He knew he needed to work fast, but had time really gotten away from him that badly? He scrambled to gather all of his stuff while glancing at his watch. And sure enough, wait a moment. Uara, what are you talking about? The kid can't be here yet. What do you mean he can't be here yet? Are you going senile or something? I told him to be here at 5 p.m. sharp. I still have half an hour. Izuku nodded to himself as if he'd just solved life's great mysteries. Half a what in the world are you going on about? The clock, Uara. He held up his watch. It's only 4:30. Well, what do you want me to do? Wave my hand and magically speed the clock forward half an hour. That's not how my quirk works. That's not how any quirk works. No, I'm saying that no sane person would actively want to come to an underground lab disguised as a creepy old warehouse. He said as he turned his attention back to his papers, let alone come a whole half hour before they're supposed to be there. Well then, congratulations, the kid's not sane. Wait, he glanced back up at her with wide eyes. He's actually here. Yes, Uara practically shouted, the kid is here. Why is that so hard to understand? Well then, why didn't you say something sooner? Izuku thought he heard Uara swear something about goddamn old people, but quickly discarded it as his sleep-deprived mind playing tricks on him. He grabbed a handful of documents and his coffee mug. Before he paused, realized it was empty, and put it back down. Grab the rest, he shouted to Uara as he ran past her. Uara blinked and looked at the desk that was covered in various stacks of paper as big as her head. She leaned her head back against the door frame and let out a resigned sigh. Guards. A few seconds later, a pair of armed guards sprinted around the corner, guns raised and ready to fight off any threat. "Hey guys," Yura smiled. "The doc needs all that junk taken to the front." She jabbed her thumb over her shoulder. "But miss, thanks so much guys." She gave a lazy wave as she walked away. "Y'all are a huge help." Rain of sins. It had been an interesting past few days for Izuku. After he had gotten home and had that whole fiasco with his mom, she had passed out on his shoulder after 30 or so minutes crying. He had then taken her to her room and tucked her into her bed, before going to his room and falling asleep. He had honestly expected to wake up and it all to have been some weird dream. Mr. Kurogiri, the lab, Dr. Yujiko, his mom, all of it. But when he woke up he was still wearing his jacket, still had the crumpled paper in his pocket and his mom. He had brought up what happened twice, once the morning after and once yesterday. The first time, she broke down sobbing. And the second she had immediately shushed him and told him not to worry about it. But while this was important, he had bigger things to worry about right now, mainly the large metal door in front of him. His mother had told him at a young age that he should always be a bit early to important things, although I don't think she meant this early. He admitted to himself as he glanced at his phone, which was proudly displaying the fact he wasn't supposed to be here for another half an hour. And maybe I should just go home and then come back at 5. He took a step back, only to stop. All Megara, a true hero wouldn't get scarred and run away just because they were a bit early. He took a step forwards, but they wouldn't be half an hour early to begin with. He took a step back, and so this continued for a few minutes before the quirkless boy finally worked up the nerve to knock on the door. This of course wasn't because he had found the courage to face social interaction, but instead because he had found the perfect way to sidestep the entire social problem entirely. "I'll knock on the door, and if no one answers I'll just come back later." Truly it was a genius plan. It allowed him to not have to worry about social interaction at all. Unless, of course, I can do this. Someone actually opened the door, because then the whole plan went out the window. Just as Izuku raised a shaking fist, the door swung open inward. Standing in the doorway was a young woman in her early 20s. She had light mint green hair that fell down to her lower back, toxic green eyes, and a smirk plastered on her face. She wore a lab coat, custom tailored to be longer than usual, hanging down to her ankles, blue jeans, black shoes, and a light blue armband, signifying her as a person of authority. "Well, looky here, it's the green bean everyone's been talking about." Izuku stuttered like a broken record, the situation having him frozen in place. His anxiety wasn't helped when the woman started to snicker at his attempts at communication. "Sheesh kid, you're shaking worse than a leaf, you catch a cold or something." "And no, I am not as sick. Relax kid." She waved her hand in a dismissive motion. "I'm messing with you. It's called sarcasm, you should try it sometime." Well, sorry. She raised an eyebrow in curiosity, before shrugging and stepping aside. "Whatever, the boss wants to see you. Whether that's a good or bad thing is still up for debate." Bad thing. Izuku recoiled. She sighed and brought her palm to her face. "Sarcasm kid." She gave him a blank stare through her fingers. "Sarcasm. Izuku relaxed slightly. "Right, sarcasm." He gulped as he took a few hesitant steps past the lab head and into the building. He gulped again as he noticed the 4 armed guards on either side of the door, and gulped a third time when the lady closed the door behind him, locking it with an audible click. "Hope you don't mind me being the one to greet you," she said as she started walking him deeper into the facility. "The boss man is busy and I figured you wouldn't want a group of guards showing you in." She glanced over her shoulder at the squad of guards following them and winced. You would want someone other than just a group of guards showing you in." "All right," Izuku stammered. The two descended into an awkward silence, mainly due to Izuku's lack of communication skills, performing a team-up move with his nervousness around the female gender to render him incapable of speech. "Suo," the lady drawled in an attempt to break the silence. "What's your name?" "Izuku, I'm Midoriya," he stuttered. What's yours?" "You want to know my name?" she gasped as she pulled her arms protectively in front of her chest. How bold. Much more distressing to Izuku was that this had the unfortunate side effect of exemplifying her feminine assets. Sorry. She went from shock to trying to hold in her laughter as Izuku found a sudden interest in the floor, and turned red as a cherry in record-breaking time. "I'm just messing with you, kid." She chuckled at him. "The name's Yura Ito, and you better remember it." She smirked. "And speaking of things to remember, here we are," Yura exclaimed, bringing their march through the stale white hallways to a close. Drawing his attention back in front of him, Izuku couldn't help but gulp nervously. In front of Izuku stood a very intimidating door. It towered over them, by a foot at most. It was a very vile shade of steel gray. It moved by itself, upward because it was an automatic sliding door. Look, just because it looked literally just like every other door in the building, doesn't mean it couldn't be intimidating. Just ignore the fact that everything was intimidating to him right about now. "They're leading me to whatever's behind this door," he stressed. "Is it Dr. Yujiko? Is he angry at me?" Am I in trouble? Did I? Oblivious to Izuku's inner turmoil, Yara gave a quick flick of her ID across a panel to the door's left, breaking Izuku out of his thoughts with a hydraulic hiss as it slid upward. Izuku gulped as he nervously looked inside. It was a moderately sized room, only about 100 or so square feet, completely empty except for a desk and its accompanying chair in the center. But it being so empty also had the side effect of making the room seem much larger than it was. Or maybe that was just Izuku being Izuku. What are you waiting for? The mailman. A hot date. A good luck card. Go on in. Oh, sorry. The green-haired boy nervously glanced around as he entered the room, but he couldn't see anything else of note. She said to go in. But is this the right room? Am I supposed to meet someone? Am I supposed to be waiting for something? Is there something F-wump? If you asked Izuku later, he would tell you that he most certainly did not jump and yelp like a girl when the door closed behind him, no matter what story Yara told in the break room. Face burning red from embarrassment, Izuku smoothed out his shirt from the jump that he most certainly did not take, and walked towards the desk. As he got closer, he noticed that the desk had a large drawer built into it and that, more importantly, it was open by a few inches. Being the very responsible teen he was, Izuku did what any responsible person would do. Stand next to the desk for a few awkward seconds before giving in, and taking a peek inside. Inside, in organized lines, were 3 pens, 3 pencils, 3 mechanical pencils, a small stack of notebook paper, and a thick stack of neatly printed paper with a sticky note labeled for Mr. Midoriya. Pulling the stack out for a closer look, Izuku was surprised to find it was some kind of written test. His brows furrowed as he flipped through the stack. If it wasn't already obvious, then this proved that this wasn't anything like the tests he took regularly in school. It had well over 300 questions, most of which were free response, and was clearly divided into different sections, each covering a different subject. There was biology, genetics, quirkology, an entire part dedicated to human anatomy and chemistry. Izuku winced as he read that last one. He hadn't studied for any form of test, but due to his research he was reasonably confident in his knowledge on the other sections. And since that research hadn't involved anything even remotely related to chemistry. When he got to the back, however, his frown faded. An almost completely empty page greeted him, with 10 blank pages for work following it. On the page there were 2 things. An open-ended question was at the top, and right next to it in cursive handwriting. Go nuts, kid. We're scientists. We understand a lot more than your middle school teacher. Dr. Ujiko. Izuku couldn't help but smile at the jab at his biology teacher. I must have rambled about it last time I was here, he reasoned as he flipped back to the front of the papers, taking a moment to collect himself and take a deep breath before beginning to work. And as he started on the first question, he was mulling over the final open-ended question in the back of his mind. What do you think a quirk is? Rain of sins. Dr. Ujiko sat comfortably in his chair located in the center of the surveillance room. While the monitor-filled room was normally staffed by a team of 15 or so guards, with all the screens displaying camera feeds, local hero activity, police patrols, and such. Today, it was full of almost 20 or so of his top scientists, and the screens were displaying fast-moving data instead of reports or camera feeds. Well, all except for one. The giant screen that took up the entirety of the northern wall was displaying a live feed of a person of very high interest, Izuku Midoriya. Yara, he started without looking up. Why were you at the entrance with the guard team? Meh, no real reason, she shrugged while walking through the door. I just wanted to see the kid myself, find out what everyone's been talking about. What do you mean? Boss, you're kidding, right? She stared at him. How have you not heard any of the stuff people are saying? It's like, she gestured weakly, the only thing anyone's been talking about for the last few days. I swear, I can't even wash my hands without someone asking me is it true a kid got in? Or why'd they let him leave? Or even, and you're gonna love this one, boss, they asked if the kid was yours. Seriously? Yes, seriously. The lab head huffed as she slumped into the chair next to him. It's like they expect me to know everything that happens here just because I'm the lab head. Yara, he gave a sideways glance at her. I put you in charge of both this facility and the research conducted here. The security chief reports to you. The research teams report to you. You have access to the entire building's surveillance system, which I know you watch in your free time for your gossip, he quickly stated, cutting off her rebuttal. And the only person of higher authority in the building is me whenever I stop by. For all intents and purposes, you do know everything that happens. But boss, now be quiet, I'm busy. He turned his attention back to the screens in front of him, ignoring how one of the top minds he currently had employed crossed her arms, huffed, and pouted like a teenager. The test he had given the kid was difficult, so difficult that it straddled the line between stress hair graying and actually impossible, as if it were walking a tightrope. He should know, he had made it himself. It was made to be hard enough that it made someone's brain work overtime, but not hard enough to make them completely give up. And it was made that way for a very specific reason. It created the prime environment to monitor someone's brain activity. But Izuku would be a fool if he just used this opportunity to monitor that brainwave activity. Heart rate, facial expressions, body language, and even things as simple as which hand he wrote with. Everything was recorded, analyzed, and cataloged. The test itself was just another way to gather info, the most obvious of which was the entire front page, which was a survey page. It asked for mundane things such as your full name, initials, and age, as well as very specific things such as levels of education, jobs worked, social status, medical issues, past crimes, enemies, etc. These questions weren't much themselves, but with his brain activity monitor, not to mention the plethora of Namu in the room adjacent to him, all with specialized purposes such as being a perfect lie detector, the real gems would come from what he either lied about or didn't feel like answering. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. It went all the way down to the writing utensil the kid picked and how he used it. A recent survey showed kids that most children in Japan used mechanical pencils. However, when you broke that up into school regions, the high-end private school had the highest use of pen. The middle-class public schools tended to use mechanical pencils the most. And the poor schools in the run-down parts of cities used almost exclusively wooden pencils the schools provided. He would subconsciously gravitate to whichever felt more familiar to him, and how he wrote was just as important as what he wrote with. For example, high-class children were taught to hold pens a certain way, and were schooled on their handwriting. Everyone can lie about where they're from, but the things you're taught as a child are ingrained into your subconscious, are much harder to cover up. Professional agents have to go through years of training to achieve their expertise. Years of training that the kid most certainly didn't have. One way or another, Izuku would have all the information he needed to decide on what to do with the kid. All they had to do now was wait. Rain of sins. Can I just hand this whole thing off to my secretary? No, I don't have one. How about whoever's second in command of the lab? Would that work? Wait, that would be Uara. And as such, an all-around bad idea. She'd just do something stupid to annoy me, like dress him up as a maid and hire him to hand her things, so she doesn't have to get out of her chair. Izuku sighed as he took another sip of coffee, trying to kickstart his brain. The kid had finished the test about half an hour ago, and even though the test was a sham and there was no real reason to grade it, Izuku had handed it off to a few of his scientists to do so anyway. He had honestly expected for something to slip, for one of the brain activity monitors to show the kid had been lying, or for the DNA test they ran on the strand of the kid's hair to show he was related to someone of note, something that let him get rid of the kid with a clear conscience. Because he did have a conscience. He was a scientist, not a killer, and while his master was the latter on occasions and Izuku's morals had slipped a bit over time, the doctor had sworn to follow him as a man of science, not a man who killed innocent children. All for One was the one responsible for the bodies and other less savory paints he used to create his artwork. All Izuku did was provide his finished creations to his master. His conscience started and ended with his work. Where and how his master got him his supplies or what he decided to use the finished product for wasn't on Izuku's conscience, but the kid's life was. And despite his numerous attempts to get it off, he couldn't. Here was a kid who had been put down his entire life for something he believed in. But despite this, he continued to believe in it, even when no one believed in him. And that hit a little too close to home. The doctor was currently leaning against the wall of the break room. He was still peeved about how they spent the time to put a TV up before they finished the security system, and watched the interaction between his most annoying lab head and his most annoying headache. After the kid finished the test, Uara dragged him to the break room, hellbent on interrogating the kid for gossip and the such, and Izuku had been compelled to tag along. Stupid morals, and of course, his life being his life. Almost immediately after the two sat down, their conversation had drifted to things that made the kid such a hard spot to wipe off his conscience in the first place. I know that it may seem impossible, and I know it'll be extremely difficult, but Izuku looked the lab head straight in the eye. I refuse to give up. Look, Green, that's admirable and all. You are consoled, but you have no idea if it's even feasible. Couldn't you at least take the time to make a backup plan for if that falls through? Izuku, deciding to give his mind a break from his moral dilemma, pulled his head up and looked at both of them. Uara was on the edge of the couch, her head resting on her fist, which was supported by her arm, which in turn rested on the armrest. She was smiling, but her hand was rubbing the bottom of her lab coat, an unconscious action which he had learnt meant she was nervous, and judging by her tone of voice, sympathetic, caring, and worried. He concluded with a slight hum, the kid's growing on her, although from both of their profiles, it's not too surprising. He's shy, but naturally draws people to him, and Uara, his mouth thinned to a line. He's reminding her of her little brother. Izuku filed that away for later and turned to Izuku. The aspiring hero was sitting perfectly straight in a chair directly across from the couch, his hands here gripping his knees and his eyes. Determination. Yujiko sighed as he closed his eyes. The kid's got nothing but determination, the kind that doesn't listen to logic or reason. This argument isn't ending until Yura gives up. I understand what you're saying. And I know you only mean good, but I can't do that. But why not? The lab head pleaded. I'm not saying to give up trying to be the first quirkless hero. I'm saying just to have something to fall back on if something happens that you can't control. I can't do that. But why not? Because, he gripped his jeans, if I do that then I'd be admitting that there's a chance I might fail. And I don't have that kind of luxury. If I want to succeed then I need to put 100% of myself into try. His eyes steeled. I can't allow myself any doubt. Yujiko's attention was drawn to the opening of the door, though the two green-haired occupants were too caught up in their argument to notice. Through the door slipped a scientist carrying a stack of papers. He made his way to Yujiko, the doctor meeting him halfway, and handed over the now graded test. The test, due to not being intended to actually be graded, didn't have a grade on the front or any form of score. What it did have, however, was a top-of-the-line scientist's opinion on whether or not the kid got the answer right, giving a quick explanation for why he was wrong or why he wasn't entirely right, when they had to. A benefit of this was that it wasn't as black and white as right or wrong. There were several questions that the kid had gotten mostly right, but was missing a few details he wouldn't have known unless he decided to major in certain fields. Huh, not half bad, kid. He mused. There's a lot less red than I thought there'd be. Wonder where he put it all, he sarcastically joked before wincing as he passed by the chemistry section. Ah, there it is. But all joking aside, Yujiko was honestly surprised. He had expected the kid, a JR High student, to completely bomb it, to have missed the questions so wildly that his scientists would laugh at them. Instead, the kid once again went above and beyond. Now it wasn't perfect by any means, not even close, but if the test were scored by normal standards, Yujiko would wager the kid would be passing. He was impressed, and that was a difficult feat to accomplish. Turning to the last page, he stopped dead in his tracks. He had put "What do you think a quirk is?" as a way to make the kid really think, really get his brain working to get good readings, and he had expected the kid to go overboard on the question, but the scientist could only run his fingers over the page in awe, ignoring the rising shouting of Izuku and Yura. For a brief moment Yujiko had thought his men had gotten a group of his own notes mixed in with the batch. There was a huge gap in ability between someone who had no experience with a subject when compared to someone who at least had the basic ideas behind it down. When put up against one another, the one with the basic understanding would win almost 100% of the time. Now compare that to two people who both knew what they were doing, but one was more experienced than the other by a year or two. The more experienced one would be more likely to win, but there's still a reasonable chance that the underdog could come out on top. There are entire movies based off the fact there is this massive jump in ability when you learn the basics of something, but then everything afterwards is incremental. You can become more skilled by going up incrementally than you ever did from your original jump, but you'll never have a comparable jump in ability like that again. At least most people won't. There was a second jump that came when you thoroughly understood something. Not many people were able to reach this depth of understanding, but it's what sets the Albert Einsteins apart from the rest of the pack. And when you reach this level of understanding, you're able to use what you know to predict what you don't. To dumb this down, it's like if you wanted to know where a ball came from, normally you would just have to guess, but if you know how it got there, if you knew it fell from somewhere, you can make an educated guess instead of a random one, in this case, that the ball came from the roof. A grin spread across the doctor's face as he read through the paper. The kid didn't know everything, and several of his hypotheses had holes in them, but Yujiko could just tell the kid could make that second jump. And the proof was the large red question mark the grader had put in the middle of the page. It was at that moment that Yujiko had a realization, the same realization All for One had with Tamura all those years ago. The kid's rough around the edges, the doctor conceded. He doesn't have all the education and specialization that I usually look for, but that doesn't matter. Things were clicking into place in the mad scientist's mind. Those can be provided in time. No, the kid has something much more valuable. His smile warped and his eyes darkened. He has the potential to be more than anyone else could ever be, and even better. It doesn't matter how many times I get knocked down. I'll always get up and try again. Izuku's emotional outburst deafened the room, his argument with Yura reaching its explosive conclusion. He has passion. A chuckle cut through the stunned silence like a metaphorical pin drop. Wuho, I'm Mr. Yujiko. Boss. They both looked at him, bewildered. Oh great, Yura mumbled. You broke him. I'm Mr. Yuji. Yes. WHWHWH. Izuku recoiled. Yes, the mad scientist declared. That right there. He pointed at Izuku. That was the perfect answer. It was. Yes, the doctor exclaimed as he approached Izuku. Never give up on your passions. Yes. He looked Izuku directly in the eyes, his grin feral. You have what it takes. You will be my greatest masterpiece. He laughed, the shadows highlighting his Cheshire grin in all the wrong ways. You are to be my successor. What? Boss? Quick, the mad doctor shouted, ignoring their protests. We haven't a moment to lose. We must start getting you up to task immediately. He began to run off before slapping his forehead and stopping to pull out his phone. I need to make calls. I need to get my other lab heads here to tutor you. You will excuse. No, wait. It's much more efficient to learn hands-on and through experience. Oh, but then you wouldn't learn the theoretical side of things in as much detail. Oh, wait. Yubara, he yelled, pointing at the woman who could be confused with an owl, with how wide her eyes were. This lab is the closest to where my successor lives. You are to provide tutelage when I'm not here, and allow him to watch and help with your research department's work. The doctor began to pace back and forth, his mind going a mile an hour. Excuse me. Oh, there's so much to do. Not to mention this lab isn't even fully set up yet. And that won't do. My successor must have access to the highest end of resources. I'll have to get a construction team out here at SAP2. Excuse me. Yujiko stopped, blinked, and turned to his newly named successor. IIIWW. Spit it out, kid. Yujiko barked, still grinning madly. No successor of mine stutters. It wastes time that would be better spent sharing hypotheses or research. Dr. Yujiko II. What did I just say, kid? Izuku took a deep breath and steadied himself. What's going on? Well, isn't it obvious, my boy? Yujiko grinned. You've impressed me, and I'm making you my successor. But sir, I can't. What? Yujiko blinked, taking a moment to process what he just heard. What? Why not? I am honored, sir. But I can't give up on my dream of UA. And besides, the boy looked down dejectedly. No, you can't be a hero without a quirk. I don't have a quirk. He clenched his fists as All Might's words came back to him. I don't have an intelligence quirk. I can't make myself learn things at an accelerated rate, or multiply my IQ by drinking tea. So I'm sorry, sir. He closed his eyes as he finally accepted what he'd refused to for so long. But I don't have a quirk. And he never would. A pregnant pause filled the air. Izuku waiting for Yujiko's reaction with his eyes clenched shut, and Yubara staring wide-eyed at the two, trying to understand what happened in the last 30 seconds. I really am a Deku, aren't I? Izuku half-heartedly chastised himself. I know I can't do anything without a quirk, but I'm still going to try for UA. Izuku felt sad weight settle in his stomach while a much larger one slipped from his shoulders as he brought himself to accept his situation. He would never truly be anything without a quirk, but at the same time, he refused to give up on his dream. Two unchangeable realities that would forever butt heads, and forever hinder him. For Christ's sake, he was only 16 and look how much their clash had messed up his life so far. So, I'm sorry, sir, he restated and bowed his head, but I'm quirkless. A sad smile graced his face. He wasn't happy with his new realization, but finally accepting it brought him a calming sense of peace. So, only for Yujiko's reply to shatter said peace. What do you mean? Izuku frantically questioned. I mean, does that really matter? Well, of course it matters. The quirkless kid wants to be a hero. What a joke. Everyone is born with a quirk, a power that makes them unique and strong. Listen, nerd, I'm the only one from this school who's hero material, you got that? I was born without one, and because of this no one would believe in me. I'm so sorry, sweetie, but if everyone else is naturally born with a huge advantage over me, are they wrong to not believe in me? Are they wrong when they say that I'll never be as strong as someone with a quirk? No, a quirkless person can't be a hero. A quirkless person can't be anything, he finished in his head. So that's it, huh? Yujiko questioned. Izuku gulped and braced himself. You can't accept it because no one believes in you. Well, and no I. Well, that's an easy fix. Using the fact Izuku's bow made Yujiko the taller one, he ruffled the kid's hair. I believe in you. See, easy fix. Now be my successor. Izuku had only met Dr. Yujiko a few days ago. The man was still a relative stranger, so hearing him say that he believed in him shouldn't mess with him so much. But, I believe in you too, Gria kid or boss. Yubara chimed in. Her shot mental capacity going. Yujiko equals boss, green equals Yujiko's successor equals future boss equals need good impression. Gee guys, Izuku stuttered, blinking away tears. And besides, Yujiko continued, his grin still in place. Who cares if you have a quirk? I mean really, quirks are meaningless when talking about potential. What do you mean, sir? Izuku snorted as he wiped his sleeve across his face. What do I mean? What do I mean? Yujiko threw the stack of papers up in the air, the binding coming undone and causing it to fall like leaves around them. I'm talking about your question, my boy, he exclaimed. What are quirks? Young Mr. Midoriya, do you know why it doesn't matter if you have a quirk? It's because quirks don't measure what you can or can't do. Izuku felt his chest tighten. It's because quirks don't determine your destiny. He felt his eyes water. It's because what quirk you're born with doesn't determine anything. He felt his hope, beaten and battered as it was, find a small spark. It's because what quirks are, all quirks truly are, is clay. Yujiko cackled at the heavens. Quirks are nothing more than clay that we scientists must shape to create our art. And so began a story that was never meant to be, a fable that would forever leave its mark on history. A tale of pain, struggles, hardship, growth, redemption, and loss. Say it was fate, say it was luck, say the powers that be had given a hopeless boy the chance he never had, or that it was simply wrong place, wrong time. It doesn't matter how it started, only that it did. And now the world would be forever changed. And it wasn't prepared. Rain of sins. Sir Night-Eye's eyes bolted open as he gave out a startled gasp. Taking a moment to compose himself and steady his breathing, he tried to gather his thoughts. Sir, are you all right? The pro-hero glanced up at Mirio Tagata, the hero in training he had agreed to spar with after nearly a week of pestering. Why, yes, I'm fine. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to postpone this until tomorrow, he replied, running a hand through his hair as his memory came back to him. What? But sir, we haven't even started. Yes, I know, but I just remembered I need to make a call. But sir, leaving the boy behind in the training room, Night-Eye pushed his way out the door and through the hallway, not stopping until he reached his office. He then promptly locked the door and slumped into his chair. Miro had been pestering him for a true spar for well over a month now, and he had finally relented. He was planning on going all out to show the boy how far he had to go, inspiring his drive to improve while stomping out any overconfidence that might have started forming at the same time. That had been the plan. It hadn't lasted very long. The pro had used foresight on Mirio the moment the fight began, having patted him on the back right before to meet the requirements. He was going to use it to look into the future for the next hour to predict all the boy's moves. But he hadn't gotten just the hour glimpse he had been expecting. The hero pinched the bridge of his nose as he recalled his vision. A stadium made of solid stone melting. Grotesque creatures with exposed brains marched alongside fallen angels with faces of skulls. Raindrops as thick as sludge and as black as oil rained from the heavens. And in the center of it all stood a man. His arms were spread lazily into the air and his face was turned towards the sky, simply enjoying the moment. It was clear, too clear. His visions of the far future were always snippets, brief moments in time with a hazy foam surrounding them. But this was different. He had not only received visual feedback, but audio as well. Night-Eye sighed as he fished his phone out of his pocket. He had several calls to make. And as the phone rang, the words of the man rang in head. Revenge. You could call this revenge. You could also call me a villain, but this is so much more. This is justice, and I am the rain that has come to wash away the sins of the world, even if I must purge it in fire to do so. The sun was setting, creating a marasma of reds and blues on the horizon. Birds sat on the overhanging telephone wires, singing their pretty songs. Fluffy clouds drifted overhead, weaving together to form beautiful tapestries. It was a nice evening, but despite this, Izuku's mind was somewhere else entirely. As the green-haired boy trudged his way up the stairs to his apartment, his gaze was locked on the small rectangular shape in his hand. Izuku Midoriya, lab assistant, ID No. 5280. Third level access. Izuku sighed as he opened the door to his home. The last few hours had been mentally exhausting. First there was the test, then his argument with Ms. Uehara, and then finally his conversation with Dr. Yujiko, although it wasn't much of a conversation. The good doctor had somehow gotten the idea into his head that Izuku would make a great successor, and was hellbent on seeing this absolutely terrible idea through. I don't even know what it is they do at the lab. All he knew was, from an offhanded comment by Uehara when she showed him out, that they were researching something about quirks and how they work on a fundamental level. Now it wasn't that he wasn't interested in quirks, far from it, but he didn't have the time to do something as major as become the successor to an incredibly accomplished scientist. The school year was approaching its end, so he had homework galore, and finals coming up. Then there was the UA entrance exam coming up in a few months, which he needed to get ready for the physical portion of, and not to mention that when he got into the school, he wouldn't have the luxury to take a bus out to the lab every day. Unfortunately, when he tried to explain this to the Dr. Yujiko, the best way to explain it would be ignored aggressively. Although Izuku genuinely wasn't sure if the doctor was purposefully ignoring him, or if he was just so caught up in the moment that he had tuned everything else out. This odd bit of Izuku trying to bring up why he couldn't accept, only to be brushed off, continued for almost 20 minutes before he eventually snapped and civilly told the man he didn't yell and almost start crying. No matter what anyone said, I'm going to become a hero and save people with a smile on my face. I can't do that as your successor, so I'm sorry, sir, but I can't accept. After that, Yujiko had been forced to listen to what Izuku had to say, and they had agreed to a compromise. No, not a compromise. A compromise, there's a difference. A compromise is when multiple sides sit down and agree to something that would benefit everyone involved. The compromise Izuku got was Yujiko telling him he could either become his successor, or become a temporary lab assistant, and be convinced to become his successor by the end of his tenure. Now, in a normal compromise, the other side would counteroffer and argue for something more to their goal. But you see, Izuku is he doesn't like arguing. And he's a bit socially awkward, and, well, he chose option B. Oh, Izuku, I didn't know you were home yet. The staring contest Izuku had been having with his new ID card was cut short as he jerked his head up in surprise to see his mother in the living room, who he had completely missed due to being entrenched in thought. I know you said that you'd be gone for an hour or two, but you wouldn't tell me where you were going, and I got worried despite you telling me not to. And the woman pushed herself off the couch and ran towards her son, only to stop when she spotted what he was holding. What's that? I. Think, Izuku. Think. He rattled his head for an idea. It's a school ID. No, you can't lie. Don't be like him. I got a job. She blinked. What? Awesome. It's not a lie, and it's not a half-truth. You're doing good so far. I got a job, he continued. I wanted to. I mean. His eyes widened as a thought struck him. I am a growing young man, and every day I take another step closer to adulthood. Getting a reliable job is the first step towards the financial independence an adult needs to succeed in today's economy. Izuku had his finger pointed up and was semi-mechanically sputtering out his words as if he were reading from a script, which he sort of was. This was almost an exact copy of one of the many speeches Dr. Yujiko had spouted to him to get him to accept the position. Housing, clothing, food, water, electricity, the basic necessities for living today all share one thing in common: they all cost money. And what is a man, nay, what is a human who cannot afford access to these things? Why, he's not in very good shape. Izuku mentally wiped the sweat from his forehead for dodging a bullet, this one being the danger that comes from quoting Yujiko word for word. The doctor's original version had him yell why he's dead at the top of his lungs. And that's not all. Every successful adult needs to have a measure of responsibility to achieve their goals. By accepting this position I am guaranteeing myself an opportunity to not only grow in character, but else. His bootleg speech was cut off by his mother placing a finger over his mouth to shush him, a sad smile on her face. I understand. Why, you're not mad, Izuku, she sighed. I know I've made a lot of mistakes, both as a parent and in general, and I know that I can't ever undo them, but I think. Her voice hitched as she closed her eyes and took a deep breath. I think it's about time I start to at least attempt to fix them. Whatever Izuku was going to say was cut off as his mom pulled him into a hug. I know I was crying a lot at the time, but I said I would support you no matter what, right? And what mother would I be to go back on my word? Tucked into her shoulder, Izuku heard her sniff and felt drops fall onto his shoulder. Tears, he realized. I said I would support you 100%, so if you want to get a part-time job, then I'm here for you, and if you still want to be a hero. Izuku's breath caught. Then I'll cheer you on every step of the way, because. She sniffed and took a moment to compose herself. Because you are a wonderful and caring and brilliant young man, and you can do anything you can dream of. What about being a hero? He choked. Can I be as good of a hero as All Might? Oh, Izuku, she squeezed him tighter. You're a bigger hero to me than All Might's ever been. And Mom, he bit his lip, desperately trying to keep the tears that were welling up in his eyes from spilling. However, this had the unfortunate side effect of making it so he couldn't finish his sentence, so he did something better. He wrapped his arms around his mother and hugged her, conveying his message as clear as crystal without so much as a word. Thank you so much. And so they hugged until their arms hurt, and cried until they ran out of tears, until all the sadness floated away and all that was left was a filling warmth of content. Besides, she chuckled as she drew back, wiping a tear away. Why would I ever be mad at you for getting a part-time job? It's not like you're working for a supervillain or anything. Rain of Sins. I am a supervillain. No, you're a brat. Yujiko flipped through several reports on his tablet, calmly ignoring how Tamura raged and ranted in response to his, in his opinion, very accurate observation. Now, ignoring something is a very useful skill, and while it can help deal with quite a few things, it's not exactly an invincible strategy. For instance, it's very hard to ignore someone when they slam their hands on the table you're sitting at and turn it to dust. You will make me a Namu to my specifications. Specifications. HMMM. The doctor glanced down at the pile of dust that was once a table before looking back at the self-proclaimed supervillain. That's a very big word for you, Tamura. Over 3 syllables. He grinned as Tamura glared. I'm very impressed, you bastard. The rising villain roared. I am the leader of the League of Villains. I am the one who will kill All Might. How dare you talk down to me? League of Villains, huh? I think small group of 2 sort of villains would fit it much better. Huh? Tamura laughed. Only 2. You must be out of the loop. In just the short time since its conception, the League has gained well over 20 members, with more joining every week. You're right, Tamura. I guess that name was a bit harsh. The doctor sighed. Your group now has 20 bottom-rung thugs who I wouldn't trust with so much as a box of socks. Tamura's daycare for the dumb and desperate fits much better. How dare you insult me? I'm the one who your Namu are for. How dare I? Yujiko's eyes narrowed dangerously as he pushed himself out of his chair. How dare you? My creations are for my master, for the wielder of the all-powerful Quirk, all for one, not for you. He is a genius of unrivaled potential, a man with power unmatched. You are nothing but a spoiled brat. You have no right to compare yourself to him. I'll kill you, Tamura spat, his hand twitching. It'll be easy, like completing a tutorial. Go ahead, the scientist hissed, his words ice cold. Kill me and all, you'll never get a single piece of my research. Gentlemen, please. A digitized voice cut into their argument. We're all on the same side here. There's no reason to be threatening one another. No reason. Tamura whirled around to the voice. This piece of low-leveled trash insulted me. So he did, the voice agreed, but you said that you would kill him. And I will. So you don't care about his life. Why would I? But if you don't care about his life, why then should you care about his opinion? Tamura blinked, raised his hand, stopped, and took a moment to think. But he went, and you know what? He struggled before clenching his fists and growling. I'm done here. I'm done with this meeting, and I'm done with you. He pointed at Izuku before turning and storming away. Izuku watched All for One's successor storm off, with a completely neutral face, his emotional mask only cracking to reveal a small scowl when Tamura slammed the door behind him like a little kid throwing a tantrum. He's a brat, Izuku finally said, as he slumped back into his chair. He's immature, he's petty, he acts like a child. He has no real plan other than disorganized chaos, and he lets his anger override both his logical reasoning and common sense. The doctor concluded with a sigh. I've told you this before, and I know you won't listen to me, but please. He looked over to the TV. He's not worthy to be your successor, master. All for One mused, an air of amusement floating through the screen. If you already know the result beforehand, why continue trying to change my mind? Because you deserve the best of the best, and he isn't worthy of that title by a long shot. You're right, doctor. All for One admitted with a chuckle. He's far from the most capable candidate right now, but he'll grow beyond your greatest expectations, and that I'm sure of. And if he doesn't? The television fell silent, and for a moment Izuku worried he might have angered his master, until finally, you've found someone you believe to be a better successor. What? No, Izuku sputtered, his eyes wide in panic as he hopped to his feet. I wouldn't. I would never suggest to. Easy now, doctor, the supervillain chuckled. I'm not questioning your loyalty, and I know you only have good intentions. He reassured the man, but we're too far into the game to back out now. Too many plans would have to be reworked if I replaced Tamura. I would have to be impressed to a level I have seldom been before, to change everything now. I wasn't going to say I wouldn't dare. Izuku tried before he sighed, hanging his head in defeat. Yes, master. I'm sure whoever you have found would be more than qualified to be my successor. But as I've said, I've invested too much into Tamura to abandon him. Besides, he chuckled, if you found someone you believe capable enough to outdo Tamura, I'm sure you've already made plans to use them. Izuku didn't verbally answer, but his silence as good as confirmed it. Nevertheless, don't worry about Tamura. If you can't bring yourself to trust him, then trust in my judgment instead. I haven't led you astray yet, have I? No, master, you haven't. I will trust in your wisdom. But he gulped and steeled his resolve. I will not know. I refuse to accept Tamura as your successor. Not until he grows into the potential you speak of. And until then I want nothing to do with him or his band of misfits. That's all I ask of you, to trust me and to give Tamura a chance to grow. You and your art will be kept far away from the conflict and heroes. Only your finished pieces will be put on display for the world to see. Is that agreeable? Yes, master, very much so. Good, I'll leave you to your work. As the screen flicked off, Izuku slumped into his chair and massaged his face with his hand, fighting off the sudden urge for a glass of alcohol, something to stave off the massive headache that was forming, which could be due to either Tamura or caffeine withdrawal. It was 50/50 at this point. It had been a while since he last had to come to one of these meetings, and he had forgotten how headache-inducing they could be. All for One would occasionally call for a meeting between himself, Izuku, and Tamura, usually about every other month. He had originally called it something along the lines of, well, now that Izuku thought about it, he couldn't remember what his master had originally said its purpose was. He had tuned it out 5 minutes into the first meeting when he realized the real purpose of them: to make him and Tamura actively not hate each other. On paper it makes total sense. Izuku is arguably All for One's most important follower, seeing as how he's responsible for getting his master to the point of actually being able to walk again after his fight with All Might, as well as the fact he's growing a giant army of Namu for All for One to do with as he pleases. Meanwhile, Tamura is the man's successor, and will continue All for One's work long into the future. Getting them to cooperate is a very worthwhile investment. In practice, however, Izuku sent another look down at the used-to-be table dust coating his feet, and grimaced. Now it wasn't as if he wouldn't work with Tamura. He did make the hands for him after all, creepy as they were, but working for Tamura Well, considering Tamura's bullshit during the meeting had driven Yujiko to consider bringing up Midoriya of all people to his master, should tell you his opinion on that. He groaned as his headache worsened. It wasn't like he was actually going to try to get his master to take the kid on as his new successor. It was just one of those thoughts that popped into the back of your head and floated around. Sure, I could go and spend the money I'm saving to replace my broken car on that new TV the commercial is talking about. But I'm not actually going to, because that would be stupid. Speaking of the kid, he should be finishing up a tour of the lab right about now. Yujiko had originally planned on showing the kid around the lab himself, but then All For One had called a meeting last second, and he was forced to leave a small recorded message for the kid and tell Yara she was in charge of the tour as he ran out the door. Wait, he blinked. Kid, plus tour, plus Yara in charge, plus my luck. His brows creased as worry began to gnaw at the back of his mind. He did tell her to ease the kid into everything slowly. Right, reign of sins, and these are the Namu. Yara concluded with a proud smile on her face, gesturing to the rows of large tubes that were lined up behind her, their bright green glow filling the room and blending almost seamlessly with her toxic green eyes. Aren't they great? Laboratory Overseer is the title given to those who help run and oversee the many laboratories, research stations, and storage facilities of Dr. Yujiko Daruma. The man is a genius, yes, but not even he could micromanage every detail of every research project of every building, so he didn't bother trying to. One lab head per facility, a person who is given free reign over everything in the building, so long as they follow any and all orders from Yujiko, willingly hand over control when it is deemed necessary. Absolutely under no circumstances withhold any critical information whatsoever from their weekly reports, don't interfere with other facilities' work, and arguably most importantly get your job done. So needless to say, it is an incredibly important position and one Yara takes great pride in, even if most in her situation wouldn't. See, everything about a lab head is directly tied to their work. Lab supplies, funding, workers, prestige, even how much you got in your paycheck was directly tied to what results you turned into Yujiko. On paper this works just fine. In practice, however, it makes a sort of feedback loop. The biggest labs with the best supplies that can focus on multiple projects at once get the most work done, which means they get more supplies, which means they get more assigned projects, which means they get more work done, and so on and so forth. Meanwhile, the smaller labs are left with few ways to compete. Is it a perfect system? No. Is it moral? Debatable. But a quick crunch of the numbers actually shows that by having his top labs, 6 or so labs constantly competing against one another, Yujiko gets more done faster this way than by playing socialism constructor, so he's unlikely to change it anytime soon. Which brings us back to Yara, the youngest, newest, and as such, most inexperienced lab head. Assigned to the newest, smallest, and least equipped lab, she had been an incredibly bright mind all throughout her career. Her not always standard way of looking at things let her solve problems that had others scratching their head. This, combined with her almost obsessive need for a better paycheck due to the various debts she had acquired over the years, let her climb through the ranks abnormally quickly. So when she, one of the top performing scientists at the time, was approached for yet another promotion, she happily jumped at the chance, not even bothering to read what the papers she was signing said, let alone the tiny bits scribbled at the bottom of each page. So when she first was told which lab she would be maintaining, she was devastated. How was she supposed to get anything done with this? It wasn't even built yet, for heaven's sake. Not to mention that because of the nature in which her position was paid, she wouldn't be getting any form of payment until the lab completed an assignment. And even then, with the size of the lab and its projected production output, her supposed promotion had actually cut her annual income, and by a not insignificant margin too. So, knowing this, she did what any person would do. She went home, pouted, ate ice cream, watched shitty rom-coms, and may or may not have pulled out some emergency booze and gotten drunk. A few mornings later, the bottles littering her apartment and her pounding headache really helped highlight her situation for her. Her new position had no income whatsoever until the lab was finished. When it was finished, she wouldn't have the income she did as a top scientist. She was basically a joke to her peers, and she couldn't go back due to all the information she was given when she was promoted. Oh, sure, she could have turned down the offer when she found out about her lab, but she was part of the team who had worked on the latest memory erasing Namu. She knew what that thing did to people. So with all this in mind, she set a goal to fix her situation. She would make her lab one of the top labs or die trying. Some might have called her brave, just plain stupid, or something in between. It didn't matter, her stubbornness paid off. She had won the lottery, the metaphorical golden goose, a royal flush in this game of poker, and if she played her cards right, it ensured a golden highway to the very top. Izuku Midori, Yujiko's hastily picked successor, had decided to not only wander directly into her lab, but also live far enough away from the other labs that daily transport to and from them was deemed more burdensome than simply upgrading her lab. It had barely been a few days and already new supplies, workers, and funding was pouring in, 2 new expansions to the lab were planned, and the list of things just kept growing. So when the boss had told her to take Green, her new favorite person, and give him a tour of the lab, her new favorite place, she made sure to go plus ultra and give the best, most detailed tour she could possibly show off. And these are the Namu. Yura proudly declared, her smile splitting her face. Aren't they great? Izuku stammered like a broken record, his face an odd shade from turning pale and going green at the same time. You okay, Green? What are those? They're the Namu. Yura cheered with a small hop, seemingly unaffected from having to repeat herself. And now that you're here, we're gonna get more. More. Yay, more. Her adrenaline high calmed down as she took in the kid's face. Are you okay? It's they're MO monsters. As he pointed weakly to the tanks, Yura's eyebrows furrowed in confusion, before shooting up in surprise when she realized what he meant. Boss hasn't told him anything. Now there was a lot of other thoughts that accompanied that, usually along the lines of shit, or fuck, or even the very diverse shit, fuck, shit. But that main bit was the most important. Why hasn't the boss told him? She stood, smiling blankly at the kid, belying no sign of the flood of panic that was bubbling up inside her. No, scratch that. Why hasn't the boss told me he didn't tell him? Wait, her smile faded. Could it be? Is this the boss way of telling me that my achievements and hard work have finally been acknowledged, only to come back in full force? Don't worry, boss. I'll show you your trust is well placed. Rain of sins. Shit. Pedestrians were roughly shoved to the side as a certain scientist dashed through the streets, cursing Kurogiri for not answering his phone, and panicking because of how much he did, in fact, not trust Yura with such a delicate situation. Rain of sins. Well, yes, she acknowledged the discolored Izuku with a confident chuckle from a certain perspective. I guess they could look a bit like monsters, couldn't they? But lucky for us, they're a lot cooler than something as boring as monsters. What do you mean? Well, Yura rocked back and forth on her feet. Take Bigfoot for example. At best, it's a man with a monkey quirk. At worst, it's a man in a fursuit. Ugh. She punctuated with an overdramatic yawn, smirking when she saw that despite the situation she had been able to draw out a small smile from Izuku, no matter how brief it may have been. These meanwhile have been genetically engineered by some of the brightest minds in the world, each holding a myriad of useful quirks. Wait, Izuku stopped her, his brain processing what she was saying. You gave these things quirks, and multiple of them. Yup, now you're getting why they're so cool. That's genius, impossible, scary, worrying, terrifying, but also beautiful at the same time. Amazing. Yura blinked, not expecting the answer at all as Izuku continued. Quirks are such a fascinating concept. They provide the basis for our entire society, but their inbuilt limitations provide a natural barrier that hinders the vast majority of the population. Even pro heroes struggle to grow once they run into the limit of their quirk, with Endeavor being a perfect example. If you could simply add another quirk on top of a person's natural one, you would not only be able to perfectly cover any of the original quirk's inherent weaknesses, but also, and thus Izuku began rambling to himself. Now normally this was where someone would snap him out of his thoughts, either directly or indirectly, but this wasn't a normal situation. Instead of a class full of people perfectly willing to laugh at him, he was alone in a room with Yura, who worked for Yujiko, and was very notably still scared of accidentally pissing his successor off. Now Yujiko would also occasionally ramble whenever he was deep in thought, and Yura had learned the hard way that he didn't enjoy being interrupted at all, so she let the kid ramble, and ramble, and ramble, and ramble, and then he rambled some more. He rambled on, and on, and on, and on, until finally a stray through lead him back to reality. How exactly do you make them? That's the million-dollar question now, isn't it? Yura chuckled, quickly recovering from zoning out during the kid's muttering. That information is usually saved for higher-ups, but since you're the boss new number 2, she smiled and continued, ignoring Izuku's weak denial. I'll make an exception. Okay, Yura, you've got one shot at this. You gotta convince the kid to stay, not scare him off. Convince him nothing's suspicious about the very suspicious monsters in the very suspicious lab tubes, all while sticking to the truth as much as possible. She gave herself a brief mental pep talk before crossing her fingers and beginning. The Namu are created using human bodies as a base, and injecting them with various quirks. The kid blinked. Yura blinked. Okay, rough start, but we can fix this. I just have to be smooth about it. Which turns them into monsters. But using people in experiments is obviously a very bad thing to do. She rushed out before the kid could draw up the worst, though true, case scenario. So because of this, she stammered, picking her words very carefully. One of our labs started experimenting with cloning technology. True, though it was completely unrelated to the Namu project. And after a big breakthrough in the project, We attempted to use one of the clones to make a Namo. Also true, but left unsaid was how it was horribly unsuccessful due to the fact they hadn't and to this day still haven't managed to make a clone that wasn't brain dead. And not a few months later we had a completed Namo. True yet again, but this was hardly the first Namu they'd made. And it was only successful because they pulled the plug on the clone Namu project and went back to normal bodies. And so, Utada. She waved back to the Namu, a pained smile on her face and a bead of sweat rolling down her forehead. Please buy it, 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 please buy it. Slowly she opened an eye to glance at the kid's reaction, and, wide eyes, slack-jawed, and absolutely starstruck, the kid had eaten it up. That's incredible. Thank you, Lady Luck. What are you going to use them for? Fuck you, Lady Luck. That's a good question. And one I'm glad you asked. Curse you, Jiko. And because it's such a good question I have an equally good answer. Thank you, Ara. You're capable of stringing different quirks into a giant super beast. You can find a perfectly reasonable explanation for having living weapons being held in an underground bunker, en masse. Well, if you think about it, their purpose is actually quite obvious, she said, hiding her panic with a cocky smirk. The Namu are adaptable to any environment. They can be given quirks to deal with basically any situation. They follow orders to the letter without complaining. Uara trailed off, wilting as it slowly descended into an awkward silence. This was due to one very simple reason. She had run out of BS, understanding that the risk of screwing the whole thing up was still very high, and that the cost of doing so would be even higher once the boss found out. Uara decided to employ a tactic that had helped her out of numerous situations in the past. Deflection. Well, what do you think they're for? Me. Yeah, you. You're Yujiko's successor. Consider this an intro test to see if your brain's up to the task. But I already took a test. I'm not hearing an answer. Green. Izuku, easily scared as ever, hopped back in panic, before beginning to mutter to himself, his mind frantically trying to find a concrete answer to a question that didn't have one. As this happened, Uara let out a sigh of relief. Sending the kid on a metaphorical wild goose chase might have been a tad mean, but she wouldn't be losing any sleep over it. Now she hadn't spent that much time with the kid, but she could already tell how his head worked. She had worked with plenty of others who worked the same way after all. All she had to do was get him hooked on a thought process, and the kid would play cat and mouse with his own thoughts, descending into a ramble of muttering that would quickly spiral off the original topic, leaving the question far behind them to be forgotten. So she coo. Workers. Uara blinked. That's what it is. Izuku beamed at her. You're going to use them as workers. Uara blinked again. When you think about it, it's absolutely brilliant. Izuku grinned as he continued his spiel, unaware of the dumbstruck expression on the labhead's face. If you layer one of them with multiple fire resistance quirks and a few speed and strength quirks, it would make it perfect for rescuing people from burning buildings. You can make them perfect for performing rescues in deep water, unstable caves, and various other highly specified fields that few heroes are suited for, and then rent them out to agencies in need of them. And that's only on the hero side of things. You could do the exact same thing for any labor-intensive field, like construction or farming. Uara blinked thrice, before responding in really the only way the situation called for. Yes, you are completely correct. Color her impressed. That wasn't a half-bad idea. In fact, the more she thought about it, the better it sounded. It would not only give them a very believable, and more importantly legal, excuse for the public if the Namu program ever got leaked, all while providing a nice source of revenue as a cherry on top. The youngest lab head scratched her chin in thought as she began to seriously turn over what the kid had suggested. One of the biggest concerns of the entire program was how if anything was leaked they had basically no way to avoid mass panic over the army of mindless monsters being hidden under the nation's nose. The kid's idea, while far from leak-proof, was leagues above their current plan, which could best be summed up as brutally smash any and all potential data leaks with overwhelming force and hope it never gets to that level. See, can I ask one more question? Uara turned back to the kid with a slight grimace. The kid's all-too-smart questions were quickly becoming her least favorite thing. Well, of course. She smiled while internally screaming no. No more questions. Save them for you, Jiko. I'm running out of bullshit to come up with. See, could if I join? Do you think it would be possible if? Green, I gotta speak up if you want anyone to answer your questions. He took a deep breath. Is it possible to give myself a quirk? Geez, Green, when I said speak up, I meant speak louder, not yell. Uara leaned back at the unexpected volume. The volume was unexpected. The question itself, however. Uara let out a huff. She really should have known the kid was going to ask that eventually, and the answer was simple, but also complicated. Yes, no, yes, and no. Yes, it was possible to give people quirks with the technology they had. The Namu existed for a reason. No, it was not safe, as the human brain was not made to handle more than one quirk, and the result of brute forcing it was evident in the Namu's animal-level intelligence. And while the result of forcing quirks into a quirkless brain was unknown, she didn't want to even think about what that would do to a brain that wasn't designed to handle any quirk. Yes, there was a way to do it safely, without harming the brain, but the only known way was with the use of Yujiko's boss Quirk, who the doctor would occasionally talk about in reverence, but none of the lab heads had ever seen, let alone met, the mystery man. No, using the quirk on Izuku would be very unlikely, as getting this man to use his quirk on, well, anything had so far been impossible. With every request made to research, use, observe, or even verify that the quirk actually exists, being immediately shot down by Yujiko. So she told him this, wincing as the kid's shoulders deflated the more she explained. Though she passed the second set of points off as rumors just to be safe. If her boss wanted to be all secretive about a subject, then she'd leave it to him to explain. Oh, sorry for asking. The answer should have been obvious, huh? He apologized, mumbling something about asking stupid questions under his breath. Yura watched as the brief flash of hope in the kid's eye withered and died in front of her, wincing as a memory of an exact replica of that expression, mirrored on a small brown-haired boy, flickered through her mind. Well, hold on. She rushed. Just because we can't do that right now doesn't mean we won't be able to in the future. Izuku perked up a bit at this. What do you mean? Well, that's what science is all about, right? Taking a problem and researching it. At first, the solution seems hopelessly out of your reach, but then you get to work and make a discovery. Sure, it might seem small and insignificant at first, but one small discovery will lead to the next, which leads to the next, and before you know it, your small discoveries have piled up and made a staircase to lead you right to the top. She gave a genuine smile. Sure, we can't safely give people quirks right now, but then again, we didn't know how to make cars in the past either. Or planes, or anything else we have, she concluded, waiting for Izuku's response. So she vainly tried to keep the conversation alive after realizing the kid wasn't going to respond, before falling into an uncomfortable silence. So it's possible. It was faint, barely a whisper in any other room. Without the eerie silence of the Namu storage room, she wouldn't have heard it at all, but that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that it was something. And more than that, it was the first real something Izuku had been able to grab onto since that doctor visit all that time ago. And so Izuku, eyes filled with a fire that burned brighter than it had in years, clenched his fist and made a declaration. A declaration to the world and to himself. I'll do it. I'll study under you and Dr. Yujiko. And I'll put my all into finding a way to give myself a quirk. Listen, nerd, I'm the only one from this school who's hero material, you got that? And if it's not possible, no, a quirkless person can't be, then I'll make it possible, and I'll become a hero. Hey Green, ready for your first day? Later. No. The red vial goes over. Later. Pay attention if you do it like this. Later. You know, kid, I knew you were going to surprise me one day. You are my successor after all, but I'll be honest. Before this moment, I didn't think it was possible to catch that on fire. Later. Izuku. Why yes, Dr. Yujiko. Stop stuttering, it's annoying. SSS sore. What did I just say? Later. Ooh, don't tell the boss. Sure. Later. Are you sure you want me working on the Namu? I mean, I only started here a few days ago. You'll mostly just be handing people stuff. Besides, what could go wrong? Later. The left one. No, the other left. Oh shit, oh foo. Later. What does doing your paperwork for you have to do with being a scientist? It's character building. Later. So the red vial goes. Yup, now you're getting it. Later. Unlike early genetic engineering techniques that randomly inserts genetic material into a host genome, genome editing targets the insertions to site speed. Green, stop muttering to yourself when you're reading. Sorry. Later. Hey, good job, Green. You did it. Later. Way to go, kid. Later. Not half bad, Green. Later. Keep up the good work. Later. You're doing great. Later. Izuku sighed as he dropped his head on the table, his forehead making a F-wump noise as it impacted the open book beneath him. It was an interesting book, covering the more exotic theories behind how quirks worked. But the book wasn't what had him sighing. It was the fact that tomorrow would mark 1 full month of him working at the lab, and quite frankly, he was exhausted. It had been quite an experience. On one hand, there were times when he got to learn things he had never imagined, and was allowed to truly let his mind run free. No one was really bothered by his muttering, and his more off-the-wall ideas had actually been encouraged. And then on the other hand, there were times like on his second day, where he almost burnt off his thumb. But generally speaking, Izuku could honestly say it had been an overall enjoyable experience. Now, not all of it was enjoyable, sure, especially that first week where he learned the hard way that no matter how smart he was, he had no idea how to operate in a lab environment. Izuku didn't walk in on the first day and suddenly start schooling highly studied scientists. At first he'd stumbled around, tripping on his own feet, and provided as much help as a human-sized sack of potatoes. But the trial by fire, as Izuku put it, while painful, had turned out for the better, and with time to get over his nerves and some personal tutoring from Izuku, he now was able to at least keep up with Urara and Co. while they worked. Izuku continued to muse over his time in the lab silently, until he was snapped out of his thoughts as Urara plopped down on the bench opposite from him with a happy smile, unceremoniously dropping her food tray onto the bland cafeteria table with a metallic bang. Urara had been extraordinarily helpful to Izuku since he started at the lab, though how much of that was her genuinely being nice to Izuku, and how much was just her trying to get on the good side of Izuku's successor, was still up in the air. "Hey Green, what you reading?" Urara asked, though more as a way to begin a conversation than actual curiosity. She got 2 bites into her meal before she registered the fact Izuku hadn't responded. Sending a questioning glance up from her food, she got, "I am currently reading Jonathan Gould's Extrapolated Theories on Quirk Usage written by Jonathan Gould." Urara simply raised an eyebrow in response, causing Izuku to blush in slight embarrassment. "Izuku told me the best way to stop stuttering is to clearly think out everything I say beforehand, so I can read it like a script." "Yeah." She nodded in understanding. "I understand now, Mr. Robot. You don't have to continue explaining." "Our robot." "Yay, no offense." Urara spoke through a bite of food, "but it makes you sound like a robot." Izuku blushed in embarrassment and tugged at the hem of his lab coat. Speaking of his lab coat, he had gotten it on his first day in the lab, where Izuku had proudly bestowed it upon him. Later that day he had offhandedly mentioned it was itchy to the doctor, who in turn glared at Urara, who admittedly hadn't actually done anything wrong this time. The coat hadn't been slightly itchy since. It was actually a bit creepy. "Anyway, here you go." "What's this?" Izuku questioned as he took a folded white bundle from Urara. "It's a high-quality medical face mask that doctors wear. With your tendency to catch chemicals on fire, boss wanted me to give one to you." Hey, that only happened once. Green, you sent an entire storage rack up in flames. Still only once. Desperate to change the topic, Izuku defaulted to a question that he'd been meaning to ask for a while now. "Why do we only have sporks?" Urara rolled her eyes, well aware of his obvious attempt to shift the conversation away from anything embarrassing she could tease him about, but still responded anyway. "They're cheaper, MMHM, easier to buy one utensil than 2. That's the only reason." "What? You got something against sporks?" "And no, it's the opposite actually." "Opposite?" The scientist smirked. "Now this sounds good." Well, Izuku stammered, well aware he had just talked himself directly into a corner. "When I was a kid." He trailed off into a mutter, nervously fiddling with the book in front of him. "Come on, Green. You gotta speak up if you want anyone to hear you." Urara snickered. When I was little, I thought they were cool because they were like SB poons with a quirk." To Urara's credit, she waited a few seconds to start laughing. "Hugh Quirk. That snicker, that's amazing." She took a moment to compose herself. So Green, chuckle, do you have any other random questions that will never benefit humanity?" Actually, Izuku, eager to steer the conversation a different way again, pulled out a notebook from his coat with Lab Analysis Vol 1 neatly written across the cover in permanent marker. The notebook, while still new, showed considerable wear from consistent use, and its cover had several stains and burns spread across its face. "I have been wondering about your quirk." "My quirk?" She raised an eyebrow. My quirk's useless." "You mean it doesn't help you with your work?" "No, I mean it's just useless in general." Urara sighed as Izuku tilted his head in confusion. Before he could prompt her, however, she brought up a gloved hand. She turned it around and stared at her covered palm a few moments before beginning. "My quirk," she said, "is completely useless in every way. It's not helpful for any job. It's not helpful for being a hero. It wouldn't even be helpful if I wanted to become a villain. It will never benefit anyone. And by its very nature," Urara let out a shaky sigh. "Oh, what the hell, you seem like a good kid, and you're gonna be sticking around. Might as well get it out of the way." She refocused on Izuku. "I'm gonna tell you a story, Green." Urara took a deep breath, and her eyes, normally filled with a strange mixture of cheerful mischievousness, seemed to almost sink as if a weight had been put on them. "When I was a small kid, I was what people call a late bloomer. I didn't have an extra joint in my toe, so I should develop one, but even after all my classmates found theirs, I still hadn't. But despite the occasional teasing, I considered myself a happy child, living happily with my family. I had my mom, my dad, and my little brother." She began with a wistful smile. "It was just the 4 of us. I didn't have any cousins, my parents both being single children, and my grandparents had died before I was born. We weren't well off, but we weren't poor either. We were right in the middle class, and we liked it that way. My parents had good enough jobs to be able to take us to eat out every Friday without worrying about the cost, but weren't high enough up to have to worry about important business meetings making us cancel our annual family trip. We were happy. We're happy, that is." Any semblance of a smile on her face died as she continued. "When I turned 11 years old, my mother got sick. Very sick. The doctors weren't sure what it was, and only really knew 3 things. 1. It wasn't infectious. 2. They didn't know how she got it because she didn't have it before. And 3. They knew nothing else about it. A few days after she checked into the hospital, I started having nightmares that she would die, and it freaked little me out. My mother, the stubborn woman she was, managed to convince the doctors that since the disease wasn't transmittable, I should be able to sleep with her to help my nightmares. That night she held me close and told me she wasn't going anywhere. She died the next day." Izuku paled. Her death hit my family hard, but it hit my father the hardest. It wasn't long until he started drinking and visiting a counselor for his bouts of depression. He never got abusive or negative, but he stopped spending as much time with me and my brother, afraid his washy-washy mental health would rub off on us. He was never the same. But with both my mom and dad out of the picture, the responsibility to look after my little brother, who was 5 at the time, fell on me. Fast forward a few years and things had stabilized. I had turned 14, and my dad had done well enough to get a raise that more or less covered the income we lost with my mom's old job. I was doing well in school and had decided to become a doctor. That way I could keep anyone else from losing their mom. It sounds stupid when I say it now, but back then I had my heart set on it. It was about this time when my dad started coughing. At first he laughed it off as a common cold, but as a month passed and it didn't subside, he finally relented and went to see a doctor, and then another. And another. And only when every doctor in the city had given him the same answer do I think he actually accepted what they told him. He had the same thing my mom had. Dad immediately started quarantining himself in his room, only leaving to go to work and to cook us food. When he was out of his room, he washed his hands profusely, started wearing a cheap doctor mask, and took to limiting physical contact with me and my brother. It was all for a good reason when I look back. The doctors may have said it wasn't transmittable, but he had still gotten it somehow, so he was doing everything he could to keep us from getting it. But as the years dragged on, his condition slowly got worse and worse, and with every hacking cough, he isolated himself more and more. The only possible silver lining we had was that it hadn't progressed nearly as fast as Mom's had. His increased isolation had the unintended side effect of making me almost completely responsible for raising my brother. By the time I turned 18, I was running the house by myself. I did the laundry, I was in charge of the groceries, I made dinner. I had even decided against college so I could get a job to help with finances. During these days, I would often complain to myself how much work I had on my plate. It was only later that year that I realized how much my dad had been helping me out. Sick, old, and on his deathbed, he had somehow steered me in the perfect way so that when my brother and I returned from his funeral on a stormy night, I was completely prepared to take care of the two of us. Life dragged on. And before I knew it, I had hit my 20th birthday and things were finally looking up. I had just gotten a raise and my brother's 14th birthday was right around the corner. I decided to buy a big cake for the two of us to celebrate. Money had always been tight with just myself working, so I hadn't been able to get either of us a real cake since my father died. And I just knew it'd make his day. When I walked home that evening, cake box in hand, I found myself genuinely hopeful for what the future would bring. I was happy, I was. Iwara sighed and lowered her face to rest in her hand, the story seeming to be physically draining to her, letting out a warmth-less chuckle with her next words. I was so stupid. I walked into my rundown house that day to find my brother collapsed on the floor. Once I rushed him to the hospital, the doctors didn't just confirm my worst fears. They told me something worse. My brother wasn't just sick, he had been sick for a long time, hiding it from me so I wouldn't worry. He was immediately hospitalized, and I was politely informed that he had slipped into a coma. And just like that, I was alone. No friends, no family. My only positive was that the doctors let me spend time with him during visiting hours, which I made a point of going and holding his hand at least once every day. Of course, just when I thought I had hit rock bottom, the medical bills started arriving. I had to start pulling double shifts and working extra time just to cover them. All the while, my brother's condition kept worsening, which means he needs more medicine and better doctors, both of which cost more money that I didn't have. So I started borrowing money. I took loans from banks. When they stopped, I went to loan sharks. When they stopped, I went to the Yakuza. And every day when I went to see my brother, he was doing worse and worse. That's how Izuku found me, sitting in the rain, tired, alone, and crying my eyes out on the side of the road. My apartment had kicked me out due to not being able to pay rent. The banks had frozen my account, and all the shady people I borrowed from were nipping at my heels for my long overdue payments. The doctor recognized my potential and used my situation to adopt me into his science program. He gave me a bunk in one of his biggest labs and an opportunity to prove myself, fully knowing I would work my ass off to climb my way up to better and better paying positions to handle my debt, providing him with an extremely motivated worker without him having to so much as lift a finger. Of course, this was also the time I gained access to the resources I needed to study my long overdue quirk. I reasoned that maybe, just maybe, if I could find a way to activate it, it would benefit my situation somehow. The scientist let out a hollow chuckle, wiping a bit of water from her right eye. The irony of all ironies. I wasn't a late bloomer. I had my quirk all along. My quirk, my wonderful power. She took a deep breath to steady herself. If I touch someone with the palm of my hand, I accelerate any disease they have. Hell, it's grown over the years, and now I can actually give people diseases I've accelerated before. And I wanted to become a doctor as a kid. She turned her attention away from Izuku and back to her food, stabbing at it. What a fucking joke. Izuku didn't know what to say in response. Hell, he didn't know what to say in general. Oh, you don't have to worry. Yuara's head suddenly shot up. Misinterpreting Izuku's silence, I wear gloves. See, I can't turn my quirk off, but it doesn't work without skin contact, so you're perfectly safe. And no, that's not it. It's just. Izuku fiddled with his lab coat. What happened to Wire? Oh, Yuara smiled with a sad sympathy. My brother still hasn't woken up, but he's stable nowadays. His condition stopped declining after I started wearing my gloves everywhere. She gave a sad laugh. Go figure. A somber silence fell upon the table as they ate. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it didn't feel right to talk. This continued until Yuara finished eating, and an alarm on her phone went off, signaling she needed to be somewhere. She collected her tray and began walking away before pausing and turning back to Izuku. Look, I didn't tell you all that for pity. It happened a long time ago and I'm over it all now, but shit, this is gonna come across real arrogant, isn't it? I know being quirkless has its own reasons for being shitty, but you shouldn't put yourself down about it so often, because even if you're quirkless, well, sometimes I wish I was born without mine. Yuara's story lingered in Izuku's head throughout the rest of the day. It lingered as he went home, it lingered as he ate dinner, and it lingered when he laid in bed that night. It stayed with him not just because of how powerful it was, but because it left him with a question to mull over. A question that went against everything he had been taught as a child, against everything preached to him by everyone he'd met, and against the very core of his childhood dreams. Yuara's quirk had caused tragedy for her and her entire family. And with the sheer volume of people in the world, there had to be others with quirks just as bad, if not worse, than hers. Maybe quirks weren't all they were cracked up to be. Maybe, just maybe, that by being born quirkless, he had dodged a bullet. These thoughts made him think. So he thought, and then he thought some more, and then a bit more. He thought a lot about the thoughts. Such thoughts included, how could he help these people? And could he even help these people? These thoughts prompted more thinking, which prompted more thoughts to be thought about the thoughts. Unfortunately, Izuku's habit of feeding his entire attention to a single line of thinking had the downside of turning his situational awareness down to a level barely above that of a rock's. Such situational awareness would have been very useful the next day in class, when he muttered and scribbled in his notebook, failing to notice a certain blonde whose glare burned into the back of Izuku's skull. Some people might think the words Bakugo and quiet should never be put in the same sentence without an is not between them. The evidence for this claim was many. The young pyromaniac was loud, boisterous, and made his presence known everywhere he went, not to mention his quirk wasn't exactly subtle either. However, this wasn't because he couldn't be quiet, and was instead tied to a much larger aspect of Bakugo as a whole. His ego. Simply put, Bakugo loved his ego. And his ego was boosted by people knowing he was there. Simple math, simple solution. But while Bakugo loved being the center of attention, he had long since accepted that if he was ever to be the #1 pro hero, he would also need to know how to act in a more discreet fashion. Of course, this didn't make the sight of him silently stalking down the street any more unnerving. Bakugo sneered as he was forced to quickly dart behind a wall to avoid being spotted. Just because he could be quiet didn't mean he liked doing it. Being forced to sneak around like a rat pissed him off, and, as per usual, it was all fucking Deku's fault. Last week it came to Bakugo's attention that the idiot still hadn't withdrawn his application to UA. At first Bakugo had simply ignored it. If the idiot couldn't understand that he wouldn't pass the entrance exam, that wasn't his issue. But with his attention drawn back to the quirkless nobody, well, it didn't fucking make sense. In the short amount of time Bakugo had stopped giving a shit about Deku, the idiot had changed his whole act. It wasn't anything big enough to be noticeable to the average passerby, but to Bakugo, who had been pestered by the idiot since they were kids, it stood out like a sore thumb. The idiot had stopped cowering to the sides of the hallways with his head tucked down like a turtle, instead weaving through the crowds of students like an actual fucking human. He had somehow managed to stop completely falling apart in a normal conversation, and had managed to tone down his stutter. He didn't pay anywhere as much attention to any laughs or jeers directed his way, acting like he was too absorbed in his fucking journal to hear them. And speaking of his stupid-ass journal, he had always been noting down things all the time, but recently he had turned the dial past 100% and had gone off the fucking deep end with the stupid thing. Hell, Bakugo couldn't think of a single time he had seen him put the damn thing down. The little shit was getting more confident. The UA entrance exam was creeping closer every day. And the one person who didn't have a snowball's chance in hell of actually passing was getting more fucking confident. Basic deductive reasoning concluded that he had found something that made him more sure he was gonna pass. But if something could give Deku a fucking shot at passing, and Bakugo, who was already set to dominate the exam, could get a hold of it, not even his mounting anger could keep a maniacal grin from his face as he imagined. Not just blowing past his opponents, but completely obliterating their scores. Of course, when he asked Deku nicely about it, Reed is yelled at and intimidated. The quirkless student screamed and bolted. So now Bakugo was doing what any normal person would do, stalking Deku until the idiot either A, led him to his goal, B, started muttering to himself and revealed his secret that way, or C, wandered into an alleyway or someplace where Bakugo could corner him without the idiot running like a complete wuss. Things were going smoothly, if a bit slow for Bakugo's taste, until Izuku sent a glance at his phone's clock, let out a quiet oh shit as his eyes widened, and bolted down the sidewalk like a madman. Bakugo followed in suit, letting out a curse and dashing after Izuku, continuing his cursing spree every time his target turned a corner, making him lose line of sight for a few seconds. And so for the next few minutes, passers-by were treated to a young teenage boy panicking as he sprinted through the street, closely followed by another much more pissed-off teenager chasing after him, while also swearing up a storm that would make any mother cry. This continued for quite a bit, each second a tick on the proverbial time bomb that was Bakugo's mounting anger. Thankfully, however, doomsday was avoided as, just before Bakugo snapped and used his quirk to fly ahead and tackle the idiot, Izuku promptly collapsed on the ground with a loud exclamation of, I quote, "I'm here." This sudden stop caused Bakugo to slam his feet down to slow himself, promptly go from max speed to 0, trip on said feet, and follow Izuku's example of nose diving into the cement. Shaking his head and blinking a few stars out of his vision, Bakugo pushed himself up with a scowl while Izuku let out a string of "I'm not late, I'm here on time," and similar phrases. Of course, said scowl morphed into a smirk once he actually registered what he had heard. Deku was here, meaning he had led Bakugo exactly where he wanted. Finally, after being forced to quietly follow and then chase Deku through the streets, his persistence would pay off. Only, what the fuck? It wasn't exactly what he was hoping for. In front of him wasn't some secret training ground. It wasn't a hero agency. It wasn't even a gym. It was, I came all the way out here for a weird-ass building in the rat's ass of fucking nowhere. Deku, you fucking idiot. Izuku, having realized Bakugo was present with his initial outburst, was too busy panicking to respond properly. The fact he had just led Bakugo of all people to the lab, despite all the warnings and precautions Yujiko had practically drilled into his brain, really didn't help. Just when I thought that maybe you had finally fucking gotten your shit together, you pull this bullshit. Bakugo seethed as he stormed towards Izuku, dragging him up by his shirt. What are you hiding? WH, what do you mean? I mean, what's making you so fucking cocky about the UA exam, shithead? Izuku, to his credit, took a moment to think about Bakugo's words before tilting his head and letting out a confused, huh. Bakugo, to not his credit, was Bakugo and took that in the way only Bakugo could. Obviously Deku was both ignoring him, playing dumb, and treating Bakugo like he was an idiot all at the same time. Aka, the insult of all insults. Who the fuck do you think you are, you little shit? Good question. Izuku blinked. Bakugo blinked. And then something grabbed the back of Bakugo's collar and dragged him off. Izuku, caught off guard, and completely unprepared for any form of counterattack, if this could even be called that, Bakugo tumbled backwards and stumbled about before steadying himself and sending a burning glare back towards Izuku. Standing in front of the teen was a short, pudgy man with a rather large mustache, and a pair of shitty goggles, at least in Bakugo's opinion. A very good question indeed, the man said with a cheer. Who do you think you are, going and assaulting one of my employees like that? And on my own private property, no less. While the young explosion quirk user was still trying to decide how exactly to respond to the sudden appearance of the man, Yujiko brought up a hand and fiddled with his goggles. A soft blue light flashed from them, so small and quick to dim that Bakugo dismissed it as a glare from the afternoon sun without thinking twice. Yujiko's eyes seemed to shift ever so slightly, looking in Bakugo's direction, but not actually at him, subtly moving back and forth almost as if he was reading something hanging in the air. Katsuki Bakugo, age 15, quirk type, emitter, quirk name, explosion, top marks in all his classes, applied to take the UA entrance exam 2 months ago, hasn't applied to anywhere else, and overall has forgotten the don't put all your eggs in one basket lesson to instead place his entire future on the, admittedly quite large, chance of him getting into UA. Yujiko's eyes settled back on Bakugo. Did I get all that right? Why, how the fuck did you get all that? How do you think I did? The scientist responded with a calmly raised eyebrow. Bakugo tore his eyes from Yujiko and glowered at Izuku, completely missing the doctor's smirk as he did so. Regardless of how or why or any other interrogative word, I do know. And I know a lot of other things too. Yujiko waited a half second for Bakugo to refocus on him before continuing. For instance, I know of UAS zero-tolerance policy for advanced misdemeanors, delinquency, and infractions, which, despite your personality, Yujiko adjusted his goggles. You've surprisingly only been marked for minor ones in the past. Very interesting, if I do say so myself. Yujiko continued to smirk as Bakugo fumed. I feel that I should make it clear any further actions against my business or employees can, and will, be reported with all necessary details and information to the proper authorities. Yujiko fiddled with his goggles again, causing the blue glare to disappear. The cards have been laid out before you, Mr. Bakugo. Do with them as you will. Bakugo opened his mouth to yell, clamped it shut, ground his teeth, clenched his fists, raised his head high, teach-head, and then stormed away with his hands in his pockets. Izuku watched his childhood friend walk away with wide eyes. Yujiko had just talked down Bakugo. Actually made him listen with words. Izuku hadn't thought that was possible. Oh right. He started sweating as his thoughts were drawn back to the situation. He had just led someone to the lab, one of the very few things Yujiko had told him to never do. So that was the Bakugo fellow you mentioned before? I must say I'm not very impressed. The doctor stroked his mustache as he began muttering to himself. It's a bit sad actually. Mr. Yujiko, that ego of his is going to be a problem for him in the future, especially with a quirk like that. He's like a bus with no driver. Doctor, one that's heading full speed towards a waterfall, with spikes at the bottom. Dynamite-covered spikes, doomed to kill everyone on board in a fiery, gruesome death. Mr. Yujiko, I really need better analogies. The scientist was dragged from his musings by a tug on his coat, causing him to turn to Izuku, who thankfully hadn't heard his mumbled comparison. I want to say. Spit it out, kid. Yujiko punctuated with a light chop on Izuku's head. A man of science doesn't have time to waste stuttering like a buffoon. I quote sorry sir. What for? What do you mean what for? I led him to the lab. Yujiko nodded in understanding. Well, it's a good thing this isn't the lab then. What? If you were going for the lab, then I'd say you were about, I don't know, a block or two off. Yujiko let out a chuckle, which is a bit understandable. Really, all these warehouses look the exact same. Wait, Izuku took a moment to think. If this isn't the lab, then why are you here? And what was all that about private property? Well, that's quite simple really. You're always early, and this time you weren't. The doctor nodded in confidence while Izuku's brows furrowed, trying to remember if that was actually true. He could have sworn he had made sure to be exactly on the dot to avoid a repeat of, but his thoughts were interrupted as Yujiko gave him a pat on the head and continued. Something very important must have happened to get in the way of science, so naturally I dispatched a team to help. Yujiko sighed. Unfortunately, all the lab's scientists were actually busy doing their jobs for once, and Yura was on break, and heaven forbid she actually do something productive on break. The doctor smirked as Izuku chucked a bit at that. And the property bit, well, that bit, that was just bullshit. Mr. Yujiko, what? It worked like a charm. Stop fussing. Yujiko waved his hand dismissively while turning and beginning the walk towards the lab. Wait. Turned his ear with a lazily raised eyebrow. Izuku swallowed. Thank you for helping me. Anytime, kid. Yujiko smiled. Mr. Yujiko. Besides, I don't much care for bullies, the doctor said with a cough. They're just cowards too afraid to actually be a villain. Turning back to the road, he began walking again. Now come on, we're way behind schedule. And I still have something really important to show you. Yes, sir. And so the apprentice sprinted after the master, unaware of the shapes that slithered through the shadows, watching after him as they had done since Yujiko named him his successor all that time ago. Izuku had long since grown accustomed to working on the various Namu at the lab. Granted, he was mainly just in charge of doing routine checkups, and anytime something actually exciting happened, he was delegated to the role of assistant, but that didn't really matter here. What did matter was the fact Izuku could tell what lay before him was different from all the other Namu. My successor. Behold my latest attempt at creating my magnum opus. My latest masterpiece. It was huge, an enormous hulking figure rivaling All Might in size. It was covered in a thick, tar-colored skin that bulged, and in some places ripped open, unable to contain the sheer volume of muscle mass the beast had. Its mouth was a demonic imitation of a bird's, a bony beak filled with giant spikes of teeth. And of course, as all Namu did, its brain stood proud and exposed for the world to see, two sickly, beady eyes staring into the void. It was monstrous. It was an affront to nature. It was amazing. Izuku whispered, his eyes wide in awe. Before him stood not just a creature, but a living testament to the power of science. The power to push beyond the natural laws that held the universe in place, to break and bend them to the will of man, to break free of the chains that had held down mankind, and become more than any human was ever meant to be. The power to make dreams into reality. The power to rewrite destiny. Izuku's laugh snapped and embarrassed Izuku out of his trance. Haha, amazing indeed, my young successor. And I see your attention went almost immediately to the finer details. Truly I have taught you well. Izuku blushed in embarrassment at being called out. While the Namu's appearance was impressive, the scientist in training had almost immediately beelined for the terminal to the left of the tube to get a look at its genetic makeup. And what a genetic makeup it was. A quirk for increased speed, a quirk for super strength, a quirk for shock absorption, a quirk for shock suppression, 3 different quirks for increased regeneration, not to mention the different mutation-type quirks that had been layered on top of one another. This thing was a monster. It's beautiful, isn't it? The doctor chuckled. Why, I'd say it's one of my best works of art to date. Impressive. Undoubtedly so. Beautiful. Art. Izuku had learned a lot from the good doctor, but one thing he hadn't picked up on was his teacher's sense of art, an obsession with creating his magnum opus. Though after seeing this, he definitely understood the man's reasoning for that last one. Izuku's awestruck smile mellowed as a stray thought ran through his head. What are you planning to do with this? Well, Izuku stuttered, now actually thinking about what he was saying. It's just that this could do a lot of damage if it got in the wrong hands, so I was wondering what you were planning on doing with it. Izuku scratched his mustache, suddenly a bit sheepish. Well, you see, I haven't really thought that far ahead. Dr. Izuku. What? It's not like I was going to rob a bank with it. Technically true. Well, but still. You have a living super weapon in your basement. If the heroes ever found out about this, Izuku paled as he thought of the consequences of that happening. Oh, relax, kid. My employees know how to keep my mouth shut, and only the higher-ups even know about these sorts of experiments. Izuku hummed as he started fiddling with the tube's terminal. Besides, heroes were part of my inspiration for this art piece anyway. What? Izuku questioned, honestly taken aback by the statement. Well, a while back, I had the unpleasant experience of being stuck in a room with a guy who just wouldn't shut up about how one day he's gonna be really strong and beat All Might. And he'd be the best, and blah, blah, blah. Long story short, it was very annoying. But it got me thinking, if I could make something that could go toe-to-toe with All Might of all people. His grin twisted into a warped smile. If one of my creations could fight the greatest hero on even ground, then it would have to be my greatest masterpiece. Izuku's grin weakened as he sighed. Of course, now that I've actually tried my hand at making the thing, all you have to do is pull up some of All Might's old videos and it becomes pretty obvious. As impressive as the Namu is, it's a long way from beating the guy. Well, Izuku gazed at the take with a new light. To think a little kid could inspire you to make this. Izuku opened his mouth to correct Izuku, paused, and really thought about the person he was talking about before continuing. I don't know how old he was, but from how he was acting, he couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 at most. This caused Izuku to start laughing like he had told the best joke in ages, but Izuku didn't pay him any mind as he wandered back to the tank. So you were made to fight All Might, huh? The quirkless student frowned as a picture of All Might's withered form waved through the back of his head, glancing at the terminal displaying the creature's list of quirks and physical capabilities. Izuku couldn't help but begin to worry as a startling conclusion began to form. Izuku was a lot closer than he thought. Why, you'd have to add a lot more quirks to beat All Might, he said instead, completely smooth, without any stutter at all. No sir, he had covered up that lie perfectly. Bah, add more quirks, he says, like it's that easy. Come on, kid, I thought I taught you better than that. Giving shit a quirk is a headache and a half, giving it multiple quirks is damn near impossible. And all the stress from trying to figure out how to do it is most likely the whole reason I lost my hair. Do I need to have a flash recap lesson on giving Namu quirks? And no sir, giving multiple quirks to a host is not difficult because of the quirk application process. Izuku began, ignoring Izuku's response. Adding a quirk to a host is almost laughably easy with the technology we have at the lab. And as long as the host's body and mind have been augmented to handle the strain of these quirks, it is theoretically possible to have a Namu with infinite quirks. But does that mean the process is easy? No, it doesn't. This is because the greatest challenge us scientists face when adding more than one quirk isn't the host's body or mind. It's not the application process, it's the quirks themselves. Quirks do not like one another. If 2 opposing quirks are placed in a host, then just as a body will reject organs it recognizes aren't from itself, as with organ transplants, the quirks will reject one another. This is a problem unsolved to this day, and one that remains the single biggest roadblock in our research. This is so important, in fact, that I will repeat it. This problem has not been solved. We have only managed to find ways to work around the issue so far, such as using quirks similar enough to each other that we can trick them into believing they are simply a byproduct of each other. The Namu in front of you is a perfect example of this, and is the absolute furthest we have been able to stretch this method. Every single one of its quirks is a physical-based quirk, and every one of its quirks simply adds on to something the creature already had. It already could heal itself, it already had muscles, it already had skin and bones which naturally absorb shock and protect the internal organs. It is only because of this and 2 mutation quirks that rope them even further together that the beast is not dead. And even then, its genetic structure is teetering on the edge of total self-collapse. So Izuku stopped pacing and whirled around to face his apprentice. If I decided I wanted to make it also be able to turn into water, fly, and shoot fireballs from its eyes, what would happen? The quirks would reject each other. The quirks reject each other. Izuku howled. The quirks would reject each other. The Namu would die. My hopes would die. All the resources spent on it would be wasted. It would be a huge financial loss. I would have to start all over again, and my mother would laugh at me for being a failure. Ignore that last part. Why, yes, sir. Izuku slumped against the wall, his anger at having his masterpiece basically called not good enough to his face, having been ranted away, and sighed as he lost himself in his thoughts. His master's quirk was a horrifically beautiful piece of art, one that had undoubtedly sped forward his research by decades. But even then, it hadn't solved the problem of quirk rejection. All for One, contrary to what its use implied, didn't steal someone's quirk, at least not in the way you would think. The quirk All for One bypassed the quirk rejection issue entirely by not taking quirks, but instead by copying them, expanding itself to imitate the quirk's abilities, and then destroying the initial quirk. The quirk was incredibly fascinating to study, as almost none of what it did worked as you would expect it to. For instance, the ability to gift a quirk to another isn't actually a power of the quirk. It's not an ability, but rather a built-in safety mechanism. If the wielder absorbs a quirk that is detrimental to their health, they can offload it onto another host in order to save themselves. Quite a few steps away from a gifting mechanism if Izuku could say so himself. As for why it couldn't just uncopy a bad quirk without having to dump it on someone else, Izuku believed it was just more evidence to his personal belief that nothing in the world was perfect. Even something like a nearly all-powerful quirk. It was sad, really. Not even All for One could solve the infinitely infuriating quirk rejection problem. And now his latest masterpiece, the one he could honestly say had the most potential of anything he had made in a long time, would never reach what it could be capable of, all because of a single problem. It was almost funny. Such potential held just out of his reach. If only he could figure out how to make quirks play nice, or, since that was unlikely to happen anytime soon, find a way to ignore it completely. Well, what if we just did something that didn't trigger the rejection? Exactly. He needed to find something that didn't wait a moment. What about things that aren't exactly quirks, like engineering him to have denser muscle mass, denser bones, or having claws? Those are things you can do just by basic DNA editing. The technology was around a long time, like even way before quirks were a thing, though it was experimental at the time, but with a little bit of an overhaul on the foundation, I'm sure we could. Izuku just stared at Izuku, stroking his chin while zoning out everything his successor in denial was saying, the first 2 sentences bouncing around his head like an overly obnoxious beach ball. Carefully, he walked over to the corner, where a small stool sat on its side. He pulled it upright, and gave it a little dust off. In the back of his mind he was mad at Yara for leaving things lying about in such an important room, but he didn't act on it. Instead, he slumped onto the stool and pinched the bridge of his nose. That would work. Izuku's annoyed huff finally caught the attention of Izuku, bringing him to stop his ramble. Why didn't I think of that before? I have been working on my art for decades. I was stuck on trying to string quirks together for years, and all this time I could've. Suddenly Izuku stood up, the motion knocking the stool over, back into its original position. Ew. He jammed a finger at Izuku. Follow. Of course the word follow might have been a bit misleading, as the doctor grabbed the collar of Izuku's coat, dragged him out the door, down several hallways, and to a vacant room, where he unceremoniously tossed him in. The scientist in training went to continue the single-word train with a what and a why, but Izuku was already ahead of him. Stay. And so Izuku, confused and just a tad bit scared, stayed. The room was almost completely identical to the one where he had taken Izuku's test, back what felt like forever ago. The walls were empty save for the cold steel they were made of, with the only things of note being the door, a wooden desk, a chair, and a ceiling light. Though it wasn't like this was some special room, just because it looked like the testing room. Very shortly after he started coming to the lab on a regular basis, Izuku had learned every office looked like this, even the one Izuku had commandeered when it became clear he was going to be spending a lot of time here. Don't get the wrong idea though. Just because all the rooms were the same didn't mean they were all the same. For instance, this room was empty, it was cold, stifling even. Meanwhile, Uara and Yujiko's offices had personality and an air of life. Yujiko's was just because he had a ton of empty coffee cups laying about everywhere, while Uara's was due to all the unfinished paperwork lying about, the occasional beer can, and the frickin' mini-fridge she somehow snuck past Yujiko, ironically hiding it underneath the stacks of paperwork Yujiko lectured her about picking up. Izuku was snapped from his thoughts as the door slid open and Yujiko walked in, pushing a cart full of books, boxes, and a tablet, slightly struggling due to its weight. There are 300 items on this cart, he grunted as he gave it a final shove into the room, and around another 500 on the tablet. These are all highly important documents that I've been meaning to see if I can use to further my own research. Unfortunately, I haven't had the time to go through them yet. He coughed as he dusted off his hands. Get those sorted and report back to me tomorrow. You're getting a raise, no scratch that. You're getting a promotion to whatever position gets you a private lab. But I've only been here for T2M months. Exactly. And you're already more competent than literally every other person I have in this building. The doctor smoothed out a few wrinkles in his coat and turned towards the door. Now if you'll excuse me, I need to set up an industry-wide meeting where I yell at everyone for failing to realize something so simple for so long. Wait, Dr. Yujiko W. You've got 2 weeks to get all that read, 3 days to compile any useful information, and then 4 more to hammer out a good idea, or 2 could be for a project, a study, or hell even a whole new field of science. I don't care as long as it's impressive. Then you're going to present said idea to a group of me and my top scientists. This is your big chance, kid. Yujiko sent a wide grin over his shoulder as the door closed behind him. Knock it out of the ballpark and prove him I was right about you. Izuku watched the door close, staring blankly as his brain tried to comprehend what all exactly had just happened. First, what? Second, what? There are 3 types of days that took place in the world. There were good days. There were bad days, and then there was a third, special type of day, the type of day Uara had the wonderful fortune to be having at the moment. The meh day. Not good, not bad, just a solid meh. She had arrived at work at 10 a.m. yesterday and had been working nonstop since then on wrapping up the project her team had been working on for the better part of the season, as well as trying to straighten out an entirely different project that had fallen on her head when another lab fell through on it. It was hours of nonstop, tedious work that seemed to grind out forever and made her want to rip out her hair. But it was done, and she'd never have to deal with it again. Now she could just go home and fall asleep. Bed, couch, it didn't really matter. The sweet serenade of blissful sleep called to her like a siren's lullaby, and any cushioned piece of furniture was fair game. Unfortunately, the world didn't seem to agree with her plans. So wait. Uara pinched the bridge of her nose as she processed the deluge of information that had just been dumped on her weary mind. You want me to? Do what exactly? Please help me make something good enough to impress Dr. Yujiko. Izuku practically begged the lab head, his face stricken with panic, though it could be argued that the amount was overblown considering the good doctor hadn't mentioned any penalties or punishments for failing his little quest. Miss Uara, please, I need help. No, Green, see, I get that. You need help, very easily understood, but ... Uara paused and waved her gloved hand about a bit, as if to summon the word she was trying to find from the hazy fumes her mind was running on. Why? Seeing that Izuku was about to go on another tangent, she held up her hand and clarified. I mean, come on, Green. Keeping you from blowing yourself up is a given, but actively helping you build stuff from the ground up, and on a privately assigned project at that. Yujiko would kill you for pushing your work onto other people. She blinked, or laugh and give you a raise. One of the two. Besides, you're smart and all. Shouldn't you give it a go by yourself? Hell, knowing you, you'd probably pull something out of nowhere and outdo yourself. Uara said this with a straight face, without betraying what she was really thinking. On one hand, helping Izuku would get her major brownie points with her future boss. On the other hand, she had just pulled an all-nighter, so she was more than probably too tired to give any decent ideas without a dozen or so holes in them, and her natural aversion to work was being magnified by her lack of sleep. On the other hand, she actually liked the kid, and having him at least try on his own at first before stepping in would probably be better for him in the long run. And on the other hand, Yujiko was unpredictable at the best of times, and getting involved when he was playing puppet master of all things just screamed bad idea. So, why? Well. Izuku shifted in place and scratched the back of his neck, as if approaching a topic he really didn't want to touch. Mumble. The mumbling up. Green, it's hard to have a conversation if you can't understand the person you're talking to. Izuku started to mumble again, only to be cut off by a glare from Uara. Steeling himself and taking a deep breath, he began again. The UA entrance exam is coming up, and I don't have time to prepare for both. The lab head didn't respond, staring blankly at Izuku with an equally blank face. Luckily, she had prepared for this type of situation beforehand. With a sigh, she ducked beneath her desk and started to dig through the large cabinet beneath it. The rustling sound of paper being pushed aside filled the air before swiftly being replaced with a swift click of a lock, a black door swinging open, a brief pause, and then the clinks of glass containers and aluminum cans jostling about. And alas, just a few seconds later, Yara emerged with her prize, a tall glass bottle with a light yellow drink inside, which she swiftly uncorked and took a long sip of. Homemade brew of lemonade, jacked up with a shit ton of caffeine, sugar, and just a dash of alcohol. She answered Izuku's unspoken question as she set the bottle down unceremoniously on top of a stack of papers. Caffeine to fuel her brain, sugar for the energy to act upon whatever she thought up, and alcohol because it's the liquid courage that the world runs on. Unfortunately, none of those things helped with frustration. Damn it, Green, I thought you were past the whole hero thing. It's been my dream my whole life. I can't give up on it now. Izuku's comeback was quick and absolutely burning, full of emotion, so it only fit that Yara's response would have just as much. Of course, there's an argument or two that deflating, dropping your head into your hands, and giving a huge sigh that screamed I give up in everything but words, could hardly be considered burning with emotion, but I digress. Look, Green, Yara mumbled through her hands, if you're really that hellbent on this, why don't you try taking some of Yujiko's advice to heart? He might be a bit off-kilter, but he's a genius in his field. I'm sure you've been around him long enough to have heard his favorite saying by now. Yara straightened her back and coughed a few times before continuing in what was probably the worst impression of said doctor anyone could manage. Work smarter, not harder. Work harder and you'll get more done in the short term, but tire out and fall behind in the long term. Work smarter, more efficiently, and you'll get more done both in the short and the long term. Work smarter, not harder. Izuku echoed. How am I supposed to apply that in this situation? Well, think about it. Your problem is that you have two different goals, but only enough time to prepare for one. Suwa. The lab head gestured for him to finish her sentence. Do something that will do both at the same time. Bingo. Yara confirmed with a finger gun blast, despite the fact she had been going for a drop the hero thing. And focus on Yujiko's project because that's more important, but she'd take what she could get. That way you can prepare for both, without having to split your focus between two projects. Izuku's eyebrows furrowed, before shooting up again as he realized the possibilities of what she was saying. Ideas flying though his mind like rain in a storm. Seeing that Yujiko's favorite employee was about to descend into one of his mumble tangents again, Yara coughed into her fist to catch his attention. You know, you were complaining about not having enough time to prepare for everything not 2 minutes ago. Shouldn't you be getting started like now? Yara watched with a twinge of guilt as Izuku bolted out of her office, frantically thanking her as he went. What she had told him was solid advice, no doubt about it. There was just one tiny little detail that she had taken the liberty to not mention about the reasoning he had drawn from it. This lab, and in turn every resource Izuku could get his hands on, was geared entirely towards biological and genetic research. There was no mecha suit he could build, no miracle toolkit he could patch together, nothing he could make with the materials at his disposal would help him pass any form of hero exam, especially if he's also trying to impress Yujiko at the same time. And since Yujiko had beaten the fact that jabbing himself with a quirk was a bad idea into his head at least once a day, the only things he could get that could possibly pass the exam were A, something Namu-related and thus something that was extraordinary banned on every level from being taken in public, or B, either some sort of fast-acting neurotoxin or a controlled virus of some kind, neither of the latter being any form of hero-esque stature that would work well in a hero test. What would happen is that time would tick down, Green would panic, and drop the hero notion to just focus on Yujiko's thing because it would arrive first. Then, even if Izuku wanted to apply to UA, he wouldn't have the time to prepare for anything, and he'd be forced to step down, wiping him of any outside ambition and permanently tying him to Yujiko's science empire. There was absolutely no way this could blow up in her face and wind up with Yujiko's successor enrolled in UA, the very place that heroes train to catch those like Yujiko and Yara. She'd have to lock down the virology branch labs for the next few weeks just to be safe. Yara could only sigh and take another swig from her drink, coming to the conclusion that if things kept going the way they were, she might wind up mysteriously falling ill and staying home for a time frame that ever so coincidentally lined up exactly with both the UA exam and Izuku's presentation. Work smarter, not harder. Two birds with one stone. The young scientist repeatedly mumbled to himself as he flipped yet another page. On paper it was a great idea. He only had time for one project but needed two things, so have that project be able to fit the requirements of both the things he needed. But there is one problem. Where was he going to find something like that? The answer came to him surprisingly quickly. The cart. Yujiko had told him to use it after all. And that, coupled with a crippling lack of other leads, led to the very obvious choice of action of read through the cart's contents until something interesting pops up. Unfortunately, Izuku had been spot on in his description of what it was. A bunch of important information that he wanted to see if any of it could be useful to his research, which implied both that it was all highly unorganized, and b, any interesting finds would be buried under a vast majority of useless info, which led him to his current situation, hand-digging through the cart's contents book by book, page by page, all while finding nothing for his troubles. This was his third day straight so far, and at the rate things were progressing it was looking like he'd be back tomorrow as well. Izuku scratched the back of his head as his frown deepened. Nothing he'd seen so far was anything close to what he needed. Oh sure, there was quite a bit of interesting information, and quite a lot of it would be very beneficial to his work in the lab, but outdated theories on genetic programming wouldn't exactly help him beat up robots. And boy was he glad he actually thought to look into said exam, or he would have wound up looking stupid with his original idea of just building a buttload of sleep darts. Closing the book he was currently holding with a snap, and tossing it over his shoulder to the ever-increasing pile in the corner, he reached absent-mindedly towards the cart when something caught his eye. Down at the bottom of the wheeled cart, only now revealed after so many items being removed, and still mostly hidden under the overflow of books and notepads, was a box. A battered, dented, partially crumpled cardboard box with more than a few stains to its name, that looked woefully out of place alongside the other, though very unorganized, reasonably well-kept books. Man, what the hell? It was worth a shot. Pulling the surprisingly heavy box off the cart, and out from under its book Esquire prison, Izuku gave it a brief once-over to make sure it hadn't been torn open before casually flipping open the box's top, only to be greeted with a virtual Pandora's box of content. In the box was a large collection of manila folders, nearly all of them having the words classified or restricted access printed on the front of them, some practically falling apart with age, all of them bursting with papers and graphs. There were stacks of papers that had very obviously been sent through multiple shredders in the past, painstakingly stitched back together, and considering there were more than a few that were half-burnt, it was very clear someone had wanted these gone. Hell, there were even honest-to-goodness floppy disks, just sitting there. No one had used tech like that since way before Quirks. And just to top it off, none of it was in Japanese. Interest officially peaked. The young scientist began pulling everything out and organizing it into manageable piles. Quickly, two different major categories began to form. The ones he could kind of understand, and those he had no idea where to even begin. Okay, so these are in English. Izuku placed a slightly moldy folder to his left, filled with the English language he had learnt the basics of in school, before picking up a paper filled with something very much not English but these. What are, wait, he blinked, is this? Russian? Sure enough, the box had been filled with an almost perfect split between English and Russian with a good bit of German scattered about, which really only raised more questions than answers. Having now pulled everything out, Izuku sat back with a huff, going over everything a second time, and slowly but surely the gears began to turn. The age of everything. The obvious attempts to destroy many of the files by either shredding them or by fire. The really old tech and floppy disks, the large classified stamps. These are pre-Quirk government files, he said numbly as it all clicked together. There was a good 15 seconds of silence before Izuku dropped his head into his hands and let out a miserable groan. Okay, first off, how the hell did Izuku manage to get any of this? Actually no, scratch that, he didn't want to know. There was no way in hell it was anyway even remotely legal. He should shove everything back into the box and pretend he never even saw it, maybe even burn it to save everyone the headache. Boot. Izuku cursed his curiosity as he reached for the more important-looking files and pulled out his phone to help translate. Quickly it became apparent a reasonable chunk of it was completely useless. Whether due to the paper being too far damaged or simply because the information it contained was of no value, the effect was the same. Tossing aside yet another report of political corruption and potential treason, Izuku absent-mindedly picked up a binder sitting off to his left, flipping it over a few times to figure out which side was the front. He gave an interested yet disappointed him when he figured out the binder didn't have the secrets of the universe printed neatly in bold letters on the first page, but acted as a timeline of sorts, one that detailed classified activities over a period of years. Already resigned that this most likely wouldn't hold anything of value, he sighed and began to skip through it half-heartedly. Blah, 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 more political corruption. Useless, useless, useless. Quirks start appearing. Blah, blah. Genetic experimentation to understand where quirks came from is fruitless, interesting, but still useless for his current situation. Blah, blah. Numbers start increasing. General misuse of quirk powers. Mass panic. Blah, blah. Military crackdown. Riots. Skip some pages. Governmental collapse. Anarchy. Useless, useless. Silver order. Anti-quirk extremists. Blah, blah, blah. In order to better combat the emergence of Omega properties, I put forward the motion to begin ... Wait. Doing a double take and rereading the small cluster of paragraphs he had almost just completely skimmed over, Izuku's perseverance paid off, and his eyes widened like something out of a cartoon. Quickly he began shuffling through the mounds of paper like you would a puzzle box, pulling out anything that seemed to have any sort of connection to what the binder detailed. Fumbling out his new journal from the inside pocket of his lab coat, Izuku began hastily jotting down bits of information without any coherent organization. And as he sorted through the various documents, each paper acting like a piece to some deformed jigsaw puzzle with his own notes to fill in the gaps, a grin slowly grew across his face. Quirks, despite how common they are in the general populace, were an extraordinarily dangerous thing, and there was a definitive reason that so very, very few people in history had ever been born with two, and why there had never been a case of someone with more than that. A reason Ujiko had seen fit to show Izuku firsthand. The stress exerted on the human brain by even a single quirk is extraordinary, and adding more just stacks more on top, magnifying the issue to an extreme degree. Ujiko had taken Izuku to one of his larger facilities to observe the final steps in the Namu creation process. The young boy had watched, horrified, as the brain, unable to naturally survive the strain put upon it, had been injected with various chemicals to stay operational, causing it to balloon outward. At the same time, the tissue around the top of the head began to decay, dying at an alarming rate and flaking off like nightmarish snowflakes. This allowed the engorged organ to burst through the weakened skull, leaving the now finished Namu with its signature exposed brain. Izuku had run out of the room as soon as the operation was complete, and between frantic breaths had asked his teacher why would they use chemicals like that if they had such a horrific effect. Ujiko's response had been calm, simple, and horrifyingly enlightening. They didn't. For all the large needles and menacing tubes, the injections to the brain had only been to keep the organ from dying under the strain. The swelling, the tissue decay, all of that was a direct result from putting an unnatural amount of quirks into the body. And their correlating strain on the brain, the swelling in particular, was simply the body attempting to adapt in order to handle the stress it was put under. The demonstration had been Ujiko's brilliant way of convincing his protege to not attempt to give himself a quirk without direct supervision. After Izuku had refused to stop bringing the topic up in conversations for the first few weeks, needless to say, it had worked very well. However, Izuku's grin sharpened to have an odd gleam as the young scientist's mind flashed back to Ujiko's personal Namu, and the suggestion he had given the old doctor during their meeting. Genetic manipulation didn't just pertain to quirks now, did it? Izuku's pen was practically flying as it streaked across the papers haphazardly scattered around him. So absorbed in his work was he, that he didn't even bat an eye when one of the lights flickered and died, dousing half the room in darkness. Nor did he notice when his elbow knocked one of the various papers off the table, silently fluttering to the ground in the shadow-covered room like some wannabe fallen angel. It landed with a slight spin to reveal a mess of Izuku's hastily written gibberish, titled with bold, neatly printed words that stood out amongst the frantic scribble that covered its face. Project Neptune, the Super Soldier Experiment, Rain of Sins. Thunder crashed as the night sky lit itself for but a fleeting moment, only to be enveloped once again by the weave of black hanging overhead. Thick blankets of rain fell from the heavens and crashed upon the earthly city, drowning out all noise save for the wind that it rode upon. A crack split the air once again, as lightning rent the sky in two, and upon the highest of skyscrapers, teetering on the edge, the pale light illuminated the distinctive outline of a man. The darkness that cashed back down upon the world once the lightning vanished made most of the man's features indistinguishable, save for the large lab coat he wore, fluttering in the wind and completely drenched by the rain. "You know," he began, "I find storms like this to be such an interesting irony. I mean," he gestured to the sprawling city below him, "humans seem to bend the world around them almost instinctively. We carve holes through mountains for roads, we burn down forests for space, we bridge over rivers for convenience, and we build our cities on every corner of every continent. We act as if we're the masters of our planet, owner of all, and beholden to no one. But storms like this..." The man let out a chuckle as he raised his hands, turning his palms up to catch the rain pouring down around him. "When a storm like this comes around, we can't do anything about it. Oh sure, we build our barricades to keep from flooding and huddle in our houses to stay dry, but that's not really doing something, that's reactive, not proactive." He scoffed. "The point is that, despite all our boasting and smugness, we can't stop a storm from happening. You can level a mountain range, but you can't blow up a storm. No sword, no gun, no tank, no plane, no weapon humanity has ever made in its long history of trying to kill itself can stop a storm from hitting a city. All that we can do is either get out of the way or hide inside. Which leaves us with you." The man laughed as a worryingly close bolt of lightning struck, rocking the building. The butt end of a cosmic joke by the world itself. Your gift that you take such pride in. The ability to see someone's future lets you see the storms beyond the horizon, but that's it, that's all it does. You have no secret weapon, no plane, no tank, no gun, hell you don't even have a sword, and because you have no proactive choices, all you have left are reactive ones. You can either get out of the storm's way, or huddle inside to stay dry. The man cackled as he swayed dangerously near the ledge. "You see that all might dies. You see what I do when I come. You see so many things, so many storms swirling just out of sight, and I can't wait. I can't wait for them to arrive. And to see what you'll do. Will you run or will you cower and hide? Because if you think you can fight a storm without even a sword, well," he chuckled, "then you must be dreaming. And if that's the case, here's some advice. Wake up." Night-Eye jerked awake to a crash of thunder. "Just a dream," he grunted to himself as he pinched the bridge of his nose. Taking a moment to collect himself, he blinked wearily at his desk as his memory came back to him. "That's right," he mused grumpily to himself as he eyed the various papers stacked to organized piles about his desk. The Yakuza he had been monitoring had become more and more active recently, meaning more work and all-nighters on his end. But the Yakuza wouldn't have been able to overwork him this bad even if they tried. No, the blame for any recent gray hairs could be placed solely on something much smaller, fluffier, and infinitely more frustrating at times. The future sight hero scoffed as he read through Nezu's reply letter, assuring him that UA security was as tight as it could be, and that he would funnel any reports of a villain that matched the description Night-Eye had given him directly to his agency. The foresight hero could only give a heavy sigh as a disturbing sense of déjà vu settled over him. This was almost exactly what had happened between him and Nezu when he first got his vision of All Might's death. The principal would smile and nod his head, giving some help here and there when he could spare it, and assure that if anything came up he was only a call away, that he trusted Night-Eye. But he didn't believe him. Now it wasn't really Nezu's fault. It just so happened the principal worked on a slightly different branch of logic than most people due to his quirk. High Spec let the little mouse bear see the world through a filter of pure logic. Every action had both a consequence as well as a reason for happening. And the world at large was like a vast array of interconnected strings of dominoes. Each domino that fell was itself an action, the consequence of the domino before it, and the reason for the one after it. Given a big enough picture, Nezu could follow the dominoes along and perfectly predict the way things would turn out in any given situation, not because he used some voodoo black magic, but because to him it made logical sense. Thing X happened because thing Y happened all the way back here, and if he prevents thing Z from happening, then situation L will never occur. But this black and white view of happens or doesn't happen comes with an annoying byproduct. If presented with something that didn't make logical sense, didn't fit into his string of dominoes, the principal tended to not take it very seriously. Which is why Night-Eye, whose quirk tended to not care about logic, found him so infuriating to work with at times. He had gone to Nezu the day after his vision of the man in the lab coat. But as he paced about the principal's office, explaining in detail what he saw, what could happen, what would happen, Nezu had just sat there nodding along with a smile on his face, and a knowing, sympathetic look in his eyes, the same look you would expect from a father listening to his son tell him he was going to be the first astronaut to land on the sun. So Nezu would make some promises, buff up security, and maybe toss him a bone or two if something came up. But it wasn't commitment, no, it was appeasement, doing just enough so Night-Eye couldn't complain and nothing more. Nezu was just now starting to take his warning about All Might seriously due to his dwindling time limit. 2 years after he had first given 2 years of time they could have been preparing, gone. And it was happening again, but just like last time, there was very little he could do about it. Sure, he could work on it by himself, but he lacked the resources, contacts, and diplomatic weight that Nezu had through UA. Compared to that, what could a former sidekick of the fading top hero bring to the table? Which left him here, sifting through files of petty Yakuza activity while everything creeped closer, and there was damn near nothing he could do about it. But that didn't mean he wouldn't try. He was too stubborn not to. Reign of Sins. Izuku was pacing. It was a bad habit of his whenever he got particularly lost in thought. Add on his occasional muttering and you have a picture-perfect start for a Mad Doctor character. Well, at least that's what his colleagues would joke about way back at the start of his career. He had told them off for stereotyping, but looking back and considering where he was now, well, Izuku's train of thought was interrupted when the very person he had been waiting for the past half hour to arrive finally decided to bother turning the corner. "Izuku," he shouted, causing the boy to jump. "You're late." "Late? Well, no I'm not. I made sure to get here exactly when you told me to be here by." "Bah." Yujiko made a dismissive motion with his hand, waving away the point Izuku had made. Early is on time is late, and late is unacceptable. Now I know you're scared, he said as he grabbed Izuku by the shoulders. But listen to me. You are ready for this. You can do this. Believe in yourself not because you have some special talent but because you've worked for it. Why, you've worked almost as much as me, and that is a feat impressive beyond words, so hear me now. There is absolutely no way you'll mess this up. He gave a wide smile. You're gonna do great, kid. Izuku couldn't help but stand a little straighter. Well, you'll most likely do great. Yujiko let go of Izuku and moved his hands as if to weigh his options. I mean, due to the theory of probability, there's technically no such thing as an absolute. So yes, you can do it. But there's also always a small chance that you'll totally mess everything up. So you should always remember to have a backup plan because no matter what you do, that chance, no matter how small, will always be there, and you'll never be able to get rid of it. Yujiko nodded sagely to himself, proud of catching that teaching opportunity to impart some of his favorite wisdom upon his protege, completely missing how said protege had lost just about any bit of standing straighter he had acquired. But really, you shouldn't worry, I've done speeches and presentation stuff in front of these guys before, and they're a fantastic audience. Oh, really? Yup, he said, popping the pea. It goes about the same way every time I stand up and talk. They sit there nodding along, then, when I finish, they all clap and give various praises. It's as easy as apple pie is American. Is it really that simple? A small smile worked onto Izuku's face as his head peeked up. Of course it is. Dr. Yujiko wouldn't give me something I couldn't do. I've just been overthinking everything. I can do this. Although, Yujiko brought up a hand to stroke his mustache. I am the one who writes their paychecks, and I did fire the last guy who kept trying to go against the outline I presented. He hummed in thought. So now that I think about it, it makes a lot more sense that they'd act so docile. But you don't have any of that, do you? You're not their boss, you don't pay them, and even if they did say something, what could you do? In fact, now that I'm thinking about it, actually, they probably hate your guts. Yujiko hummed as he got lost in his thoughts. I mean, think about it. These are guys who have spent literally their whole lives trying to climb up the ladder, and then I go and pull you in from out of nowhere, completely undermining all their work. Like, they've gotta despise you. By the time he finished, Izuku was as still as a stone statue, and about as pale as one too. Yujiko, on the other hand, gave a huh and continued to stare out into space for a few seconds before blinking a few times and bringing his train of thought back into the real world. What was I talking about again? Oh yes, Izuku. Why yes, my most important advice that I can give. He grasped his successor by his shoulders and stared directly into his eyes. Don't fail. And with that he spun around, stuffed his hands in his pockets, marched down the hallway and around the corner. Izuku blinked. He blinked again. Was that it? Don't fail. He repeated Yujiko's last bit of advice to himself. Great advice. He told himself, less to remember and more to convince himself that it somehow classified as actual advice. Oh, who was he kidding? He was gonna die. Oh, and also, Yujiko poked his head out from around the corner, pausing to ignore Izuku's yelp of surprise. Stop stuttering. You're just gonna wind up pissing people off and making a fool of yourself. If you're going to be a true man of science, you need to present your art to the world with a clear, confident voice. So no more stuttering. Izuku sighed and slumped into the wall as Yujiko ducked out of sight. Oh, and remember, only to immediately jump back to attention as the mad doctor appeared yet again. The best way to impress someone is to make your statement big, loud, and most importantly, memorable. And with that, Yujiko nodded and walked away for the final time, a satisfied smile on his face. Truly, he had just done a good thing, a net positive for the world at large. His steps slowed as a thought crossed his mind. Was this how heroes felt when they did good things? He closed his eyes as a smile graced his face. But this wasn't one of his normal smiles. No, it wasn't maniacal. It wasn't from laughing, or from joy, or even forced. No, it was a smile of contentedness. If this was what doing good things felt like, then he could say that maybe, just maybe, he understood the good guys just a little bit better. And so he stood there, just letting the warm feeling of content wash over him. Yuara, who had been standing in a nearby doorway, croaked. Was that the first time you've done a motivational speech? She asked with a blank smile and just the tiniest twitch in her left eye. Why, yes it was. Yujiko pruned with pride. I had to improvise a few parts there, but I personally think it turned out really well towards the end there, don't you? Marching off before she could respond, the doctor completely missed the worried look on her face as she hurried after him. He had full faith that Izuku could do this, and nothing could convince him otherwise. Rain of sins. Izuku couldn't do this. He knew it when he woke up that morning. He knew it when we entered the largest lab Yujiko had in his underground science empire. He knew it when he walked up the incredibly long set of stairs, avoiding the elevator just to delay it a bit longer. And he knew it for sure standing in front of a group of people glaring at him with enough heat to melt steel. Don't fail, Yujiko had said, but unfortunately, that didn't really help in the current situation. The room was large, but not overly so, about the size of a small movie theater. Izuku himself stood on a neatly polished wooden stage, with several spotlights shining directly down upon him. In front of the quirkless boy were exactly 25 rows of seats, each helpfully labeled with a number emblazoned on the wall next to it. Each row was slightly elevated to the one that came before it, with a set of crimson rugged stairs cutting through the middle. These seats, however, despite being capable of holding a little over 200 people, sat completely empty. Instead, Izuku's audience sat at the very back. At the end of the room, elevated above the rest of the room by a 10-foot wall, sat a long curved desk, made of a rich dark wood and highlighted with what appeared to be strips of gold. The entire thing probably cost more than the apartment building Izuku lived in. But if the desk was intimidating, the people sitting at it were another matter entirely. In the very middle Yujiko sat, fingers linked in front of his face, with his goggles tilted at just the right angle so they reflected the light with an eerie white glow, masking any emotions he might have portrayed otherwise. On either side of him sat 5 people, totaling 10 in all. Some wore neatly fitted lab coats personalized to give them an air of authority, others opted out of lab coats entirely, wearing luxurious suits and dresses. Some wore armbands while others had insignias sewn directly into their fabric. But even without that, it was quite obvious who they all were. These were Yujiko's top lab heads, the ones who completed the vast majority of the doctor's work and research, and in return had been given vast amounts of wealth and authority in his science imperium. Izuku gulped. Although the control they wielded was limited to the labs and facilities they owned, their influence was practically everywhere, best demonstrated by the fact each and every one of them had a direct line of access to Yujiko at all times, and not just to his assistant, but the ability to make a call the doctor himself at any time and for any reason. Needless to say, they were the people Izuku would very much like to avoid pissing off. Unfortunately, if the way they glared at him was any indication, the majority of them already hated them and he hadn't even done anything yet. The reception wasn't all negative though. Off to the side, sitting on a chair dragged in from a floor below and looking hilariously out of place next to the fancy suits of the top brass, sat Uara, who Yujiko had dragged along to give Izuku moral support. She gave him a weak smile and a shaky thumbs up. Very inspiring. What wasn't inspiring was the giant screen that loomed behind him and over his head. It was obviously supposed to be used for the presenter's visuals so the faraway audience could actually see what they were talking about. Now, the reason this was uninspiring was the fact that if he had known about said screen, he would have gladly prepared for it. Instead, he stood lamely beside the easel he had spent half an hour dragging up the stairwell, filled with painstakingly hand-drawn graphs and charts. Charts that, due to the distance between him and his audience, probably couldn't even be seen clearly. It was obvious that this place was supposed to be used for very important announcements, but it was equally obvious that no matter how important it may be, Yujiko was Yujiko, and had proceeded to not register this fact at all but instead go ooh, shiny and hijack it for Izuku's presentation without a second thought. Izuku gulped and sent a hesitant glance towards his audience only to immediately break eye contact under the harsh glares they were sending his way. Don't fail, he repeated in his head. Panicking wouldn't help him here. Yujiko was expecting him to do well, and having a panic attack on stage most likely didn't classify as doing well. Don't fail, he clenched his fists, and forced himself to take a deep breath to try and calm down. Don't fail, he could do this. Don't fail, okay, maybe he couldn't, but that didn't change the fact that he had to. Don't fail, so he might as well do his best. He stood up as straight as he could and locked eyes with the burning, judgmental glares. Hello everyone. Only to flinch when his voice cracked horribly on the first word. The only reaction from the audience was Uara letting her head drop into her hands with a sob. He wasn't exactly a public speaker, okay. Tuning his voice down so he wasn't yelling, and clamping down on his stutter with as much force as possible, he started again. Hello everyone, I'm here to give a speech, a presentation. To talk to you about a potential, experimental procedure I developed to increase the efficiency of Namu production. I mean of the Namu produced from the Namu production. Coughing awkwardly, Izuku shifted to something that couldn't stutter on words, his trusty easel. Grabbing the first slide, a blank poster-sized sheet with only his name lamely scrawled across the front, he moved it to the back of the easel, revealing the next slide in the set. This one was filled with just about as many charts and graphs as he could fit on it, with quite a few sticky notes sticking off it because he ran out of room and needed to add more. This is Project Neptune. He bit his tongue, berating himself for the stutter. It's an experimental procedure applied to the bee bodies before the main Namu procedure. It uses DNA splicing and a combination of serums that, if implemented correctly, should at least in theory increase any Namu's base COG capability by at least 20% at the lowest. and up to 63% at the highest. This is possible because, he quickly patted down the lab coat he was wearing before pulling out a pointer stick. B, because it increases things such as muscle fiber concentration, bone density, R, red blood cell count, and such. He pointed to the graph situated on the topmost left of the sheet. Y, you can clearly see here that quirks use these base values as a multiplier and not a linear add-on. His audience leaned forward and squinted in an attempt to see what he was pointing to on the easel, while Izuku made his first visible reaction since the presentation started by calmly tapping the side of his goggles. What? Was that supposed to be some kind of signal? A message? What does a single dot mean in Morse code? Pushing past the anxiety-riddled questions swirling through his head, Izuku turned back to his easel, finding comfort in the swaths of numbers he could read off to sound like he knew how to hold a speech. Rain of sins. So let me get this straight. This was not good. You want us to dump who knows how much time and money into this experiment of yours without any proof that it will even work. This was really not good. Well, if you look at the numbers, numbers are one thing, results are another. Things had been going well, not good, but not terrible for Izuku. He had managed to bumble his way through the rest of his presentation without making too much of a fool of himself, managing to mask any stuttering by using a deluge of numerical values instead of words. But just when things seemed to be looking up, and by that of course I mean he had run out of slides, said the end, and was about to run out the door, his oh-so-wonderful audience had started doing the one thing he had prayed they wouldn't do. They started talking and asking questions that he couldn't just dump numbers on until they went away. I'm starting to genuinely wonder why you even called this meeting in the first place. Oh, and that was another thing. Apparently they all thought that he had Izuku call this meeting. He would laugh at the irony if he weren't too busy having a panic attack. The man sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose in frustration as his fellows nodded along in agreement. And really, even if it does work, why even bother? If we want a stronger than usual Namo, we can just give it a strength quirk. But Q quirk rejection. Quirk rejection is annoying. But strength quirks are a dime a dozen. The sheer volume of them that we have on record almost guarantees we'll be able to find a small one that won't destabilize everything. But WY. I happen to agree with Dr. Rome on this. A woman at the far end of the table said, your idea is reckless at best and just plain dangerous at worst. She sneered. Honestly, this whole thing is just brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Izuku shouted with a laugh as he stood from his seat. Tell me, my boy, will this treatment work as an improvement for all quirks or just physical ones? Well, Izuku stuttered, caught off guard by the changing subject. Obviously, there are a few quirks like invisibility that it wouldn't affect, but it should have a noticeable increase in just about everything else. Wonderful. Izuku clapped. This right here is why I made you my successor. Hold up some of those slides again. I'm interested in some of those calculations actually. No, wait, never mind. I'll just come down there and look at them myself. That'll be much more efficient. What followed was a blur of laughing and shouting from Izuku, and grumbling and complaints from the lab heads, who, due to Izuku having spoken up, couldn't really say anything against his proposal anymore. With his adrenaline fading off, and his mental train in a twist, Izuku's memories of what followed immediately afterwards were a bit fuzzy, but there was one specific part that stuck out to him. My boy, here's a word of advice. Izuku laughed as he led Izuku out of the building. When trying to coin something to a group of people, you only ever really need to bother convincing the most important person in the room. And here's a secret to go with that advice. The mad doctor chuckled as he pat Izuku on the shoulder. You already had me on your side before you even got on that stage. Rain of sins. Yura hummed drowsily as she walked down the stairs to her lab's lower levels, her cup of coffee occasionally swaying a bit too far to either side for any onlooker's comfort. It had been roughly a month since Izuku's big presentation, and subsequent reveal from Izuku that it apparently had been his way of trying to, what was it again, break Green's confidence problem. She didn't really know, to be honest. Izuku had explained it to her in some grand speech afterwards. But what he said didn't really make all that much sense to her, considering Green turning green on stage didn't seem like an indicator that he had gained any self-confidence, but hey, she wasn't about to say anything. She liked being paid. All that aside, the past month had been a lot less terrible than she had anticipated. Izuku had been genuinely excited about Izuku's idea and had commandeered a section of the lab to give it, alongside a handful of people, to Izuku for him to start testing. But it was fine. She was a big girl. She could deal with being annoyed. After all, she was an adult and could deal with these things in a healthy, responsible way. That is to say, she could spread the pain and annoy everyone else at her lab because it was her lab and she was their boss. With a smirk and a flash of her ID badge, the door to Izuku's section of the lab, looking exactly identical to every other door in the building, slid open with a hiss. Oh, Green, she called out lazily as she stepped into the room. Green was going to hate her. and she knew he was going to hate her, because she hated people when they messed with her early in the morning. And now she had just reminded herself that yes, it was very early in the morning. And of course, now that she was thinking about it, she was suddenly much more tired than she was a few seconds ago. Fuck psychology, it was her brain, it should work the way she wanted it to. She drank the caffeine chemical, give her awakeness. She hated the morning. Fuck, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. If you want to eat early, eat brunch. Anything earlier than that is too early. But she had a job to do, and if she wanted to get paid, she actually had to work. Hence why she was always one of the first at the lab in the morning. And hence why she was always in a bad mood until lunch. What? Just because she was lazy didn't mean she didn't do her work. No, she did her job and she was damn good at it too. The only reason Izuku grumbled about her slacking around but never actually threatened to fire her was because of one thing, one very fucking specific thing. Paperwork. She did her job, produced as many results as possible, reported to Izuku, and did all the important parts that running one of the boss labs required you to do. But paperwork. Bullshit. Literally all of that garbage was useless bullshit. With a capital B, a bureaucratic tangled mess of fucking bullshit that all the top lab heads had the smaller labs fill out. Because God knows Izuku would never bother managing the day-to-day events of every fucking lab he had scattered around Japan. So of course he would just pawn off all the work to someone else. All he cared about was that his deadlines were hit, and Lord knows how he got when people missed deadlines. Cough, literally traveling in person to some tiny lab in the rat's ass of nowhere because hero activity put them behind schedule. Cough. The paperwork was bullshit. It was useless beyond useless, held no value, and was fucking time consuming. She wasn't touching that with a 20-foot pole. No, she was letting it all pile up in actual, physical piles that gave Izuku an aneurysm every time he saw them. And she was gonna keep doing that until he caved and let her hire someone to do it all for her. Great, now she was thinking about mornings, and paperwork, and all the bullshit she had to deal with, and now she was in a pissy mood. Green, where are you? She shouted as she walked past yet another DNA sequencing machine, identical to the past 30 before it. Anyone home? Peeking her head through any doors she came across, it wasn't long until she came to the end of the lab branch, and the final door, which after a quick hiss of air revealed that anyone was in fact not home. HMPH. She huffed as she trudged into the final room. Green must have finally realized coffee isn't a direct substitute for sleep. She grumbled to herself as she fished around in her coat's pocket, eventually fishing out and popping a mint into her mouth. It only took him a month of falling asleep at his desk to realize it, although I'll gladly take him falling asleep at his desk every day over babbling about the damn UA entrance exam every day. And thank God he stopped going on about that. Future boss or not, I was going to throttle him if he brought up the fucking thing one more time. Her grumbling tempered off as her attention was distracted by the very obvious thing glowing in the middle of the room. After a few seconds of staring, and with a bit of a laugh, she realized that the large metal cylinder sitting menacingly in the middle of the room with a spotlight directly over it was a containment unit. Geez, Green, I know you're proud of that prototype serum you developed, and yeah, you're still getting used to the whole scientist bit, but you don't have to make it look like something out of a crappy 80s Mad Doctor movie. Walking to the obnoxiously obvious thing, she gave it a once-over before she ever so carefully jabbed her thumb into the big button on the side. With all the flair and over-the-top dramatics you would expect from something straight out of a crappy Hollywood movie, the cylinder shook, shifted, and slid open with a gout of white fog to reveal. It's empty. Yara scratched her head as she stared at the very empty spot where a vial of some kind was clearly supposed to be sitting. It wasn't like it was supposed to be empty. Izuku had been ecstatic when they finally managed to get a working prototype a few days ago and had babbled to her about it over their lunch break. Could he have moved it? If so, why? It wasn't like there was anything useful he could do with I. Well, think about it. Your problem is that you have two different goals, but only enough time to prepare for one. Suo. Do something that will do both at the same time. Bingo. Her breath caught as her conversation with Izuku all that time ago came back with full force. He made the thing to work with Namu immediately before the transformation process. And Namu before the process. Normal human bodies, without any artificially injected quirks. In other words, they're just like him. Yara stumbled back, gripping the edge of a nearby table for support, her brain flying at 100 miles a minute trying to figure out what she should do, what she could do, and what the hell she was going to do. She knew, from Izuku's previous babbling, that the UA exam was this month on the 14th at 7 a.m. sharp, and it was currently. She frantically pulled out her phone. Monday the 14th, 6:48 a.m. WTF. Okay, sadly the chapter is over, and if you enjoyed the video just leave a like, and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.